Hey everyone, I sincerely appreciate your support. If you enjoy my audiobooks, I would be truly grateful if you could subscribe to the channel. And if you'd like to support even further, you're welcome to become a Patreon member, where you can access audiobooks of novels as long as they are freely available on the internet. Your kindness and support mean so much. Thank you.
Bob, July 2182, Delta Eridani. Alert, activity outside normal parameters. I looked up, eyes wide. Guppy had standing orders to alert me if anything unusual occurred in or around the village. Of course Guppy, being Guppy, was short on details. I activated the village VR, and found myself in the middle of a full-scale battle. At first I thought it was a gorilloid attack, but quickly realized that no gorilloids were in evidence anywhere. Instead, Deltans battled Deltans with spears, clubs, and axes. I could see a dozen or more bodies, either unconscious or dead. Archimedes? I ordered the VR to zoom in on Archimedes and his family. To my relief, I found that their tent was just outside the edge of the riot. Archimedes and Buster stood with bows in hand and arrows nocked. Belinda and Diana stood to either side, holding spears. That sight, as much as anything else, unnerved me. Neither female had ever shown interest in anything weapon-related. I knew that father and son enjoyed a well-deserved reputation as expert shots, though. In fact, the edge of the battle seemed to particularly avoid the area immediately around his tent. Just as well. Fallout or not, if someone threatened Archimedes, they'd earn a visit from a personnel buster. Marvin popped in. What the hell? What caused this? No idea, Marv. I was working on something else when Guppy alerted me. I'll review the surveillance when I have time, but right now I just need to keep Archimedes safe. Marvin nodded, and took over control of a couple of busters just in case. We waited, tense. Archimedes and Buster drew back on their bows and took aim a couple of times, but in every case, whatever Deltans had attracted their attention thought better of it and moved off. Eventually the action died down. Deltans began backing away from the melee, still brandishing weapons. And now we had a chance to see the carnage. Property damage in the area of the riot was total, of course. Hopefully the owners had managed to flee the scene, but they'd be rebuilding from scratch. I counted 17 bodies lying motionless on the ground. More than twice that number were bleeding and calling for help. I wanted to throw up. What could possibly justify this? What could have set it off? Marvin and I exchanged glances and, without a word, I shut down the VR. I hope the medicine people can handle the number of patients, Marvin said. They'll have to, Marv. I couldn't do anything with drones, even if I could take the chance on exposing myself. Marvin sighed. I guess I understand why you're always going on about Bill's androids. It'd be great to have one available right now. Yeah, I know, but he's just not to that point yet. I keep bugging him, though. We sat down and I called up the video recordings for the last couple of hours. Marvin and I spent several full seconds reviewing them. Finally, we sat back and Marvin shook his head. Remember when we thought the Deltans were smart? Yeah, no kidding, I said. The stupid. It burns. The whole thing, the riot, the injuries, the deaths had been started by an argument over how to divvy up a small prey animal. Unbelievable. We stared into space for a few more moments, getting over the shock. Finally, I found my voice. I'm going to go with the idea of population pressure as a trigger, unless something better presents itself. And I'm going to have a talk with Archimedes. Asterisk asterisk asterisk. The drone sat on the ground in front of Archimedes, looking very much like a rock. Archimedes slowly turned a flint core over in his hands, pretending to examine it. Anyone observing him would assume he was working on his flint. I think you're right, Bobby, Archimedes said in a low voice. Things seem to be the most tense when everyone is home. When hunters are out, it's more peaceful. Not a surprise, Archimedes. We've known for a long time that animals can be more stressed when things get crowded, even animals that like to live in groups. So what do? Kick a bunch of people out of the village. I laughed. Archimedes, let me introduce you to something called marketing. You don't tell them they have to do it, you convince them that they want to do it, and that you don't want them to. Works especially well with teenagers. Archimedes looked thoughtful for a few seconds, then smiled back. I think I see where you're going. So how do we do this? I thought for a moment. Okay, here's what we need to do. Reverse psychology, I said. The translation routine rendered that as backwards trickery, and Archimedes looked confused. I sighed and tried again. Okay, here's a story from my home. A great leader wanted to introduce potatoes to his people, because they were a good thing to grow. He made announcements, he visited villages, but no one was interested or wanted to change. So he grew some himself and passed a law that potatoes were just for leaders, and villagers weren't allowed to eat them. Within a couple of hands of days, all his potatoes had been stolen and people were growing them. I watched Archimedes, trying to guess if he'd got the point. Archimedes frowned. Wait, they grew the tubers? Like, told the plants where to grow? Why not just go out and pick them? I sighed, a very human expression, but one that Archimedes had grown to understand. He grinned at my frustration. We've talked about farming, Archimedes. You can grow a lot of something in a small space if you're organized about it. But the point, I glared at him, but of course he couldn't see that, is that he got people to do something by telling them that they couldn't. Maybe your people aren't stubborn that way. Archimedes interrupted me with a laugh. Yeah, we are. Do you remember Buster when he was young? We shared a chuckle over the memories. Headstrong didn't begin to cover it. Okay Bobby, I get it. So we just tell the gangs they can't go to a new village. No, that won't really do it. We don't tell them anything at all. We start talking among ourselves about repopulating the other village sites, and doing it before the gangs get the same idea. And we talk loudly, and we do it where they might overhear. I paused to let him consider what I was saying. Get some of the council involved, to make it seem credible. Really, just pretend we're actually thinking about something like that, and start making plans. And this will work. Archimedes shook his head. I really wonder about your people. Want to place a bet? Archimedes grinned and shook his head. Howard. March 2193. Vulcan. The Enniscorthy Distillery Company was doing well. I looked over the spreadsheet. We were just barely keeping up with orders. And we insisted on COD, so no receivables issues. After some discussion, we'd decided we needed a planet-bound distillery, and we brought Stephen in to set that up. Bridget slapped the cover closed on her tablet, then set it on the desk. She worked her shoulder and spine a few times before leaning back in the chair. Stephen frowned in her direction. Backache again? You should see the doctor. Bridget answered with a non-committal smile, then looked towards my image on the phone. I guess you don't get backaches, right? Not unless I want to. We Bobs try to keep things as realistic as possible, most of the time, though. I don't need to let my muscles go stiff, but stretching them out feels good. She nodded, staring into space. You're effectively immortal, aren't you? How old are you personally, Howard? Well, I've only existed for 8 years subjective time as Howard. But my memories go back to original Bob's earliest memories as a child, maybe around 2 years old. So I remember around 29 years as original Bob, then 4 years as Bob 1 before he built his first set of clones, 4 years as Riker, 15 years as Charles, who was one of Riker's first clones, and 8 years since Charles cloned me. That's subjective time, as I said. There's a lot of relativistic time dilation in there. So, I've experienced 60 years of life. She made a face at me. That sounds complicated. Do you share thoughts with the other Bobs? No. When a Bob is cloned, he wakes up with the same memories as his parent at the moment the backup was made. After that, though, we each go our own way. Wow, I'm not sure I could handle that. Life is complicated enough. Well, what about as an afterlife? I smiled at her. Original Bob had to die first, before he became a replicant. Not much future in death, I'm told. On the other hand, your relatives stop calling. We do have one non-Bob, you know. Henry Roberts is the Australian probe replicant. She made a moo of something, maybe disapproval. Yeah, word is he's not fully bolted down. Well, Henry had some issues with sensory deprivation early on. We know how to handle it now. Any new replicants would probably be fine. I looked at her sideways. You thinking of applying? No, just curious. Stephen added, one eyebrow arched. Immortality sounds good, though. Riker. March 2178. Seoul. Hello, Mr. Vickers. The man at the other end of the call looked briefly surprised, but recovered quickly. Well, I'm impressed. There was some question about whether you'd ever manage to figure things out. I guess it was too much to hope for that you'd just destroy each other, instead. I smiled at him, the kind of smile a cat shows to a bird. Just teeth. You've been a busy little beaver. We've determined that the attacks on Brazil were also your work. I assume the idea was to try to foment another war, maybe knock off a few more people. So those deaths are also on you. Vickers waved a hand dismissively. They had the chance to go voluntarily. It's our duty to help them along. I don't expect you to understand. I doubt if you even care if anyone understands. My guess is, your announcements are more about ego than any desire to help or inform. Vickers grinned at me. Already descending to personal insults? I expected a little bit more from you. You flatter yourself. This isn't a duel of words. You aren't important enough. I'm satisfying my curiosity, nothing more. I carefully kept my face neutral. I didn't want to give this guy any satisfaction. And on that subject, this whole vehement thing seems more like a vehicle for you than a cause. People like you aren't joiners, unless you think the organization can benefit you. So what's your ultimate goal? A flash of anger crossed Vickers' face. If you must know, replicant, I'm your maker. I invented the replicant systems that you inhabit. The systems that Faith stole without as much as a nod. You don't deserve to exist, you shouldn't be alive. Vehement is a suitable tool for achieving that goal. I doubt that the members of Vehement will feel good about finding out they've been used. Don't be naive, replicant. They know I have my own motivations. They use me, I use them. Everyone gets what they want. And what does Ambassador Gerald get out of it? Gerald was working with me on the replicant systems in Australia. When you stole from me, you stole from him. He was a little more interested in the fiduciary rewards, typical small mind, but his hate is useful. I nodded. I had about everything I needed. Except the one last item. Permission. Homer committed suicide, you know. Couldn't live with what you'd made him do. Good. It's no more than he, and all of you, deserve. Permission received. And the people you killed, in Brazil and elsewhere? Do you care about them? I think I've already answered that question. Is there anything else that you wanted to say that might actually interest me? Before I continue the task of ending your existence? You can't stop me, you know. You're simply not good enough. Vickers gave me a condescending smile. Well, before I called you, I stenciled your name on a shipbuster. It should be there in about 20 seconds. Let's see if that's good enough. Vickers shook his head, the smile never wavering. And you'll have missed. You'll take out Vehement headquarters, but not me. I cocked my head sideways. Oh, you misunderstand. There's a buster heading there, too. But the one I'm talking about is coming in on your position, 55 kilometers north and 2 kilometers east of the Vehement base. Little red farmhouse, to all outside appearances. The smile left Vickers' face. His eyes went wide and he turned towards the window. The window that had allowed the drones to verify his actual location. Nobody thinks of everything. If you have some variation on a god, asshole, you might want to have a very quick conversation with him. And fuck you to hell. Vickers leaped from his chair just as the buster arrived. 1,000 pounds of high-tensile steel impacted the ground at planetary escape velocity. It wouldn't quite match the Barringer crater, but it was good enough for pest control. The video cut off as the entire area was vaporized. At the same moment, another impact 50-odd kilometers south created a matching crater. New Zealand would have a couple of new lakes, by and by. From a video window off to the side, Bill began a slow clap, echoed by Charles and Ralph. Asterisk asterisk asterisk. After all your talk, you're not above pummeling the earth when it's convenient. Gerald glared out of the video window at me. I had preempted today's UN session to announce the effective end of Vehement. I couldn't decide if Gerald was trying to bluff his way through this, or if he thought his connection with Vehement was still unknown. In any case, I wasn't in the mood. I stood up, placed my hands on my desk, and leaned into the camera. As I opened my mouth to speak, I realized I was too enraged even to form words. At that moment, if I'd had a shipbuster in position, Gerald would have died. I frame-jacked slightly, and took a few deep breaths. Just barely in control, I glared at him. Listen, you putrid, self-inflated bag of air. A good friend of mine is dead, driven to suicide by your friend and former co-worker with your full knowledge and cooperation. People in Brazil are dead for no other reason than to fulfill his sick political goals and to allay your butthurt. Again, with your knowledge and approval. And most of the rest of humanity is on starvation rations at the moment. So I am not in the mood to put up with your hypocritical yammering, and the only question right now is whether I let your own countrymen impeach and hopefully lynch you, or whether I come and get you myself, take you upstairs, and push you out an airlock. Why don't you mouth me off just one more time, you festering pile of crap? Go ahead. Just one more word. I glared out the video window at him. In the entire UN gathering, there was not so much as a cough. I held the moment for another heartbeat, then sneered at him. If you show up tomorrow, I'm going with Plan B. I'm just saying. With a flourish, I cut the connection. Charles grinned at me. Say, you're kind of scary when you get riled. I was too upset to smile back, but I did give him a shrug. That's for Homer. Bill. March 2189. Epsilon Eridani. Hey, batter, batter. Howard grinned at the outfield. Has that ever worked? Bob yelled back, it's traditional. Just go with it. I sailed a perfect underhand toss across the plate. Howard swung and totally whiffed. That's 3. Everyone advance. Howard shrugged, materialized a glove, and jogged to the outfield. We were generally able to field a pretty full scrub game these days, but we couldn't depend on enough people for 2 teams. Original Bob had never been much of a team player anyway, we all preferred scrub. More of a personal goals thing. Some of us could even hit the ball. I moved to the catcher position, and Loki took over as pitcher. Everyone else shuffled forward into the next position. As soon as we were all ready, Marvin came up to bat. Loki wound up and threw the ball right over the plate. About 10 feet over the plate. There were boos from the outfield. I stood up. Yeah, you've been practicing, my ass. That's with practice. At least it's going in the right direction now. Aha. In the interest of not walking every batter for the next half hour, I'm going to allow some guppy intervention. Put it across at people height, okay. I nodded to Marvin. On the next pitch, Marvin knocked it into the outfield, between center and right. Howard and Dopey looked at each other, each waiting for the other to move. Marvin, no dummy, was closing in on second before the 2 Stooges decided who should make an effort. By the time they had the ball into the infield, Marvin was at third. He took a moment to grin and thumb his nose. We were all fairly evenly matched in sports prowess, for obvious reasons. It came down to who was paying attention and who was letting their mind drift. We played for a subjective half hour, the agreed upon duration, then retired to the pub. The pub was hosted in the same matrix that handled Bob Moots, so it had more than enough processor power to handle all the Bobs and all the beer. And Hungry's coffee, of course. As always, we ended up talking shop. I had a group encircling me that wanted to talk about Bullwinkle. Bullwinkle? Really? Hey, why not? I grinned at Thor. The thing needed an external antenna array because of the required bandwidth. I just played with the aesthetics a bit. You've seen the pictures. Howard chuckled. It would be hard not to think of a moose. I think your sense of proportion was a little off when you built that thing. There were answering laughs from several people, plus some perplexed expressions from those who hadn't seen the pictures. So what's the long game, Bill? I shrugged. Nothing dramatic, Mario. It's an interesting project, and could be useful. It would give us a physical presence, Howard interjected. I remember Riker being frustrated sometimes, working with the enclaves. And it's even more so for me. We have all this interaction with the ephemerals Renobis. Please don't use that word, Howard. I gave him the stink eye, and he looked embarrassed for a moment. It's not intended to be derogatory, Bill. It's just. Then just say humans. Sure, it's not derogatory, but it is dismissive. And it will eventually shape an attitude that their lives matter less. Howard gave me a blank look, then shrugged. Anyway, the point is that I could be so much more effective if I could, walk among them. Flying around, looking like a giant pillbug, and giving orders through a speaker is just incredibly limiting. Politicians did it for centuries, someone muttered. I grinned and said, that's pill, not pillbug. There are even better words. Anatomical. Scatological. I glared around the group. If you guys break out into Gilbert and Sullivan, I'm leaving. We all laughed and the tension was broken. But I was still left with a weird twinge of foreboding. Eventually, the Moose groupies broke up and joined different conversations. I wandered around the pub, listening in but not engaging. Topics ranged from the impending arrival of the latest colony ships to Omicron to Eridani, the chances of a colony being successful on Clown Car Planet, wildlife on Vulcan, speculation on the others, and my asteroid mover project. I moved in to listen on the last item. Mario stopped what he was saying and turned to me. Bill, we were just wondering about the capacity of the mover plates. How big can you go? I grinned at him. This was one of my favorite subjects. Right now, we could probably apply a vector to something about half the size of Ceres. So, about 500 kilometers in diameter. But it would be a tiny, tiny vector, in the range of 1/100th of a g. I thought for a moment. How big can we go? Well, you keep adding plates to get more push, but that makes control of plate interactions more complex. It's just an engineering problem, though. We're learning how to tune the drive so that most of the energy goes into moving the payload instead of keeping the plates in position. There's no theoretical maximum that I've been able to find. So we could eventually move stars. Mario grinned at me, obviously trolling. I laughed. Sure, in a million years or so. Theoretically possible doesn't mean easy. I nodded to the group and moved on. Another group was discussing the expanding bubble of the Bobiverse. In principle, we should be approaching a 40 light-year radius by now, but reproduction tended to be uneven and spotty. It was generally accepted that we Bobs were only marginally enthusiastic about cloning more of ourselves. I shrugged. The others might change that. The mood continued for many objective minutes hours in our time sense. Eventually, though, Bobs started to pay their respects and pop out. It had been a good game. Okay, not really, but a good post-game wrap-up. I smiled to myself. That was really the point. Asterisk asterisk asterisk. I have something to show you. Garfield was trying and mostly failing to keep a huge grin off his face. Well, okay, not bad news, then. Alright, Gar, I'll bite. What cha got? I give you my answer to Bullwinkle. With a flourish, he popped up a video window. Rocky. That does not look like Rocky. More like Rodden. Hey, if we're going to get pedantic, Garfield said, laughing, the real Bullwinkle was bipedal. If we're going to get pedantic, the real Bullwinkle was a cartoon. So, does it fly? In theory. The android stood in the hold of a cargo drone, still attached to its support cradle. Metadata told me that the drone was parked on the surface of Ragnarok. Garfield opened the cargo bay door, revealing the bare rock of the planet's surface. His avatar froze as he switched his consciousness to the android. Another window popped up, showing Rocky's viewpoint. Rocky detached itself from the cradle and waddled to the door and out into the Ragnarok wilderness. The communications relay drone stayed with it and provided another viewpoint. The android was not graceful on foot. Not really surprising. The still relatively thin air of Ragnarok would require a lot of wing surface in order to lift off, even with the powerful artificial musculature. But walking wasn't the point. Garfield set himself, opened his massive wings, and launched. Several powerful flaps were sufficient to get off the ground, and he steadily gained altitude. The comms drone kept pace, keeping Rocky centered in the frame. The other window showed the view from Rocky's eyes. Honestly, it wasn't impressive from any objective metric. Drones could fly faster, higher, with less energy, and were more maneuverable. But based on my experience with Bullwinkle, Garfield would be experiencing something entirely different from flying a drone. Things went well for the first 2 minutes. Then Garfield ran into some turbulence. Maybe a crosswind, maybe a downdraft, who knew? But Rocky went into a roll that approached 90 degrees. He attempted to correct, and rolled farther in the opposite direction. The motion kept reinforcing itself, and every attempt by Garfield to get it under control either made it worse or introduced pitch and yaw. Finally, Garfield folded his wings and went into free fall. This stopped the harmonic cycle, but he was now rapidly losing altitude. Maybe time to start flying again, buddy. I blushed as soon as the words left my mouth. Nothing like stating the obvious to help out. Thanks, Bill, I might just try that. Garfield was taking my foot-in-mouth moment with good grace. I resolved to try shutting the hell up as a strategy. Garfield stuck out his wings just the smallest amount, trying to establish stability. It seemed to be working for a few moments. Then the rushing air snapped his wings out like a parachute opening up. Every status light went red, and Garfield screamed. I pulled back to VR, to find Garfield sitting hunched forward, hugging himself, a wild look in his eyes. He took a few deep breaths, then glared at me. I guess we did too good of a job of setting up the neural feedback. That hurt. I nodded. In theory, that's what we want. But maybe we should put a limiter on it. Yeah, let's do that. Garfield stood and stretched carefully. Where's Rocky? Still on his way down. Wings are snapped, though, as is his keel. I don't think you want to be in there for the landing. I pulled up the video feed from the trailing drone, which was still faithfully following the tumbling android. Rocky was definitely junk, and Garfield hadn't thought to add a parachute. I looked at Garfield, and he shrugged. Well, it's not the fall that kills you, he said, with a rueful half-smile on his face. We watched as Rocky hit the ground. Every status indicator went dead, and the trailing drone picked up the loud, hollow thump of impact. I instructed the cargo drone to head for the impact site and pick up the pieces. I turned to Garfield. So, other than the unfortunate ending, how did it feel? Incredible. I was flying. Actually flying, not just working a control panel. I think hang gliding might come close, but nothing else. I smiled at him. I could understand the feeling. It's a lot more real than VR. Yeah, and what we've got here will allow Bobs to interact with the real world. As beings, I mean, not as floating cameras. You're right, Garfield. In an emergency, I think we could even use them with the comms drone hanging around, although that's messy. Garfield gazed into space for a few moments. I wonder if we're missing the big picture. Take this to its logical conclusion and we could replace our heaven hulls with bodies. Like mechanical versions of Van Vogt's Silkies. That was a mind-boggling thought. Yay, like that. Bill, we may be the beginning of a new species. Homo sidereal. The Toto just keeps getting longer and longer. Let's see if we can get rid of the trailing communication drone first, okay? Garfield smiled and shrugged. So, you know what comes now, right? What? He grinned and held the beat. Rocky 2. I hate you, Howard. August 2193. Vulcan. You want what? Riker frowned and leaned back in surprise. I waited for him to finish overacting. Any information on creating a replicant? We have the replicant hardware and all, but we're a little light on the part where you start with a body and end up with a recording. Why the flaming hell would you want that? I shrugged. No particular reason. I just think it's a gap in our knowledge base. If we wanted to create a new replicant, right now we couldn't. Basically, we're it. Riker gave me the hairy eyeball, and a caption flashed below him, at waist height, not sure if joking or serious. I laughed. Will rarely attempted a joke, especially since Homer, but when he did, it was always funny. What's really going on, Howard? It's nothing, really, Will. I'm not imminently intending to replicate someone, if that's what you're thinking. It's just that we only have the one generation of humans to get the information from. After that, we'd be reduced to reverse engineering, with all the failures and false starts that implies. It has nothing to do with Dr. Sheehy at all. I kept my face deadpan. Not particularly. It would seem there was no privacy at all in Bobtown. Anyway, we were just friends. We're just friends. Will looked at me, unmoving for a few more milliseconds, then nodded his head and looked away. Okay, Howard, I'll bring it up with the appropriate people at this end. I take it you've talked to Cranston already, about any info that Faith might still have on the process. Yeah. He, of course, wanted a crapton of concessions in return, before I'd even find out if he had anything worthwhile. Well, hell. Will grinned at me. Why didn't you say so? Doing an end run around Cranston is all the motivation I need. He finished his coffee, gave me a nod, and vanished. I figured that would work. Just needed to not sell it too hard, or he would have gotten suspicious. I pulled up the medical report that I'd intercepted, labeled Bishihi. I examined the scan for the 100th time, hoping maybe this time it would be different. *****. Cranston's face glowed a most unhealthy shade of red in the video window. I tried not to smile. Damn it, your product is showing up in our territory. I've told you we're not interested. I've forbade you from selling your devil's brew here. I want it stopped. Nigerian Nairoes. He was mad. Cursing and everything. Excellent. Minister Cranston. Oh, it's President Cranston, now, isn't it? Anyway, sir, I am not selling or even offering any of my alcohol-themed products in New Jerusalem. However, your attempt at controlling the supply has likely driven the price up high enough that it's being brought in from Spitsbergen by unorthodox methods. I have to admit, their consumption does seem rather high. Then put a stop to it. Absolutely, sir. I'll put a line on the label, not for resale in New Jerusalem. That should do it. After all, smugglers and bootleggers are always law-abiding. Amazing. I wouldn't have thought it possible for his face to get redder. Live and learn. But he wasn't finished, apparently. And I will lodge an official protest at the idea of you using the colony equipment to engage in private enterprise. You are profiteering off of our backs. I shook my head in amazement. First, I made all of those donuts and gave them to the colonies free of charge. Second, I'm not using one of those donuts. I made my own. And third, not that it's actually relevant, but we're gradually moving production planetside. Once that's done, I'll add the donut to the colony inventory. Tread carefully, replicant. You might find access to your families restricted. That was not an unexpected tactic, but it didn't make it any easier to take. I had my response ready. Mr. President, you signed an agreement before we shipped you here that established certain inalienable rights for your citizens. You also entered into a personal agreement with Riker concerning specifics of our family. Start reneging on that, and this will escalate quickly. We spent several seconds in a stare-off before Cranston broke eye contact. Very well. We will pursue the border options, for now. However, this is not over. He reached out of frame and broke connection. Wow. I turned to the video window showing Riker's image. Wow, indeed, Will. Should we be setting up an escape plan for the family? As one alternative. Will stared into space for a few moments. Another would be to just remove the irritant. My eyebrows rose. The whiskey. No, you twit. Cranston. Now that was a plan I could get behind. Rudy. February 2190. Epsilon Indy. I did a test ping to Riker, to check my Tau. I'd been doing this regularly for the last couple of days, waiting for it to drop to the point where I could maintain a VR connection. We'd been exchanging emails for a few weeks, but a tradition of sorts had developed where the moment when a traveling Bob could maintain a VR session with a stationary Bob was considered a rival. It was more significant than actual entry into the system. I received a response, then Riker popped into VR. Hey, Rudy. Good to hear from you. Where's Edwin? Still not slowed down enough. I moved ahead so I could get a look at KKP. I'll be there in about 8 days, and Exodus 6 will be another week. Riker nodded. Call me back when you've had a close look at KKP. *****. The planet itself wasn't particularly memorable. It had oceans, it had land. The day and night cycles, though, had imposed a certain chaos on the evolution of life. Based on Linus notes and what I could see from quick drone flyabouts, the planet had gone through something equivalent to the Cambrian explosion, then kept every single branch. Both plants and animals came in a huge number of phyla. At first glance, it could appear to a non-scientist as if every individual plant and animal was its own species. Linus had theorized that the weird light cycles created a large number of niches and opportunities for competition. This included several different versions of photosynthesis, optimized for different parts of the spectrum, which resulted in what I suspected was the real reason for the name. The planet had more colors than a patchwork quilt. Even the oceans came in different hues, due to the different breeds of plankton. Between the sun's path through the sky over the course of the year, and the extra heat and light supplied by the Jovian primary, days, nights, and even seasons would be hard to differentiate. I chuckled, perusing the notes. Linus had tentatively named the Jovian Big Top. I doubted either name would survive the colony's first general meeting, honestly. But it was fun while it lasted. As had become habit with the Bobs, Linus had left some mining drones and an auto factory behind to process raw ore from asteroids into refined metals, and left them in orbit with a beacon attached. Epsilon Indy wasn't a rich system, but the automation had still managed to accumulate several 100,000 tons of material. It would be a good start. I pinged Edwin. I received an invitation and popped into his VR. Hi, Rudy. Edwin. I sat down and accepted a coffee from Jeeves. Edwin's VR was, in my opinion, one of the better ones. He'd created a living area with huge windows on one wall that looked out on whatever view was really available outside his vessel. That would have been a little boring during the trip, but now it showed Big Top as he approached orbital insertion. Edwin was still several million miles away, but this was a Jovian planet. It already dominated the sky. So, what do we have? He asked. This planet is like that Harrison novel, I answered. What was it? Oh, yeah, Death World. Where everything was deadly. That bad. I waved a hand. Possibly I exaggerate. But the ecosystem is very, very competitive. I know they are making do with a fence on Vulcan, but for here, I'm leaning more towards domes. Not for atmosphere, but to keep out the ickies. Edwin laughed. Yeah, there's a technical term for you. Ickies. No, it's actually a species name. I smirked in response. Blame Linus. Ickies are a kind of flying leech with multiple suckers. I think the name is appropriate. Edwin started to look a little green. Oh, lovely. I might just start a betting pool on whether the colonists take one look around and start screaming at me to take them back. But, you know, according to Howard, the Cupid bug is well on the way to being eradicated. Maybe a drone specifically designed as an icky killer will do the trick. Geez. Edwin pinched the bridge of his nose. On the plus side, once I unload, I get to go back to Earth. He looked up at me and grinned. You, not so much Beta. I responded with one finger. Bob. September, 2182, Delta Eridani. The Deltan Council, including Archimedes and Arnold, watched as almost 100 Deltan adolescents marched away from camp, yelling insults and challenges at the onlookers. The council members did a creditable job of maintaining straight faces, some even managing to look upset. When the tail end of the parade disappeared into the bush, Arnold slapped Archimedes on the back and said, "That was great." He then leaned in close and said, in a low voice that only Archimedes and the spy drone could hear, "I'm sure Bobby had a hand in it." Archimedes' eyes got wide and he looked very concerned, but Arnold just shook his head and said, "I don't need to know. I'm just glad it worked." Other council members gave Archimedes a nod or a smile as they dispersed. Marvin and I looked at each other, then began laughing. The worst troublemakers in Camelot, completely convinced that it was their idea, had just marched off to one of the old abandoned village sites to repopulate it. And Archimedes was getting the credit for thinking up and masterminding the plot. Reverse psychology, not just for humans. Marvin lost his smile and got a worried expression. Of course, it fixes the immediate problem, but everything we do seems to have side effects down the road. What if they go to war with Camelot in a few years? Don't borrow trouble, Marv. I sighed and sat back. Sure as hell, something will hit the fan, but let's worry about it when it happens. But he was probably right. Howard. September 2193. Vulcan. I texted Stefan for the third time in the last hour. I couldn't call him anymore, as he'd blocked voice calls from me after my last attempt. His reply came back within a minute. Still in surgery. Calm down. Aren't you supposed to be a computer? Okay, that stung. Well, not really, but point taken. I took a deep breath and attempted to relax. Bridget's surgery was already running overtime. There was no scenario in which that was a good thing. I tried distracting myself with a few of the many projects I had on the go, but I couldn't maintain concentration. In desperation I checked in on Bill. Guppy indicated that he was running Bullwinkle, so wouldn't be responding except in an emergency. I doubted that me freaking out really qualified, so I didn't bother leaving a message. I had a quick peek at his terraforming blog, but there was nothing new. I was seriously considering just frame jacking down, when Stefan called me. Hi Howard. You can stop with the worrying now. She's out of surgery, and the doctors say it looks positive. The tumor was a little more spread than they expected, so it took longer to excise. But all good. I thanked Stefan, traded some meaningless comments, then hung up. I sat back, took several deep breaths, until I thought that I had it under control. And without so much as a by the way, I leaned forward and started to sob. Just friends. Asterisk asterisk asterisk. There had been a lot of improvements in medicine since the days of original Bob, but some things hadn't changed all that much. Cancer could be nipped in the bud if caught early, but there was no vaccination yet. And the knife was still often the only effective treatment. This was unacceptable. What the hell had they been doing for 100 years? I resolved to look into it when I had a chance. Meanwhile, Stefan sat at her bedside. He dialed me in through the room phone. While I waited, I sent a quick email to Bill to hurry the hell up with the androids. I knew it wouldn't help, but it was action of a sort. Stefan and I traded an occasional desultory comment, but neither of us was in the mood for more. Finally, he turned to me. I'm going to stretch and refuel. Some of us still have to eat. I'll tell them not to come in and hang up the phone on you. With a nod, he got up, leaving me to watch over Bridget. If you've ever watched someone come out of anesthesia, it's not like waking up. That can be sexy, under the right circumstances. Bridget looked more like a drowned rat that had just been given CPR. I made a note to myself to keep that observation private. She finally opened one eye, looked around, and spotted me peering at her from the phone. She squinted, grimaced at me, and said, "Geez, what do I need to do to get a day off?" I laughed, then had to override the video image to keep from embarrassing myself. My image froze for a couple of milliseconds, not nearly long enough for her to notice. When I'd recovered control, I grinned at her. Not to worry, sales are good. This year you can take Christmas off, and even use up some extra coal. I was considering what I would say next, when Stefan walked back in, coffee in hand. Bridget's face lit up, and Stefan smiled when he saw she was awake. He exclaimed, "Mom Annette," and pulled up a chair as close to the bed as he could manage. He took her hand, and I ceased to exist for any practical purpose. How did I miss this? We made small talk. I don't remember it. I'm sure I could play back my logs, but why? I made my excuses as soon as I could without appearing to be acting odd, then retreated to my VR. Right, well, what did I expect? Bridget was a human, an ephemeral. Her plans would include a home, a family, a place in society. The more I thought about it, the more I realized that I'd been very carefully avoiding thinking about certain issues. And one of the issues that had just come into focus was that I was an outsider. I saw the world through video calls and chat windows and drone cameras. I really shouldn't have been surprised that something could develop right under my nose. I materialized a bucket and kicked it as hard as I could. Strangely, it helped. Mulder, March 2195. Poseidon, ETA Cassiope. Poseidon. Good name. Marcus shook his head in mock amazement, then took a sip of his Coke. I've had a look at your summary and notes. Pretty cool. I really want to see a kraken. I smiled in response. You won't be disappointed. I promise. Anyway, right now, I'm just settling into a polar orbit. Monty is about a week away, and should be down to VR Tau by now. I'll ping him. Marcus settled more comfortably into his seat and sipped thoughtfully on his straw. For some reason, Marcus had never taken to coffee. He preferred his virtual caffeine in carbonated form. Well, whatever. At that moment, Monty popped in and materialized another chair for himself. He accepted a coffee from Jeeves and looked around. My VR wasn't particularly inspired, as such things go. I'd never felt the need to come up with something new and imaginative. I had a variation on Bob 1's library, but with high windows for more sunlight, and more casual furniture. So, anyway, things grow big in the water, in direct proportion to the available space. A global ocean, 800 kilometers deep, makes for some very large nasties. Monty looked concerned. They couldn't take down a mat, could they? Oh, hell no. Nothing's that big. But on this planet, a day at the beach is likely to be fatal even if you don't get wet. The kraken in particular has tentacles, and one of its feeding strategies is to grab animals off the edges of mats. Right. Monty nodded. Well, the mats are a short-term solution, anyway. The colonists will be building floating cities for the long term. We'll just need tough enough perimeter defenses to keep them out. So, I looked at him, changing the subject. When are you going to decant the colonists? I'm waking the setup management team right now. Couple of hours, they'll be ready to start. Unlike the land-based colonies in other systems, the teams here would be working from the colony transport Monty for a considerable time, and the civilian population likely wouldn't start to emerge for a good 6 months. Future shipments would have it a little easier. We had a number of variations on floating city plans on file. Free-floating cities had been a bit of a thing for a while in the 22nd century. Of course, they had access to land-based support, and they didn't have to deal with predators up to 100 meters long, with tentacles. Discussions with the prep team hadn't taken as long as I expected. I guess there'd been a lot of planning before they'd launched from Earth system, and there hadn't been any surprises at this end yet. I had tagged all the biggest mats with beacons, so we knew what was available. The prep team picked a couple of large mats that were drifting in the north tropical current. They were both well over 100 square km in area, complete with commensal ecosystems. Within a day, we were ferrying down supplies and equipment. The colonists, a conglomerate of enclaves from Micronesia, the Maldives, Vanuatu, and St. Lucia, would have to be awoken in small groups as living space was constructed on the mats. It would be about a year before Monty would be able to leave. Marcus would be staying here to help with the colony setup after Monty headed back to Earth. He would build a fleet of human-crewed spaceships so that the colonists wouldn't be dependent on us. With no land on Poseidon, all industry would have to be space-based, and Marcus didn't want to play permanent taxi to the world. Marcus popped in without warning. We just lost another settler. Kraken. Marcus nodded and sat down. He took a moment to give Spike a chin scratch, then materialized a Coke. I'm sure Chief Draper is pissed, Monty said. We have to come up with some better defense. We could go through the entire setup team pretty fast. Or we could reconsider flying cities. Marcus grinned at me. Oh, for Pete's sake, Marcus. There are no plans in the libraries for flying cities. Yeah, but you could start with Bill's asteroid mover and I bet you could end up with something that would hold a city in the air. Let us know when you have a design, there, Marcus. Marcus made a dismissive gesture and changed the subject. Well, we can't stick to the status quo. The Krakens will just keep getting bolder. But building floating cities without an established land base of some kind is going to require some inventive rethinking with circumflex new Thailand bot. Can we beef up the protection around the floating mats? Monty asked. In response, Marcus popped up a schematic view of the island. Here's the problem. The Kraken are able to wriggle a tentacle through the mat and grab inland prey. Native life has figured out how to tread lightly, but humans have 2 left feet, so to speak. Plus, I added, all the equipment makes a racket. Monty rubbed his forehead, looking disgusted. Any ideas? Serious ones, I mean. Actually, yes. Marcus nodded. I can adapt some library plans to construct an electrified net that discharges on contact. 1,000,000 volts or so should provide some negative reinforcement. Or a watery grave. Either is good. I nodded. Nice. Marcus grinned at me. Now the bad news. To build the net, and to build the equipment necessary to deploy it, will add 6 months to our schedule. Draper will take that about as well as Butterworth would. Moo, I replied. Yay, like that. Monty groaned. I'm not thrilled either. It means I'm stuck here for another 6 months. Suck it up. You're immortal. Bite me? We all grinned at each other. The routine exchange of insults felt sort of reassuring. Well, Marcus finally said. Guess we'd better go break the news. What do you mean, we, Kimosabe? Marcus laughed and popped out. Loki. November 2195. 82 Eridani. We flew straight into the 82 Eridani system without attempting any finesse. We were here to kick some ass and, more importantly, to finish the job that Khan and his group had started. 12 Bobs, with version 4 vessels featuring even more heavily shielded reactors than the 3s, and total radio silence. Special carbon black exteriors ensured an almost zero albedo, and we had borrowed from the military to arrive at profiles that were virtually invisible to radar. The only place we were vulnerable was radar detection, and as far as we knew we had the range advantage in that area. There was no point in being subtle, but being tricky was definitely on the menu. We spread a net of observation drones in front of us, coasting with minimal systems. Interspersed with them were shipbusters and decoy drones. SCUT connections with every drone and buster guaranteed instant communications. Whether the enemy detected our outriders first or us first, we could still throw a surprise at them. We didn't know, of course, whether there were any meteori left from the first expedition, or, for that matter, whether the Medeiros that escaped at Alpha Centauri might have made his way here. Best case, there would be nothing but the Brazilian Amos, still patrolling the system looking for things to blow up. We'd brought plenty of decoys to cover that eventuality as well. Yep, we were loaded for bear. We just had to hope that Medeiros hadn't invented a bigger, better bear. Ultra-low intensity version 4 SUDAR wouldn't even be detectable to traditional SUDAR receivers unless the listener was specifically looking for it. We came into the system like a person in a pitch-black room, carefully feeling our way forward and ready to pull in our toes at the slightest sign of an obstacle. We needn't have bothered. Medeiros might not have a bigger bear, but he definitely had some kind of passive early warning system that we couldn't detect. We were met by a solid wall of oncoming ordnance. The first engagement looked like a Republic vs Empire Star Wars shoot 'em up. And again Medeiros was using cloaking technology. But this time, we were ready for that. It looked like Medeiros continued to depend on nukes as his main weapon. 4 enemy drones detonated simultaneously as soon as they were within range of our defenders. Nothing was going to survive being up close and personal with an exploding fission bomb, but in space the shockwave was a strictly short-range issue. At any distance, the main force of destruction would be the EMP, and we'd engineered for that, this time. It took Medeiros a dozen ineffective nukes before he caught on to the fact that we weren't affected. At that point, flying nukes started trying to get in closer. We spiked them, we busterized them, we confused them with our own set of decoys, and we watched and listened for the source of the commands. Then Medeiros showed that he had learned from our last encounter. A wave of attack drones came at us that were completely different from the traditional flying nukes. Our attempts to spike them just bounced off. Oh, this is bad. What's spike-proof? Possibly something with a defensive magnetic field, Elmer replied. We'll need to use busters on these guys. Good call, Elmer. Okay, everyone, deploy half your busters forward. Any enemy drone that survives a spiking gets busterized. A flood of busters accelerated toward the oncoming ordnance. We carefully staggered them so that Medeiros couldn't catch multiple busters with one nuke. The first contact produced so much carnage between detonations and debris that we couldn't resolve the battlefield for several precious seconds. Then I remembered reading the report on Riker's first battle in Solution Scatter. Watch for passive incoming. I sent a SUDAR pulse ahead as I turned and accelerated at 90 degrees. Sure enough, the ping showed a massive number of dense objects hurtling towards us. It was too late for 3 of us, though. Jeffrey, Milton, and Zeke disappeared from the status board as their signals cut off. The only good thing about this attack strategy, if something could be considered good, was that the passive ordnance couldn't chase us. With the field now clearing, we could verify that there wasn't another wave on the way. At least, not yet. I wasn't going to make any assumptions. Our second wave of busters now engaged the remaining enemy drones. Up close the busters had an advantage, and we recorded almost 100% kills. A momentary lull in encounters allowed me to scan the battlefield. For the moment, there was no movement. The question now was, did Medeiros have more in reserve? A second SUDAR sweep showed another wave of enemy ordnance coming in. We weren't anywhere near done, yet. A quick count showed Medeiros had more drones than we had busters. This put us at a definite disadvantage. Plasma spikes helped to even things out with unprotected drones, though, and since building nukes was expensive of time and resources, I had to hope some of that incoming consisted of decoys. Has anyone picked up any transmissions from Medeiros, yet? A chorus of NOS came back to me. Damn. One of our planned strategies was to triangulate on the Brazilian craft's transmissions. Our last battle with him had shown the wisdom of cutting off the head, but Medeiros seemed to have learned from last time in that area, as well. I accepted a call from one of the crew. Hey, Loki. What's up, Vern? I've been doing an analysis of Medeiros' attack strategy. I don't think he's actively controlling the battle. Pre-programmed decision trees? If so, those are very smart, Amos. We saw them running through some sophisticated strategies. I think it's a bit of both. Oh, great. That's helpful. I could hear the smile in Vern's voice. Well, it is, kind of. He's probably set up a number of different battle scenarios and canned responses with different goal weightings. He changes response trees with a very short command sequence, maybe a couple of bytes and a checksum, too short to triangulate on. Then the Amos are on their own. Now that was interesting. In that case, he can only have one response tree going at a time, right? Correct, unless he's giving separate orders to different squads. And in that case, I think we'd have picked up on multiple transmissions. Excellent. I considered for a millisecond. Attention everyone. We are going to split into groups, by the numbers, and execute strategies 1 through 4. Let's see how well the Ami pilots handle too many different scenarios. Vern and Surly, activate the radio jammers. Everyone acknowledged, and we split off in various directions, each vessel accompanied by its personal cloud of drones and busters. For a wonder, it appeared to work. Some of the Brazilian Amos seemed to be coping, but more of them became confused. There was a small group that would rush towards a heaven contingent, stop, rush towards another one, then reverse and repeat. Gotta love Amos. And then Medeiros panicked. Unable to regain control of his drones, he cranked up his radio transmission power and attempted to outshout the jammer. He might as well have put on a hat with a flashing red light. Vern and Surly immediately released the Death Squad, a batch of busters specifically programmed to latch onto the meteorite with SUDAR and not to let go until they were space junk. The Death Squad shot forward at close to 40 G, and I imagined them yelling "we" in high-pitched minion voices. In next to no time the Death Squad surrounded the meteorite. There were 2 Brazilian vessels and destroyed them. However, this time we were going to be thorough. As soon as they got the recall order, the busters took off after the Brazilian drones. There would be no peace until every piece of Brazilian equipment in the system was obliterated. Asterisk asterisk asterisk. It took a further 18 hours to track down every fusion signature in the system. I took a video call from Elmer. Looks clear now. Anything still alive will have gone to ground. Time to implement Phase 3. You bet, Elmer. Again I switched to command channel. Okay, everyone. Phase 3. Surly, release the Hunter Seekers. I heard several snickers, hastily suppressed. Dune didn't have a particularly good reputation among the Bobs. The Hunter Seekers were essentially drones optimized for long-distance searching. Their SUDDARs were able to reach to almost 4 light hours. By overlapping search fields, they could get increased definition of anything they ran across. It would take a week, but they would cover every inch of the star system, identify any refined metal up to a kilometer deep underground, and relay that information to busters for remedial action. Meanwhile, we examined the battle records. That's an Alpha Centauri Medeiros, Hank said. You sure? Absolutely. Hank pulled up images of the 82 Eridani Medeiros group from our first battle, then images of the Alpha Centauri Medeiros group as recorded by Calvin and Gaku. The differences were subtle, but the two probes were definitely based on slightly different designs. It came as no surprise that the Brazilians would have worked on improvements even as they were building and launching probes. Apparently the first and second probes to leave Earth had been hold on. That would require 3 different launches from Earth. One to Epsilon Eridani to fight Bob 1, one to Alpha Centauri, and one to 82 Eridani. Sure enough, my memory of Bob's Medeiros was yet a third design variant. That meant that we couldn't depend on our estimates of the total meteorary in the universe. Life just sucked, sometimes. I announced this information to the squad, and got the expected groans. Okay, guys. Looks like Medeiros will continue to be our Snidely Whiplash, showing up in every episode to set traps and twirl his mustache. But meanwhile, we have this system. Let's split up and finish the survey. You know that there are colony ships on the way to Vulcan that can be redirected here with minimal delay. We want to get that word to them as soon as possible, if it's warranted. And let's keep in mind that Bill wants tech samples. We're looking especially for cloaking technology and fission bomb designs. This was something all the Bobs could get behind enthusiastically. War was something we did reluctantly and only by necessity. Exploration, well, that was fun. Asterisk asterisk asterisk. Wow, Milo really did hit the jackpot. Vern grinned from ear to ear as he popped up survey results. The rest of us nodded, grunted, or muttered hell yes according to our temperaments. This was indeed a major find. 2 habitable planets, one to the inside edge of the habitable zone, and one to the outside edge. The outer planet had 2 moons, one of which was also habitable, although barely. The air was very thin. It would be like living in the Andes. You'd need to acclimate over time. Except that Bill had taken on terraforming as a hobby. I grinned at the thought, producing quizzical looks from some of the others. The moon's atmosphere would outgas over geological timescales, but we could replenish it over human timescales. It would require ongoing maintenance, but it had been a long time since humanity had just accepted the environment as we found it. We bumped up the priority on biocompatibility analysis. If everything checked out, this could be worth redirecting in-flight colony ships for. Enhance your reading experience, Howard. April 2195. Vulcan. The bride was beautiful. The groom was French. And I wanted to be drunk. I even talked to Bill about modifying the VR. He told me to quit being an idiot. An idiot is what I was being. Hello, Earth to Howard. Computer, remember? I was on my best behavior, wished them well, made small talk, and left as soon as I could. I made a call to one of 2 lawyers doing business in Landing. Yes, lawyers. Some things you just can't get rid of. Ms. Benning picked up right away. Good afternoon, Mr. Johansson. I have the paperwork completed, and everything has been properly filed. We just need a few signatures from the other 2 parties, and everything will be legal. I nodded. Any issues with me not being, human? Nothing is ever settled in law, as you may well know. She smiled into the phone. But filing 2 sets of paperwork, one based on you having a legal standing and one based on the converse, should take care of any but the most determined challenges. Thank you. Forward the paperwork to the brodeurs. I'll make sure they sign it and return it promptly. I hung up the phone and sighed deeply. Once they signed the papers, Mr. and Mrs. Brodeur would own 100% of the distillery. It would be my wedding present to them. Plus, it would leave me with no ties to Vulcan. And that would be good. Asterisk asterisk asterisk. Dexter popped into my VR, raised his coffee in salute, and sat down. He had escorted Exodus 7 to Vulcan and had taken my offer to stay on as resident Bob. He appraised me without speaking for several milliseconds. I waited, content with the silence. So, you're joining the freakin' Foreign Legion. Could you be any more cliché? I laughed. I couldn't help it. I guess I am. On both counts. What's it to ya? I thought being a replicant meant all that was behind us. Maybe in 100 years, Dexter. Or maybe 1,000. They're ephemerals. I'm just going to make a point of remembering that. I gestured vaguely at the star map I'd been perusing. And I'm outta here. Sam from Exodus 3 envied me being able to stay in one place and watch it grow. Now you get to try it for yourself. I want to go see what's out there. Dexter nodded slowly. I've been reading your blog. Good detail. It shouldn't be too hard to step in. Have you picked a target system yet? Not really. I've got several likely looking targets. We're far enough away from the others that it isn't an immediate concern. I'll probably just flip a coin. I leaned forward. First, I have one last set of goodbyes to take care of. You've got the keys, Dexter. Good luck. Dexter stood, nodded to me, and popped out. The parting wasn't as final with the Bobs, of course. I'd still be available by SCUT if I kept my towel low enough, and I'd be available in any case once I reached my destination. Now for the hard part. Asterisk asterisk asterisk. Stephen passed the documents back and forth from hand to hand as if they were burning him. His gaze kept shifting, to everywhere except my image on the phone. Bridget looked as though she was fighting back tears. I couldn't tell if she was just upset about me leaving, or if she suspected some of the reasons. A with tilde B epsilon. It's not the distillery, Howard, Stefan said. It's a generous thing you do. The company is becoming one of the biggest on Vulcan. But why? Not even why leave, but why give it up? Like I said, Stefan, it's a wedding gift. I really have no need for money, and I think it's easier if I cut all ties. Stefan nodded and stood silently for a few moments. Then he looked at the phone finally and said, in almost a whisper, I will miss you, mon ami. He exchanged a look with Bridget, and she nodded, once. He took the papers and, without looking back, left the room. Bridget hesitated for a moment, then came over and sat down in front of the phone. Howard, when you introduced Stefan and I, isn't this what you had in mind? Okay, then, no pretense. I didn't have anything in mind, Bridget. Just wanted to have my two besties in the room at the same time, I guess. Seems to have worked. Bridget jerked back slightly, a hurt look on her face. It was a petty thing to say, and I was immediately sorry. Look, Bridget, I didn't have some master plan. Apparently, I didn't even have a clue. I guess it took me this long to really get that I'm not human. I'm not part of the dance anymore. You're human, Howard. Where it matters. I wish I'd met you when you were still alive. Me too. I paused the appropriate amount of human time. I guess I'd better go. Places to go, species to meet. She smiled, gave me a small wave, and disconnected. Just before the image blinked out, I saw her eyes well up. Bill. December 2195. Epsilon Eridani. I was touring the Ragnarok landscape in Bullwinkle when I got a ping from Garfield. I sent an I am back. What's up? Garfield responded on audio only. I hadn't implemented heads-up visuals yet, and I didn't want to exit the moose. Reports back from 82 Eridani. Well, that would be interesting no matter how it had ended up. Come to think of it, the fact that someone was still alive to report back limited the extent to which the news could be bad. I tried to focus on that thought. I shut down Bullwinkle and called the transport drone to come and get him. It took a moment to refocus myself in my regular VR. Garfield was sitting at the table, swiping through a report. Well, Garfield leaned back and grinned. It'll take a while to go through everything, and they're still consolidating, but it's looking damned good. A couple of the guys are checking biocompatibility. Unless there's something really poisonous, we have 3 new colony targets. He reached forward and popped up a couple of items in separate windows. Then there's this. One of the advantages of using busters as a weapon is there's lots of wreckage to examine. Loki thinks he may already be getting a handle on the cloaking stuff. Garfield's grin looked like it was becoming permanent. We've also got a couple of unexploded fission bombs. The guys will be very careful, of course, but we think a V4 Sudarpulse might be able to get us a scan without setting off a booby trap. Excellent. I sat down and requested a couple of coffees from Jeeves. I was silent for a moment, scrubbing my face with my hands. The thing is, Gar, even with this stuff we can't do more than delay and annoy the others. The more I see of them, the bigger and more invincible they look. Their population, based on the latest models, could easily be a couple of 100 billion. They could field a space navy that would just roll over us, if we really pissed them off. Garfield nodded, a morose expression on his face. After a short silence, he looked up at me. How's it going with Bullwinkle? I notice you no longer have a drone following. Yepers. I was glad to change the subject. Improvements in miniaturization, local processing, better comms. I still need a large body, but it's coming down gradually. Not quite to the point of a human body yet. Still too big for Rocky. Afraid so, buddy. Working on it, though. So what's your ultimate goal? To walk in and punch Cranston right in the nose. Garfield threw his head back and laughed. Asterisk asterisk asterisk. We settled into the pub, beers and coffees scattered around the tables. Another game of scrub, another reminder that I was never an athlete. I grinned at the thought. At least there were no jocks around to rub it in anymore. Monty parked himself at my table and took a tentative sip of his beer. I'd recently introduced a new dark beer that I thought was a serviceable substitute for Guinness. I watched him carefully. Monty stared at the glass for a moment, nodded, and took a deeper sip. Success? I messaged Guppy to add the beer to the menu. Hey, Monty, how's things up Poseidon Way? Monty raised the glass in my direction. Pretty good, actually, Bill. We had a couple of bad months where the Krakens started hanging around a lot, hoping for a meal, but the new underwater defenses seem to be gradually changing their minds. But you're still going ahead with the floating city plans. Oh, sure. Monty shrugged. No matter what you do, living on a floating plant mat is still going a little more native than most of the colonists are comfortable with. Proper cities will mean permanent construction, transit, and all the amenities that we like to call civilization. And you'll be out of there. He laughed. Yeah, you caught me. As soon as they have enough infrastructure and redundancy to handle their own destiny, I'm heading out. I've had enough of shepherding humans, you know. I smiled at him, but his comments worried me. New Bobs were increasingly voicing an unwillingness to hang around and help humanity. On top of the tendency to use dismissive language, it told me that there was some kind of shift in psychology going on. Then I admitted to myself that I might be the one out of step. I'd been holed up at Epsilon Eridani for 50 years, with only second-hand exposure to humanity. It was easy for me to have an attitude. Bobs cloned from Riker's tree might just be getting heartily sick of people. Anyway, there were still enough interested Bobs to keep things rolling. I decided not to worry about it. I could always start my own dynasty if I needed to. I looked around for Howard, but didn't see him. The moot directory indicated he hadn't shown up today. Now there was a case of going too far in the other direction. The man was head over heels over a human. Everyone but Howard could see it. Had original Bob ever been that naive? I sighed. Yeah, he had. Riker was surrounded by a group of Bobs, being grilled on the situation on Earth. The results from 82 Eridani would certainly have caused a stir with the enclaves. I had a Toto to talk to Will about it myself, but I wasn't going to wade into that scrum. It could wait. Marvin and Luke came over and joined Monty and me. Hi, Bill. Sorry to be a pest. Okay, Marv. I understand. No, still nothing from Bender. Sorry. Unless he decided to pull a Mario and head for the far reaches, I think the greatest likelihood is that something happened to him. Marvin looked downcast, and Luke nodded and looked away. Those three were from the same cohort, so they were related in a way that was somehow one step closer than mere clonedom. It was now coming up on 30 years since Luke and Bender left Delta Eridani. The chances of an innocent explanation for Bender's silence became smaller every year. Marvin laced his fingers together and put his forehead to them for a moment. Victor followed Bender's departure vector. So far, nothing. He thinks Bender may have changed direction at some point. Victor's not willing to backtrack, so we're thinking of mounting an expedition. My eyebrows rose. Going after him? Space is pretty big. What do you think your chances are? Luke leaned forward, arms encircling his drink. You know we leave a trail when we fly between systems. The gas is slightly thinner along the flight path of a heaven vessel where we've scooped it up. It's not much, and you have to be very careful, but even if he changed course mid-flight we should be able to follow his new vector. Okay, you know where he was aiming when he left Eden. I guess you just start with that. Marvin and Luke nodded in sync. It would take decades, if not centuries. Then I smiled, still thinking like an ephemeral. How long it would take was irrelevant. We had forever. Hal. April 21, 96. GL 877. I wasn't really what you'd call happy to be back. Last time I was here, I had died. Hopefully things would go better this time. I did a quick status check on my cloud of attendants. I was surrounded by just under 100 drones and one Ami-driven Heaven decoy vessel. The decoy obediently matched my actions as I decelerated. The drones scattered to pre-signed positions around the periphery of the star system. They would serve as an early warning system for any comings and goings by the others. They were designed to give as little evidence of their presence as possible. Low profile, no albedo to speak of, total radio silence, and heavily shielded reactors meant they showed very little footprint to the universe at large. And booby-trapped, of course. If the others ever got hold of SCUT TAC, we would be royally hooped. The decoy had been constructed with all the improvements suggested by Thor, 2 layers of depleted uranium alternating with 2 layers of electrostatic shielding. We'd added redundancies for every major control system, with automatic failovers. It also had multiple independent self-destruct mechanisms and the usual booby traps. My new body had some improvements as well. I'd sacrificed buster storage in favor of a larger reactor and surge drive. At 15G capability I could now outrun the others, assuming that I'd seen their A-game last time out. Today's entertainment was in aid of testing our mods against the Death Asteroid. If Decoy 1 could survive a zapping, we were golden. If it couldn't, well, no one really wanted to ask that question. I sent the activation order. Decoy 1 broke off from my vector and accelerated towards the inner system. Asterisk asterisk asterisk. The SCUT connection gave me a video window into the chase. The decoy was carefully sticking to 10G as it ran from the other's battle group, or squad, or whatever they called their standard collection of ships. We hadn't tried to be subtle with the sweep through the inner system, and the decoy had, predictably, picked up a tail. It looked as though we were less than an hour away from the big event. I accepted a ping, and Mario popped into my VR. I love car chases, he said, grinning at me. Especially the ones with big crashes, I replied. I was forwarding the telemetry to Bill for the archives as well. I hadn't heard from him, but I imagined he was monitoring as time permitted. Mario got comfortable, Jeeves brought coffees, and we sat back to watch the show. 2 minutes later the Death Asteroid zapped the decoy, just as the decoy had finished a SUDAR scan of its pursuers. The decoy forwarded a complete set of readings to us, then blew itself up. Mario and I looked at each other, our eyes wide. I spoke first. That was, a little early. Yeah, looks like Garfield was a bit off on his estimates of the internal capabilities of the Death Asteroids. He's going to have to rejigger his models. I checked the received telemetry. Well, fortunately, we got a good scan just at the end. This should help. I took a close look at the scan of the Death Asteroid. Or not. Look at that. I pointed to a section of the scan. That looks like living area. Why the crap would they need that much living area? Mario thought for a moment. Either they're really big, or the Death Asteroid requires a lot of personnel to run, or they really like each other. Like naked mole rats or something. Questions and more questions. Well, we've got this much done, anyway. The decoy took a few hit points, but by and large I'd say the shielding was a success. Mario nodded. We'll see what Thor and Garfield have to say at the next moot. He raised his cup to me, finished his coffee in a gulp, and popped out. I turned myself around, pointed the bow at GL54, and headed home. Hal. October, 2197. En route to GL54. I was 18 months into my journey when I got a message from Bill. At my current Tau, any kind of real-time interaction was out of the question. I couldn't frame Jack nearly high enough to overcome the time dilation, so communications tended to wait until the end of a trip, or they came as emails, as in this case. I grabbed the sheet and read it. Hal. Well, the fecal matter seems to have struck the atmospheric propulsor. A squad of others' vessels was detected leaving GL 877, heading for GL 54. To be fair, scouting by other Bobs indicates that other, closer systems have already been stripped, so this isn't necessarily anything more than a normal scavenging mission. Just the same, Mario has decided to hit the road, along with every piece of equipment he has. We're going to leave a couple of drones behind for observation, and use one to try communicating with the others. If they react by pointing one of the death asteroids at us, we'll blow up the drone. Just thought you should know. It looks like we're heading for a formal first contact. You may want to reroute. Bill. Oh, fudge. May you live in interesting times. Bill. October 2204. GL 54. Mario was now in mid-trip, fleeing GL 54 for Zeta Tucani, so it was up to me to handle the introductions when the others arrived. I couldn't help but feel a certain level of nervousness. These were the beings that had blown up Bashful and Hal. There were a lot of ways this could go down, but I didn't think friendly was in the expected range. Before he left, Mario did a little preparatory construction. He had 4 stealth drones set up for observation, and a non-stealth drone for making contact. With SCUT communications, I could easily control them from here in Epsilon Eridani. The contact drone made me chuckle. The hull was shiny, the reactor leaked neutrons like a sieve, and in the radio spectrum the drone was as noisy as an unshielded electric motor. I thought he might have overdone the Hiyok, but it was certainly a masterpiece. It also had an antenna dish for tight beaming radio telemetry to a non-existent mothership, which I thought was a great touch. We wanted the others to underestimate us, right up to the moment we would deliver the knockout punch. The others' convoy was impressive. 10 death asteroids, a couple hundred small attendants, and 20 huge cylindrical hulks that I assumed would be cargo ships. These last units were upwards of 10 kilometers in length and a kilometer in diameter. I tried to estimate the tonnage of metals that they could transport and my mind boggled at the results. Interestingly, though, based on a rough calculation, the total cargo capacity was within an order of magnitude of what they'd need to strip this system. Either they had previously scouted the system, or they had some way to get a good estimate of available resources beforehand. Or maybe they just lucked out. They might make multiple trips if a system had enough resources to justify it. Well, that was something for the future. I activated the communications drone, placed it right in the path of the incoming armada, and squirted a radio signal at them. For a first attempt, it was the most basic of communications, the first 10 prime numbers, represented as a series of blips. Then I waited for a response. I had listed a number of possibilities while waiting for them to arrive. It might be the next 10 primes, or it might be my message relayed back to me in reverse, or it might be another mathematical series. Or it might be a blast of cosmic rays. I was not expecting an audio message, in Mandarin. Fortunately I had a translation routine on file, such things having been fairly standard issue in the 22nd century. We see you, food. Your time is not yet. Move aside. Well, blow me down. Food, am I? I was so flummoxed that it took me almost a half second to come up with a response. It occurred to me during that time that I shouldn't react too quickly. If they thought I was biological, so much the better. We are not attempting to block you. This unit is obviously too small for that. We are trying to communicate. To what purpose? To beg for mercy? An interesting idea, mercy. We learned it from the cybernetic unit that we captured. We have no such concept. Do you have a concept of exchange of information? If it benefits us. Well, that was something, anyway. Based on Hal's experience, I had a couple of minutes before they were close enough to zap the drone. Assuming they were going to do so, which I figured was a pretty safe bet. Why are you stripping systems? For resources and food. Is this not obvious? Yes, but why not just colonize the star systems? Another concept that we learned from the captured unit. Colonization requires splitting the hive. Splitting the hive means a new prime. A new prime and another hive means war. This does not benefit us. Better to simply collect resources so that the hive can grow. Ooh-kaai. A picture was forming something insect-like. Prime was probably some equivalent to a queen. I noted that they were coming up past the position of one of the stealth drones. These units were equipped with the new 4 light-hour ultra-low-power Sudar units. I hoped to get a scan without alerting them. Can primes not cooperate? Subprimes can be controlled, but not over interstellar distances. We know you are using this dialogue to probe for information. This amuses us. The scurrying of food as it evades the inevitable end is perhaps for us what you mean by art. Okay, that was just sick. We seek information. Sometimes even if there is no benefit. That makes no sense. The beings at Zeta Tucani, you obliterated them. They were food. And they would have tried to prevent the harvesting. Is there no way we can coexist? The universe is a large place. That also makes no sense. You are food. It is not the purpose of food to coexist. We will, in time, make our way to your soul and your Epsilon Eridani. We have seen your radio beacons. Food always thus announces itself. Oh, wow. Fermi paradox, resolved. I checked my system status and noted that my drone was probably 30 seconds away from getting zapped. I decided to try and time the SUDAR scan to coincide with that, in hopes that the zap might either command all their attention, or blind their systems for a few moments. You are building what we would call a Dyson sphere. Is this for your population? Yes. The construct will allow up to 500 million times the livable area. We will not run out of space within the lifetime of the prime. And afterwards. Irrelevant. That is the concern of the next prime. Isn't overpopulation a concern? Overcrowding. There can never be too many of us. There can only be not enough food. At that moment, the stealth drone detected the outgoing zap. The other spokesman hadn't even bothered with a throwaway line or anything. I was absurdly irritated. You'd think I'd deserve at least hasta la vista. Per instructions, the stealth drone did a quick series of snapshot scans of the other's vessels. Then the zap arrived, and the communications drone exploded on cue. I noted, from the point of view of the stealth drone, that a squad of others immediately took off in the direction that the communication drone's directional antenna had been transmitting. Served them right. Let 'em waste time casting around. I sat back and stared into space. This was big. This was going to need a moot for sure. Bob. January 2183. Delta Eridani. Buster grunted as he released the arrow. It flew dead true and buried itself in the target. Archimedes whooped from the sidelines, and Buster's little brother and sister yelled insults. Another universality, apparently. Buster turned to his opponent, Arnold's son, and waggled his ears. Donald looked distinctly uncomfortable, but wasn't going to back down in front of the entire Heki. Donald released the arrow. It hit the edge of the target. Not a kill shot, but certainly crippling, if it had hit a live target. Arnold shrugged and yelled something supportive. I took a moment to smile at the number of new faces that had grown up over the last few years. Child mortality had dropped significantly with the reduction in the gorilloid threat, and the Deltan population was up to over 1,100. Archimedes' family had grown as well. 3 children, and a 4th on the way. I was finally beginning to get an idea of the lifespan of the Deltans. Moses had died a few years ago, at somewhere between 60 and 70 Earth years old. About the same or maybe even a little better than humans, given the environment. It was a bittersweet time for me. The council had never relented in their decision to banish me. Archimedes brought it up a couple of times, but was shut down hard. His position as the tribe's premier tool maker protected him to a certain extent, but I finally told him to drop it. I didn't want any backlash against his family. Stories of the Bobby still abounded, but I noticed that they were now being embellished. In particular, my reputation seemed to be suffering. The tone sounded a little more like Loki or Lucifer, these days. Would I end up as the devil in some far future religious myth? I sighed. The risks of godhood, I guess. I sent a quick text to ask Marvin if he'd be joining today's scrub game, and got an affirmative. Bill. October 2204. Epsilon Eridani. I held the air horn over my head and pressed the button twice, and received the usual round of boos. Gotta love tradition. The catcalls were short-lived, though, more of a formality. The word had gotten out, and the Bobs were all business today. Even the pre-meeting session had been quiet, with a growling undertone. First, before we get to the main event, I'd like to introduce our newest long-range champion. I gestured to a nearby Bob. Bruce is from Calvin and Gaku's first cohort. He is calling in from 11 Leonis Minoris, and holds the record at 37 light-years from Earth. Sorry, Mario. The crowd applauded Bruce, and several people came over to talk to him. When the chatter had died down, I held the air horn up for a moment and waited for quiet. I guess you've all heard by now, but I'll summarize just to make sure we haven't missed anything. We have communicated with the others. They appear to have captured the Chinese probe at some point, and stripped its data. The good news is that they speak Mandarin, so communications were pretty straightforward. The bad news is they know where Earth is. And thanks to my ham-handed broadcasts to every star system in sight, they know about Epsilon Eridani as well. I waved off the yelled comments. No, they won't get the SCUT plans. The broadcasts were encrypted, as is everything we do, and the Chinese probe wouldn't know anything about the transmission or file formats, so they wouldn't be able to separate out encrypted data from transport envelope. I waited for any objections, then continued. The other piece of good news is they are sufficiently arrogant that they don't feel the need to come over and squash us forthwith. Their attitude seems to be that they'll get to us when they get to us. This produced low growls from the audience, and I grinned. Now, we got some good scans of the Armada, and we're able to observe their operations as they strip GL-54. I'm going to call up Garfield to give us a rundown in a minute. But first I want to thank Hal for successfully testing the new Heaven design against the Death asteroids. At least in that area, we are ahead of the game. There were cheers from the audience, and the usual first verse of Bicycle Built for Two. It never got old. Hal grinned to the crowd, waved, and took a bow. Garfield walked up onto the podium and glared at me. I laughed, held up the horn, and gave a blast. Okay, Garfield yelled over the booze, I have a bit of egg on my face. My guesstimates of the power capabilities and weaponry of the Death asteroid were a little off, because the others are actually more inventive than I thought. I just hope they don't have more surprises. Garfield waited for silence, and he got it. Every Bob in the room was now completely focused on his words. Power beaming via SUDAR. It's not just for running those little ant things they use for harvesting. It's also for charging Death asteroids remotely. The death asteroids are capable of charging themselves without help, but it looks like it would take about a day on their own. So they have huge reactors in the cargo carriers which, in combination with the Sudar beaming, can run ants, drones, mining carriers, or charge up death asteroids. Why? Yelled someone from the crowd. Seems unnecessarily complicated. Garfield nodded in the general direction of the voice. I think it's dictated by their biology. It's pretty obvious from Bill's conversation with them that they're a hive organism. A large portion of the interior of the death asteroids is living space. Far too much, in my opinion, to be justifiable just based on personnel requirements. Every vehicle they have is either automated or has the same large living space. I think they need to live in large groups. They may get some version of agoraphobia or something if there aren't enough of their brethren around. Well, it would explain their decision to build the Dyson sphere. Hal said from the front of the audience. That and their comment about going to war with any splinter group, I added. That could be phenotypical behavior as well. These beings seem to be very much driven by their biology. It may be that their reference to all other life as food is more of the same. Something that drives their actions at such an instinctual level can be taken advantage of, if we can figure out how. That's one of the tasks I want you guys to take out of this meeting. There were silent nods throughout the room, and a palpable aura of anticipation. I tried to keep this quiet, but somehow word had gotten out. And now, the moment you've all been waiting for. I grinned at the crowd. We got images of the others from the scans. The detail isn't great, of course. The drone was too. Less talk, more show. I snapped my mouth shut. So much for building the drama. With a wave, I brought up the composite 3D image that we'd put together. There were oohs and ahs from the crowd. The other was hard to describe, simply because it was hard to get a perspective on it. The scale superimposed on the image indicated that it was about 4 feet tall, although it didn't really stand straight. Color shaded between an oily green-violet sheen through gray, to black. RN. I looked at the perplexed faces in the crowd. I understand that look. I'd worn it recently, but I'd been examining all the images since we separated them from the scans, so I had somewhat of a head start on figuring it out. Okay, think of the posture of a gorilla. Not quite a quadruped, but not quite upright. These things that look kind of like meaty wings are the front, limbs. The back limbs are more like a split tail, except that there's also a tail. Visualize a sea lion's back end with a tail tacked on. The front limbs have these big appendages that look like fat fingers, but I don't think they're for manipulating. They have suckers on them, so I think they're more for gripping their prey. The creature has what I'd have to describe as feeding fingers that fold out from here. I pointed to the front of the thing, and appear to be dexterous enough to act as manipulators. They also direct food into the maw. I switched to another image which showed the thing with its front split open in a vertical slash, which doesn't masticate so much as grind and strip the meal. I think it would be particularly slow and painful to be eaten by these things. I switched images again and pointed to the front. The head does appear to have the primary sensory apparatus, although what looks like the brain is more centrally located. Here. I pointed to a spot high on the main trunk. Vision is not great. It seems to be a large number of small eyes spaced around the dome of the head. You have to wonder why a predator would need 360-degree vision. I switched back to the first picture. The scan indicated they were packed into the living area with a density similar to us in this room. Except that it was like that everywhere. No empty rooms. No private quarters. They are probably always packed in like sardines. I gestured dramatically. Ladies, gentlemen, I give you the others. There was dead silence for a few milliseconds, then someone said, should we clap? Everyone in the room broke up in laughter, and the tension dissolved. If I ever found out who the speaker was, I'd have to buy him a beer. I left the image up, and closed the meeting. People broke into groups to discuss the presentation. Mario raised his chin in my direction, and I acknowledged the implied invitation with a wave. Mario grimaced. I had a theory that the presence of the death asteroids was proof that they don't scout a system. Otherwise they'd have known they didn't need them at GL 54. But if they're a communal organism, then the death asteroids are their portable community. Mario gave me a rueful smile. Yep. Fail. So how is the harvest going? He rolled his eyes and pulled up some images. Thankfully there was nothing in GL 54 to get attached to, so this is nothing more than a strategic retreat to me. Pointing to one image. The carriers go down where presumably they've detected metal. They disgorge ants, who dig down to the ore and bring it up. It's hard to tell from a distance, but based on activity, I think they use the ore to build more ants which they use to get more ore, which they use to build more ants. Eventually they reach a break-even point of some kind where the ants just haul material up. Then they harvest the excess ants and take off. They'd have printers specialized for making ants, then. I stroked my chin in thought. It would have to be a cheap, quick process. At the current rate, I estimate they'll have the system cleaned out in a year. It's exponential behavior. They never stop, never rest. Mario rubbed his eyes. And those cargo ships are so big, I don't think we could even make them notice us, let alone damage them significantly. It would be like mosquitoes trying to take on tanks. Well, we have to come up with something before they decide Earth is next. Mario shook his head. There are a lot of systems closer to them than Earth. We have lots of time. You're assuming that they always do things that way. You're assuming that they won't suddenly decide to drive a little extra distance for some ready-made refined material. I glared at him, willing him to get the point. I think we have to assume we don't have a lot of time. If we're ready early, no biggie. If we're ready late, Biggie. Damn. Howard. July 2198. Interstellar space. I was less than a third of the way to my destination when I received an email from Dexter. In a moment of weakness, I'd asked him to let me know any news about the brochures. Dexter included a bunch of other stuff in the email as well. Maybe he wanted to distract me, maybe he wanted it to seem like the message wasn't all about Bridget. Don't know, but I appreciated the effort. In any case, it looked like things were going well, in general. Butterworth had retired well-deserved, in my opinion. The population of the system was up around 100,000 people now. Human-crewed spaceships were becoming commonplace, and the donuts made up an increasingly minor part of the food supply chain. Dexter apparently now had some of that formerly mythical free time, and was putting together some of Bill's asteroid movers. New Jerusalem was now a full-fledged democracy. Seemed some incriminating videos had gotten out and Cranston had to step down. In the resulting mess, the citizenry had decided to separate church and state once again. I laughed as I read the details. No doubt Cranston had his suspicions, but there was no way to trace anything back to Will or myself. Speaking of, I fired off an email to Will, in case he had more juicy info. Things were going well. If it weren't for the others, humanity would be in a good place. And that was it for the delaying tactics. With a sigh, I went on to the part about the brochures. Okay, not terrible. They had a son. They'd named him Howard. I smiled, as the message became suddenly blurry. I would have to send a short thank you note. Bill. April 2205. Epsilon Eridani. I leaned back in my chair, looked straight up, and used some words that I normally don't like to use. Surveillance drones around GL 877 had reported that the others had just launched another expedition. From the initial vector, it looked like they were heading for NN 4285. That wasn't too bad. It was a small M-star, too dim for any chance of usable planets. No, I corrected myself, under no circumstances should this be considered acceptable. If the others had stuck to uninhabited systems, well, it was a big galaxy. But that wasn't their behavior. If they didn't happen to kill off a planet, it was only because there was nothing to kill off, not because of some moral reluctance. Lack of opportunity isn't the same as self-restraint. They were evil. End of story. And if distance was an indicator, both Gamma and Delta Pavinus would probably be next, and they were good candidates. I checked the archives, just on the off chance. No such luck. No one had visited those systems yet, although a couple of Bobs were heading for them as part of Mario's scouting. I got up and started pacing around my office. Then I pinged Mario, and he popped over. What's up? Mario, the others just moved again. This time heading for NN 4285. Yeah, I saw that. Not a prime system. Still, we have to figure out how to nip this in the bud. I'm concerned about the Pavinus candidates. Do you have an ETA for them? Gamma and Delta? Claude and Jacques are heading for those. Claude will be at Gamma in about a month, and Jacques at Delta in 22 months or so. Damn it. The closest significant presence we've got is Sol, and we can't divert them from building colony ships. Epsilon Indy. No, Epsilon Indy is too far away as well, although closer than Sol. But resources are poor, and colonists to KKP will be too busy setting up to help. Mario nodded. He looked down at his toes for a few milliseconds, then turned and glared at me. What is it with the Pavinus systems that's giving you a pickle up your butt, anyway? I sighed and stopped pacing. I favored Mario with a self-conscious smile. Call it a premonition. Call it superstition. Call it utter faith in the power of Murphy. Based strictly on distance, those two are among the next likely targets. Based on the stars types, they're good habitable planet candidates. Based on our experience so far, most good systems with a planet in the right place have life. Not intelligence, necessarily, but life. I shrugged, letting Mario make the connection. He was silent for a few moments, thinking. On the other hand, they've just sent out an expedition to NN 4285, and the GL-54 expedition hasn't made it back to their home system. How many armadas do you suppose they have? Fair point. They don't seem to have any real sense of urgency. I wonder how long a prime lives. So look, Bill, why don't you build a group here and send it to the area? I shook my head. Too far. I'll do it if there's no other way. We need to get an inventory of what Bobs are in what systems, so we can figure out what response is possible. Mario gave me a nod and popped out. I pinged Claude. His return indicated he was down to a low tau, about 0.03. That wouldn't affect communications at all, and was hardly worth adjusting frame rates for. He was open for company, so I popped in. Hey, Bill. Claude. I looked around at his VR. Not particularly anything. Tropical beach, cabana, deck chair. Could be Mexico, Hawaii, or some made-up location. I didn't have any memories of a vacation like this, so I assumed the last option. Claude was looking at me with slightly wide eyes. He was a generation removed from me, and it was funny how the Bobiverse was becoming hierarchical like that. I materialized a deck share of my own and sat down. Been following the others, Claude. Yeah, I was at the moot. And I heard about NN 4285. Okay, so here's the thing. With the others taking out GL-54, there's no Bob-controlled system anywhere close to you. When you get to Gamma Pavinus, you have to assume you only have a couple of decades at most before the others come visiting. You're going to have to mobilize for war, essentially. Claude frowned. A lot of assumptions in there. Not as many as you'd think, and the assumptions are high probability. Claude sighed and resettled himself in his chair to face me squarely. Look, Bill. I get the whole thing about the others, and they're evil, blah blah. But why here, and why now? Why this particular line in the sand? I'll grant you there's nothing unique about Gamma Pavinus to the limit of our current knowledge. But we have to start somewhere. Maybe we won't be ready for them in time. Maybe they'll swoop down on you in a decade and you'll have to flee like Mario did. But at some point, we have to try. Why not here, and why not now? Claude gave me a wry smile. Because here and now puts me in the crosshairs. Thank you very much. I laughed. Well, that's why God invented backups. Asterisk asterisk asterisk. I popped back to my own VR, after extracting a promise from Claude that he'd get the system report on Gamma Pavinus to me on a priority basis. I checked Jacques' Tau, but he was still way up there. A conversation would take days, even if he frame-jacked. I quickly went down my list of known manufacturing centers. There weren't a lot. Most Bobs didn't bother in most systems, other than building a space station. I remembered Bart, who was the last Bob that I'd talked to in Alpha Centauri. I sent a quick ping to him, but it looked like he was between systems. Bart's acknowledgement indicated a ridiculous Tau. I'd be a few days even waiting for a response, never mind a conversation. I queried the Alpha Centauri space station directly. The status report appeared in front of me in a window. Garfield came around and looked over my shoulder. No one there right now, he said. Looks like the last group left it uninhabited. Well, we can't force anyone to stay and play caretaker. It's a free galaxy. I ran a hand through my hair, then stopped and looked at my hand. That was Riker's tick. I didn't need to start that. It looks like a full-power Ami, though. If I can get it to build a replicant matrix, I can load my backup and the new me can bootstrap up from there. You're going to load a backup across interstellar distances, with no Bob overseeing? Wow, dude. I shrugged. No difference in principle. I'll check some the hell out of it before approving it for load. I thought for another millisecond, then nodded. I don't have a choice, anyway. We can't afford to ignore any potential source of Bobs. I'm afraid, like it or not, we're going to war. Claude. May 2205. Gamma Pavinus. Gamma Pavinus was an F8V class of star, which made it slightly bigger and barely hotter than Sol. The effect was a system with a comfort zone slightly farther out, but a sun that would look virtually indistinguishable from ours. I paradoxically found myself hoping that I wouldn't find anything in the comfort zone. The whole dialogue with Bill had left me freaked out and ambivalent about what I might find. I would actually feel better if there was nothing in this system worth defending. Well, you have to know that Murphy is listening for just exactly that kind of wish, so he can give you the shaft. The planet sat at just over 100 million miles out. A gorgeous, shining, blue and green marble with bands and swirls of white, orbited by one larger moon and 3 smaller ones. Damn. I went immediately into orbit to determine if it included intelligent life. That would be a real kick in the pants. Fortunately, the planet failed or passed, depending on attitude the first, obvious tests. There was no radio traffic, no web of exhaust trails in the atmosphere, no satellites, and no sprinkle of lights on the night side. That still left pre-industrial civilization, of course, but that would require a closer look. I sent a quick email off to Bill with results so far, then deployed the exploration drones. Mario had decided that the latest version Heaven vessels would come with enough onboard assets so that we could investigate a system quickly. This meant mining and manufacturing operations could wait for later. The drones took up polar orbits for a couple of passes, then swooped into atmosphere to check out interesting items. I spent 5 days on observation and exploration. I didn't want to screw this up. But finally, I felt confident enough to report my findings. No intelligence. Thank God. But the ecosystem was as rich and varied as anything in Earth's history. This was a planet with everything stacked in its favor. The right size, the right distance from a sun with good solar output but relatively low UV, good-sized moons, plate tectonics active enough to ensure consistent surface recycling. The list went on and on. This was an ideal colony target, except for the part where it was on the other's front porch. Now I would have to move to phase 2. This system actually had a relatively low metallicity, at least according to the star's spectral lines. Perhaps that was why the others had rejected it in favor of the slightly more distant NN 4285. But the next star out, GL 902, was over 2 light-years farther than this one. I doubted the others would bypass it again. Well, low metallicity was a relative term. I was sure I'd still find more than enough resources for my purposes, even if it took a bit of work to find. There was a ping from Bill, then he popped in. Hey Claude. I've been looking over your report. Sounds like a great planet. And that's the problem. It is a great planet. Great system. And if you're right, due to be harvested sometime in the next, 100 years. Bill looked down for a moment. Mario has been getting reports back from Bob's hitting surrounding systems. Combined with his own observations in Zeta Tucani and Beta Hydri, we're able to make a rough estimate of a system every 10 to 20 years. So they've only been at this maybe 100 years. We don't know how long they were working only within their system. It might have taken them 100 years to get started. Maybe the first out system harvest taught them a lot. Anyway, the point is, there are a lot of unknowns before they started regularly harvesting. Bill had popped up a star chart while he was talking, the various star systems flashing a tooltip as he mentioned them. Jacques will be arriving at Delta Pavinus in 18 months. The positions of Delta Pavinus and GL 877 are about the same distance from you, so if we see the others head your way, anything he launches from Delta will arrive here at the same time. So hopefully you'll have reinforcements. I nodded. That was something, anyway. Oliver. September 2205. Alpha Centauri. Heek 71683-14. Damn. I'm not Bill anymore. Now I need a new name. This had happened to me once before, as one of Bob 1's first cohort, in Epsilon Eridani. Now I was a noob again, this time in Alpha Centauri. I popped into Bill's VR. I hate you. Bill grinned at me. Nah, you know the rules. New name, dude. ASAP. Oliver. In keeping with the Bloom County theme. Bill nodded his approval. Oliver was a fun character and we'd liked him. One advantage of this arrangement, I guess, is that I know the whole plan already. Bill laughed and nodded. Saves time. I stood up. So, I'll get to it. I may set up in competition with you, though. Wanna bet I get FTL first? I'd be overjoyed if you did, Oliver. Everyone wins. I waved to Bill, and popped back home. Asterisk asterisk asterisk. Both Alpha Centauri A and B had reasonable resource levels. Bard and crew had concentrated their efforts in A, but I needed to get things rolling quickly. It would be 6 months until my vessel was ready. At that point, I would start the auto factory in Alpha Centauri A to building Bobs on a crash basis, while I would fly over to Alpha Centauri B with another auto factory and set up there as well. At the top acceleration of a version 4 vessel, it was less than a 4-day trip. Meanwhile, I would have to consider possible weapons against the others. Busters could pass through the cargo ships or death asteroids multiple times and do little or no detectable damage. Nukes were effective, and the expedition to 82 Eridani had yielded some good information. We didn't have time to figure out fission weapons from scratch. I regretted, a little, not having worked on that before. But only a little. Plasma spikes, like busters, were simply too small. Not effective against the mega-monster ships we would be going up against. I needed either a large mass, a large explosion, or a lot of energy. Heat energy, electrical energy, gravitational, or momentum. Relativistic velocities. How fast could I accelerate things? Hands behind my back, muttering in thought, I retired to my new mad science lab. Asterisk asterisk asterisk. I really had no idea what size of force I was going to need. However, there was very little downside to overdoing it, and a lot of downside to the converse. With that thought in mind, I decided to just go for everything I could manage. Taking a lesson from Bob 1's experience, I decided I would start by doubling my production capability. Accordingly, my first production run consisted entirely of new printers. I then assigned a couple of printers to do nothing but produce more printers, while the rest started working on drones. I was going to invest some upfront time in ramping up my capacity, which would hopefully pay off later. It took almost 2 years before I was ready to start building actual Bobs. The speed at which a printer could produce an item was dependent partly on the size of the item, but also very much on the level of detail required. 3D printers delivered individual atoms using a number of tuned carbon nanotubes, each sized for specific elements. Building something like itself required the maximum level of detail and precision, as you had to place individual carbon atoms, one after another, with 0 defects. This made 3D printers one of the most complex items that a 3D printer could be asked to build. Only something biological would be harder. Anyway, finally, I was producing Bobs. After much discussion, Bill and I came up with a blueprint for a version 5 Heaven vessel, a virtual dreadnought compared to the original Heaven 1. I felt a little intimidated just looking at the plans. A with circumflex Nui. Bill was still working on the Sudar cloaking from the 82 Eridani mission, but we knew enough about it to build around the requirement for now. I also put together a design for a stealth buster, very similar in overall structure to Madero's stealth fission bombs. Howard had managed to extract H-bomb blueprints from Butterworth. I guess the colonel considered the others to be enough of a threat to override military secrecy. Unbelievable that they were still even thinking in those terms, with 99.9% of the human race gone. 3 years after waking up at Alpha Centauri, I had my first cohort of battle cruisers. Mulder. November 2201. Departure. I put my hands behind my head and stretched as I reviewed the report that I would be sending to Bill and Riker. This would be my final report from Poseidon. Tomorrow, Monty would start the return trip to Earth, empty except for some biological samples. And I would point my bow and head for a new system, leaving Marcus as Bob in residence here. I pinged Monty and Marcus and invited them over. They responded immediately. Hey, Mulder. I'm going to miss you guys, Marcus said, looking at each of us. Yeah, I know, Monty replied. I wish I could keep it down below 0.75 C, but we can't afford the extra transit time for a colony ship. Marcus looked a little down, so I gestured to my report to change the subject. Things are looking good. 3 mat colonies in full operation, and 2 floating cities getting close to complete. Marcus nodded. And as of today, it's 3 months since the last Kraken attack. Apparently they can be taught. Marcus grinned and invoked a Coke. And then there's this. He popped up an image. What the FFFF? I squinted at the graphic. Is that actually Aerial City, as in floating in the air? Yep. He waved a hand. Well, okay, it's a small proof of concept prototype, but still. I've been putting this thing together for a while. Triple redundancy, all kinds of failsafes. Theoretically we should be able to lift something as big as your floating cities and keep it in the air indefinitely. Unbelievable, Monty said. When will it be ready to test? Marcus grimaced. Sorry, buddy. Not for another 6 months. You won't be able to find out the results until you get back to Earth. Well, that sucks. On the other hand, by the time I'm back online, the thing might be ready for prime time. This could get interesting. I nodded, not saying anything. This was a good argument for staying below 0.75, just to be able to follow the project. If this crazy idea of Marcus's actually worked, it would change the game significantly. Asterisk asterisk asterisk. Poseidon receded rapidly in the rear view as I accelerated out of the system. The goodbyes from Chief Draper and the friends that I'd made over the years stung more than I'd expected. It was very possible that some of those people would be dead by the time my Tau dropped at the other end. Making friends with humans just didn't seem like a good idea, on balance. Riker pinged me and I invited him in. Hey, Mulder. Sorry I couldn't get back to you before. It's been that kind of millennium. Will grinned at me. Especially the last week or so, I guess, I replied, smiling back. I summoned Jeeves and he arrived with a coffee for Will. So what's the status back at Sol? I asked him. We have 14 colony ships in active service now, he replied. Colonies at or soon to be at Vulcan, Poseidon, Epsilon Indi, and 82 Eridani. Things are looking up. Or would be, if not for the others. Will sighed. Yeah, I know 82 Eridani and Epsilon Indi, in particular, are close enough to be potentially in danger. We're working on it. Yep. Just when you start to get ahead in the rat race, the universe delivers bigger rats. Jacques. February 2207. Delta Pavinus. I looked down from orbit at the sprinkles of light decorating the dark side of Delta Pavinus 4, realizing that there was a good chance these beings would be dead soon. Deltans was taken. Pavonians? No, that sucked. POV for now, I guess. The POV appeared to be well into their industrial age, probably equivalent to the Victorian era on Earth. They were pumping smoke into the atmosphere at a prodigious rate, setting the earliest stages for global warming. I sincerely hoped that in the fullness of time, they'd have the opportunity to get all bent out of shape about environmentalism. I finished my initial survey, packaged up the results, and fired it off to Bill. It took about 10 minutes before I got a ping, and Bill appeared in my VR. Well, this sucks. I nodded. Remember the days when we thought finding intelligence would be a good thing? I leaned forward and put my head in my hands. And I could end up being witness to the massacre of an entire species. Bill materialized an Adirondack chair a little anachronistic in my VR, but whatever, and sat down. He sat in silence for a few milliseconds before replying. Jacques, it's very likely that Gamma will get hit first. That's a full planetary ecology, but at least Claude hasn't found any sentient life. And if the others head that way, you'll be able to help. Meanwhile, you need to start working the system and concentrate on building a bunch of Oliver's dreadnoughts. I looked at him and shook my head. No. Well, yes, but also no. I'll build dreadnoughts, and I'll be ready to help Claude, but I'm also going to try to build a couple of colony ships, using Riker's design. With the experience he's gained, I should be able to complete them in half the time. If the others come a-knocking, I want to get some POV off planet. I'm not going to sit by while an entire race gets blown away. Bill stared at me, frowning, for several milliseconds. Then a smile slowly formed. I can't decide if you're brilliant or a moron. I'll think about it. It's definitely a noble idea, Jacques, but maybe not doable. I think we're due for a moot. Maybe we should run it through the group consciousness. I shrugged. The group could talk all they wanted. I knew what I had to do. Bill nodded to me and vanished. Asterisk asterisk asterisk. Regardless of whether I went with Bill's plan or mine, the first step was the same. Find resources, build auto factory. This system was metal heavy, so I didn't anticipate any kind of problem. I turned to Guppy, who was waiting at parade rest, as usual. Funny, even several generations and versions away from Heaven 1, Guppy really hadn't changed. Same fish-headed, deadpan, taciturn sidekick. But he got the job done. Guppy, we need auto factories, and soon. Send out everything we have to look for locations. Top priority, and don't be subtle. Guppy nodded and went into command fugue. The ship shuddered as a cloud of scouts and drones took off in all directions. I was glad we were past the days when I'd have to personally fly the system with Sudar ranging in all directions. The improvements to Sudar and to the Amos meant that even that part of the process could be delegated. The order hadn't included the planetary exploration scouts, as those would be useless for that task. And they were already planetside, anyway. I began to draw out a plan for concerted and organized accrual of information about the POV. Asterisk asterisk asterisk. The POV looked for all the world like giant meerkats. They stood 6 feet tall or so when upright. They could walk bipedally, but for any kind of distance, they went down on all fours. I was having a little trouble getting used to the sight. Apparently, I'm a bipedalism bigot. Who knew? The POV wore clothing, but seemingly less for protection or modesty than for decoration and pockets, except in very cold climates. They were organized into countries or states, and seemed to use forms of government very similar to what humanity had come up with. Even their societies looked familiar. About the only real difference was the almost complete absence of monogamy. POV seemed to organize into families of up to 8 adults, generally evenly divided between genders. This created a somewhat different standard design for residences, but otherwise didn't seem to have a large effect on society as a whole. I picked one of the countries that resembled early America, selected one of the larger cities, and settled in for some dedicated research. The absence of electronic media made for a bit of an inconvenience. However, I did find several bookstores. I managed to sneak in a couple of roamers, late in the evening. They took up positions in the shadows of the rafters and waited for closing time. Then they started going through books. There wasn't anything like a children's section, but there were books for beginning readers, with illustrated alphabets. It took 2 nights to go through the entire contents of the stores. Because a significant portion of the population was still illiterate, there were clubs set up where a POV would read aloud from a book, while patrons ate or drank. Seemed like a very civilized idea to me. I stationed drones in the shadows of every reading club I could find, and made a point of scanning the books that were read at my earliest opportunity. Within a month, I had a working vocabulary of the language of this country. The inhabitants, who called themselves Sijentfen, spoke a language that they called Tinasje. Meanwhile, the mining scouts found more than enough resources to get going. As expected, this was a rich system. As with many star systems, an asteroid belt sat to the inside of the first Jovian, and the pickings were beyond easy. I set the printers to producing more printers first. I think we'd all learned a lesson from Bob. Early reproduction of printers paid off in the long term. With circumflex NS. I would wait for the Bob mood, and hope that they'd have good suggestions for manufacturing allocations. But if their suggestions didn't include colony ships to get some POV off planet, well, they could go jump. March 2207. Epsilon Eridani. The air horn's blast brought the usual expressions of appreciation. I couldn't bring myself to grin at the antics, though. This was going to be a tough meeting. The looks on everyone's faces showed that they understood this. Okay, guys. Let's summarize. The others have kicked Mario out of GL54 and they're busily stripping the resources. They've launched another expedition heading for NN 4285. I've expressed concern that Gamma and Delta Pavinus are going to be next. And oh, look, there's a habitable planet in one system and a civilization in the other. I looked at the sea of faces. Everyone was totally focused on my words. Oliver in Alpha Centauri has come up with the latest and greatest battle wagon design. He's too far away to help Jacques and Claude, though, unless the others hold off a lot longer than I really expect. Jacques is prepared to send reinforcements for Claude if it comes to that. Or the other way around, if necessary. I looked for the owner of that comment. It was Jacques. I raised my eyebrow at him in an invitation to continue. Delta's farther away from GL 877, so from that point of view, Gamma is a more likely target. Except that Delta has way higher metallicity, as can be seen plainly in the spectral lines. Maybe the others will skip the closer system for the better system. They already bypassed Gamma once. I closed my eyes for a moment. An undercurrent of muttering passed through the room. It's a point, Jacques. We won't know until they move. We have full coverage around GL 877 now, so we can see any departures. I motioned to Garfield, who was standing to one side of the podium. Garfield will give us a rundown on weapons capability. Garfield stepped forward and gave an aborted wave to the crowd. He wasn't in the mood, either. We have fission bombs, thanks to Medeiros. We have fusion bombs, or at least the plans, thanks to the use and Colonel Butterworth. We've been able to size up the plasma spikes somewhat, but there's a practical limit to the size of the magnetic containment. We've probably reached that. It's enough for the smaller others' vessels, but not enough to seriously harm the death asteroids or cargo vessels. Garfield popped up a diagram. We've got the basic concepts of the cloaking figured out, but we weren't able to salvage enough hardware to see how the Brazilians were actually doing it. Which means we're starting from scratch. This appears to have been another one of those accidental discoveries, so it's not just a matter of hours thrown at the problem. We're going to need some breakthroughs. Someone at the front commented, without the cloaking, we can't get the bombs close enough to be effective. They'll just zap them or shoot them down. I think it's safe to assume the others have things like missiles as well. We can get the items close enough, someone else responded, if we transport them in the cargo hold of a battle wagon. There was silence as everyone looked at each other. We all knew what that meant. The battle wagon would be destroyed in the explosion as well. We could put Amos in some battle wagons and make them suicide bombers. I felt my eyebrows climb up my forehead. That was actually not completely idiotic. We'd have to think about how many dreadnoughts we'd staff with Amos, though, or SCUT-based remotes. I looked around. Okay, who is that? Those are some good ideas. Maybe you should be on the committee. Someone stepped forward. It was Elmer. No thanks. I'm just trying to spare my hide. He grinned around at the audience and we finally got some laughter. There's also relativistic ramming, another voice interjected. I shook my head. We thought about that. It would have to be busters, or something that could be directed. And even so, you'd have to launch weeks before the encounter, and you'd have to plan it to intercept the enemy at the right place and the right time. Chances of getting it right are too low. Plus they'll see the approach from a light hour out with Sudar and they just have to dodge. The busters would have a ridiculous tau and wouldn't be able to react quickly enough. If we forget about relativistic speeds and just stick to our normal ramming, they won't even feel it. Or they'll just zap ship busters a couple dozen at a time with those big zappers. There was a short silence as everyone digested this. We knocked around the weapons issue for a while, but soon realized we were all rehashing the same information. I ended the meeting, and we broke into groups. Technically, this was the social part of the get-together, but we've always been a workaholic. Each small crowd turned into a single-issue discussion group. A with ring above B. In one group, Jacques was doing an informal presentation on the POV. I found Bob one that is, in the audience. I stepped up beside him, he nodded in acknowledgement and turned back to the presentation. I wanted to say something to him about the dealt hands to commiserate, or express sympathy, see how he was doing, something. He was effectively banished from their society. He'd pretty much adopted the tribe as his family, and to be cast out like that couldn't be easy. But, you know, we are Bob. Smart, driven, and socially inept. I focused my attention on the presentation. The POV seemed, in many ways, to be very human. Okay, they were furry, had group marriages, and ran around on all fours. But other than that, the POV tended to a sort of natural socialism. They had social institutions for the less fortunate, but those seemed to be supported by private funding. And well supported, too. POV governments, even the types that, on Earth, would have been heavily interventionist, tended to be lean and hands-off. On the other hand, the POV were, by human standards, about as organized as a basket of puppies. I wondered what effect introducing Robert's rules of order would have on them. Jacques finished his presentation, got a round of applause, then the questions started. I grinned, nodded to Bob, and wandered off. So many Bobs. So much intelligence in this room, if I did say so myself. So much control of resources, spread over a sphere that might be approaching 100 light-years in diameter. And we couldn't put together a plan to protect a single planet. With a grimace of self-loathing, I popped back to my own VR. Bob. January 2195. Delta Eridani. Archimedes hovered like a nervous father as Belinda cleaned up her new pup. Buster smiled at him, but I could see an edge of irritation as well. It's the sacred duty of every parent to drive their kids crazy, especially when they become grandparents. I grinned at the thought of my mother and father as grandparents, doing their best to make Andrea and Elena insane. Then I had to wipe my eyes as the thought brought back a cascade of family memories. A quick frame jack allowed me to get it together without missing anything. Belinda handed the pup to her mother-in-law and started cleaning herself. Diana rocked the baby for a few moments, very likely another universal, then smiled at Archimedes. It was a picture postcard moment, if you could ignore the bat ears and pig snouts and fur. And I wanted, more than anything I'd wanted in a long time, to be able to share in it. Archimedes and Buster would have been fine, but Diana would go screeching to the elders at the first sign of a drone. Damn, I disliked her. In his 40s, now, Archimedes still showed exceptional good health. He was, of course, the first generation of Deltans to grow up with the improved nutrition that the Bobby's inventions had brought to the tribe. But even so, he seemed to be aging slowly for a Deltan. I thought of pestering Bill again about the androids, but he had so many projects on the go, not the least of which was the terraforming of Ragnarok. Bill was good-natured about it, but I had to believe that I was being a bit of a pain. Just the same, he said he was close. A decade or two at most. It just wasn't a priority. I suppose I could offer to help out, but realistically the Deltans and the armaments project still occupied most of my time. And anyway, no one likes a kibitzer. I pulled out of the surveillance drone, and picked another that was spying on Caerleon, the new Deltan village. Caerleon was situated in another of the old abandoned village sites, not surprising, since whatever made it a good location the first time would still hold true. With the reduction in gorilloid populations and alteration in gorilloid behavior, the village was a good deal safer now. I smiled sadly at the thought. That was the result of my efforts, and they couldn't take that away from me. Caerleon sat at the top of a rise, barely classifiable as a hill. But the thin soil prevented trees from growing there, resulting in a nice open space. Good for living, and easy to defend. I found myself constantly worried, though, about relations between Caerleon and Camelot. The establishment of the second village had been peaceful in that no one got stabbed on the way out. But the acrimony had been strong, and tensions still ran high between the two villages. It boggled my mind that so soon after almost becoming extinct, the Deltans had managed to develop into some kind of Cold War mentality. The real problem seemed to be that most of the residents of Caerleon were in the adolescent age range, and apparently felt a need to prove something. The antagonism of the Caerleon Deltans concerned me enough, in fact, that I'd set up a surveillance system that would warn me if a significant number of them started a march on Camelot. I was probably just being paranoid, though. I hoped. B. Epsilon. Bill. January 2208. Epsilon Eridani. Others convoy detected. Not good. This was probably it. The others would be heading for Gamma Pavinus to strip it down, leaving a dead planet and an empty system. Okay, Guppy. Details. Convoy is twice the size of the GL-54 convoy. Projected destination is Delta Pavinus. Delta Pavinus? That can't be right. Confirm that, please, Guppy. Convoy trajectory is pointed directly at Delta Pavinus. Barring an unexpected course correction, certainty is 100%. Son of a bitch. The POV. I sent a quick email to Jacques in Delta Pavinus and Claude in Gamma Pavinus, explaining the situation. I followed up with messages to Oliver and Mario. Everyone else would get the announcement on the current events RSS feed. Within seconds, several people popped into my VR. This is not according to plan, Claude said. Jacques shrugged. I mentioned this possibility at a moot a while back. Delta is a richer target. A couple of extra years may be a small price to pay for double the payoff. And they know it, seeing the size of the convoy they're sending. Any chance that's because of us? Not a chance, Claude, I said. They don't know we're in that system in the first place. And anyway, it's not like we've done more than buzz around them like a gnat. We are irrelevant. And we will be assimilated. Oliver gave us a lopsided grin. We all chuckled dutifully, at the attempt at levity more than anything. Getting down to business, how is our troop build-up? I looked at each person in turn. Jacques spoke first. I've got 20 dreadnoughts, each of which has 5 fission bombs and the usual complement of busters for defense. I've been working on some fusion bombs, but haven't gotten them far enough along. And now we're out of time. Claude jumped in as soon as Jacques was done. I've got 15 dreadnoughts, but I've managed to make a total of 6 fusion bombs to replace some of the fission weapons. I looked at Oliver, who shrugged. I'm building like crazy, old man, but I'm too far away to do any good. I'll send out what I have, and maybe they'll be useful for when the others hit Gamma. Assuming they go there next. I looked around at everyone, then shook my head. Another year or two, and we'd have had the cloaking cracked. I'm sure of it. As it is, do what you can. We'll have a moot over the next couple of days, but other than moral support, you guys are on your own. Asterisk asterisk asterisk. The moot was held within a day. It was a somber affair. When I ascended the podium, all conversation ceased. No air horn, no booze. A sea of faces looked back at me, all wearing the same downcast expression. You all know the situation. Anyone have any ideas? I don't suppose your asteroid mover could move POV. I looked at Thor. It probably hadn't been a serious suggestion. Sorry, buddy. In theory, the system can move anything, but right now I'd have trouble getting something the size of a planet to budge. Maybe someday. If we don't mind the inhabitants freezing to death about midway through the move. I nodded at Ben, one of the new batch of dreadnoughts. True. The trip would still take a year or two subjective, and all that time spent without a sun. No bueno for sure. I think we're stuck with the situation as it is. It's going to come down to a toe-to-toe punch-up, and unfortunately before we're ready. The only advantage we have is that we know it's going to happen and they don't. Asterisk asterisk asterisk. I looked over my reports. Claude had launched all of his new dreadnoughts to Delta Pavinus. With their better acceleration, they'd arrive before the others, but only just barely. Any strategies would have to be worked out while they were in transit. Between Claude's group and Jacques, we had 35 dreadnoughts. Jacques would probably get that total up to about 60 by the time Claude's group arrived. It sounded like a lot until you looked at the size of the others' force. 20 death asteroids, 40 cargo vessels, and several hundred attendants. The attendants could be considered equivalent to busters. They were almost certainly Ami-controlled, and could be depended upon to ram an enemy if required. The cargo vessels would be difficult to destroy simply because of their size, but I didn't expect a lot of offensive capability there. The death asteroids would be the big unknown. We were pretty confident that we could withstand their death rays, but we really didn't know what other weaponry they might have in reserve. It was a safe bet that the others had thought of the possibility of running into another species capable of fighting back. I mentioned this to Garfield, and was surprised when he didn't agree with me. I think we've visited pretty much every system that the others have been to, Bill. He waved a hand casually at the star map he'd popped up. And they haven't run into anything like that. So they've never had their butts kicked. Even when we've run up against them, the worst we've done is blow ourselves up. They're arrogant. Borg-level arrogant and maybe even beyond. We're not even assimilation targets to them, we're just food. I thought about this. So you think they may be overconfident? I grinned. Or maybe just appropriately confident. Garfield responded with a rueful chuckle. Yeah, whatever. The point is, though, they may not have a plan B. Howard. December 2210. HIP 14101. HIP 14101 was a bit of a bust. Nice sun, nice spectral lines, but nothing orbiting it worth talking about. A Jovian had managed to set up shop at the outer edge of the comfort zone, leaving no space for any terrestrial planets. I was having a good time investigating it, though. According to Wikibob, no one had yet given a gas giant anything more than the standard cursory once-over. Okay, granted, they're hard to colonize. But still, adapting the drones to operate inside the atmosphere of the Jovian was a constant headache, a game of whack-a-mole, as original Bob would have said. I would get a little deeper in with each new prototype, but I was losing about 1 in 3. But there was lots of metal in this system, and I had all the time in the world. I was relaxing out on the patio when a ding indicated an incoming message. I popped it up and started to read. It was another update from Dexter. More about the colonies, several new cities, population up over 1 million, space industries, yada yada. Oh, Stefan was dying. Halliburton's encephalopathy had been identified within a decade of landing on Vulcan, and appeared to be one of the few diseases that found Terran life compatible. There was no treatment yet, and it was fatal within 6 months. I felt my stomach drop away. Stefan had been my friend for a long time, and the thing with Bridget hadn't changed that. Not really, but it reminded me that I called humans ephemerals for a reason. I'd been lounging around in this system for too long. First, I wrote an email to Bridget and Stefan, and asked when I could arrange a call. Then, there would be other calls to make. Asterisk asterisk asterisk. I pinged Bill, then popped in when I got an acknowledgement. Garfield was there as well, sitting and drinking a coffee. Diagrams and notes covered all the walls. Just your basic, normal, mad scientist lab. Both of them looked down in the dumps. All the Bobs were preparing for the others' arrival in Delta Pavinus. Bill and Garfield no doubt felt pressure to produce new weapons, but you could only do what you could do. Well, I sympathized, but I had immediate concerns. Hey, guys, I said, motioning to the decorations. What's the project? Couple of different ones, Garfield answered. But most of this wall is the android project. That's what you called about, right? I nodded, and examined my shoes for a few moments before looking up. How close are you guys to a more or less human equivalent android? I'm going to have a funeral to attend soon. Bill and Garfield looked at each other, then back at me. Pretty far along, actually. We've got a prototype. It looks like a mannequin, and you wouldn't want to go dancing, but for walking around, I think it's ready. Could I make one in 3 months? Bill thought for a few moments. Right now it's all prototypes and one-offs, with manual assembly. We'd have to put together formal printer plans, but once we have those done, yes. I nodded. It would be in time. You never knew for sure with medical predictions, of course. But one could hope. Send the plans to Dexter at Vulcan when they're ready, okay. Asterisk asterisk asterisk. I'd received an email from Dexter that the android was ready. It was time to arrange a visit. I took a deep breath and placed a phone call. After a few rings, Bridget answered the phone. Howard. Hi Bridge. How's Stefan doing? Bridget hesitated. She looked terrible. Stefan's illness was taking its toll on her as well. Her eyes were red, her hair was gray, her skin was gray. I wanted to take her in my arms and make it all go away. And, I realized with a start, this was the first time that I had articulated my feelings about her so clearly. Stefan won't last much longer. Another couple of weeks is the most the doctors will commit to. I'm so sorry, Bridget. How's he taking it? He's mostly not lucid anymore, Howard. We knew that was coming, and we've said our goodbyes. She blinked back tears as she spoke. Brave words, but the pain behind them shone through. I endured a momentary wave of grief as I realized I wouldn't be able to say goodbye to my friend. I looked at Bridget without saying anything, and she nodded, understanding completely. I tried to say the usual inane words of encouragement. I would have stayed on the line as long as she wanted. But she was tired, physically and emotionally, and she soon begged off. I hung up the phone and put my face in my hands. It took several milliseconds to get myself under control, then I pinged Dexter. Hi Howard. Checking up on Manny. Yep. I looked around Dexter's VR. It was a basic library sort of thing. I'd begun to notice less and less effort by the Bobs, especially the later generations, to put together an interesting VR. I made a mental note to discuss the shift in attitudes with Dexter if the opportunity ever came up. He nodded and popped up a video and some report summaries. The video showed Manny the android in his support cradle. He looked complete. I leaned forward and looked closely at the summary windows. All tests completed successfully, Dexter said. I figured you'd want to do the first activation. Thanks, Dex. Bill's android project had been going on and off for 65 years now, and this was the latest version. Manny consisted of a carbon fiber matrix skeleton, designed and articulated to replicate the human version as closely as possible. Memory plastics that contracted when a voltage was applied stood in for muscles. The artificial musculature was laid down over the skeleton in the same layout as human musculature. The result was something that should be able to move, behave, and appear realistic. And neural feedback from the android would ensure a realistic experience for the operator. Unfortunately, human-appearing skin and hair were low on the priority list. Right now, Manny did indeed resemble a mannequin more than anything else. No hair, pale plastic texture skin, and gray, staring eyes. According to the specs, facial muscle control was still a little spotty. I had a quick glance at the deficiencies list. Well, Bill had said it was a prototype. Jacques. September 22/12. Delta Pavinus. Guppy popped into VR. New memory core is online. Good. It was getting a little tight. Have the drones resume the full program. Guppy nodded and disappeared. I had implemented a plan to record as much of the planet as I could before the others got here. Not just POV civilization, either. Plants, animals, scenery, geology, anything and everything I could think of. I built a standalone set of stasis chambers well in advance of the colony ships, and now I was slowly stocking it with genetic material from every species that I could get a needle into. A very informal and ad hoc genetic diversity vault, in essence. I had no overall organization, as I'd had no time to catalog and categorize the life on Delta Pavinus 4 into any kind of system. I was, in effect, stealing a strategy from Noah and treating everything as a kind. The recordings would help with identifying species and such later, if there was a later. I was also recording POV societies, cultures, and languages. Between all the spying and recording, my data storage requirements were massive. Guppy had just done the 3rd upgrade since I'd started the project. I estimated there was at least one more upgrade coming. I had played with the idea of contacting some POV on the sly, perhaps to get a personal account of life. But Bill had convinced me that it would be cruel at best, and at worst, ghoulish. Instead, I operated as a passive observer. Our technology was much better than the Victorian-era POV sciences, but even so, things didn't always go perfectly. There'd been a couple of sightings, and POV society now had their own version of conspiracy theorists and flying saucer nuts. It made me wonder if the human equivalents had been based on some kind of reality. I tried to imagine some alien version of replicants hanging around Earth and kidnapping people. Nope. Especially with the anal probe thing. Just, no. Asterisk asterisk asterisk. Since the plan involved kidnapping 20,000 POV, I wanted to have a pre-selected target group. Running around, grabbing people until I hit my quota, just didn't strike me as efficient. I spent some time doing a census of small towns until I had found 2 that came in just under 10,000 souls each. I could, if necessary, top up the numbers from what appeared to be nearby military bases. The 2 towns, Mhidrkva and Itsikva, were like small-town USA rural, residential, stable population, family-oriented. I wanted to document and understand POV society at the grassroots level. On the other hand, I didn't want to go down the road of Bob 1 and end up getting attached to individuals. I had a bad feeling, though, that we Bobs had a shared weakness of some kind, some need for attachment. It would require a delicate balancing act. I picked a house at random in the town of Mhidrkva and set up surveillance. Gnat-sized roamers installed cameras and microphones in the house. I felt dirty, like some kind of voyeur, but reminded myself that I was preserving the record of a culture that would likely not exist in another decade. Asterisk asterisk asterisk. The Los family group seemed fairly average, as POV families went. 6 adults, split evenly between the genders, plus 9 children at various ages. The POV didn't have a large need for privacy, so bedroom organization was based mostly on available space. Furniture tended to move around on a daily basis, depending on mood. Meals were held at specific times, simply because of the logistics of preparing food for that many people. But there was no organization that I could see. My best metaphor was a birthday party attended by 2-year-olds, a total free-for-all. The adults held an assortment of jobs. The POV didn't seem to care about stratification of social classes. The matriarch of the house, de Hajar Los, was on Mhidrkva's town council. She seemed intelligent and, for a POV, very level-headed. I made a point of tagging her for special handling, if and when I settled in for some long-term spying on people's lives. Howard. January 22/11. Vulcan. Okay, here goes. This was the 3rd time I'd said that, but I still hadn't opened the cargo bay door. Stage fright, for sure. Manny would never be mistaken for human. He was a giant step down from Mr. Data, in fact. But I had told Bridget I would be there, and I was going to keep my promise. I took a deep breath. Manny performed the motion, not that he needed oxygen, and commanded the door to open. I stepped out and looked around. I had landed the cargo drone in the parking lot of the funeral home. A small crowd of people was gathered in front of the building entrance, watching. I guess they'd been waiting for me. I activated magnification for a moment and recognized several people, including Butterworth. I walked toward the group, concentrating on not falling flat on my face. I'd practiced beforehand, but this was my first physical public appearance in almost 200 years. Nervous didn't even begin to cover it. Butterworth nodded to me. Not bad, Howard. I'm sure you'll continue to improve the product. I nodded back. There wasn't enough facial control to smile, yet, and I didn't trust my voice right at that moment. We stepped into the building, where Bridget was waiting. She smiled, and my heart was almost wrenched out of my chest at the sadness there. She'd been with Stefan for 18 years. She stepped up to me and said, Howard, I'm glad you came. Can I hug you? Yes, of course. Manny has full sensory input. It'll be my first real hug since I, died. Wow, almost a total foot-in-mouth moment. Since I became a replicant. She wrapped her arms around me and hugged, and I could feel every bit of it, from her head against my cheek, to her breasts against my chest, to her arms around my back. The moment lasted an eternity, and a fraction of a second. Bridget stepped back and looked into my eyes, and I tried to re-engage my brain. I finally managed. It's good to see you. A small, panicked corner of my mind wondered if Manny had faithfully rendered my imitation of a fish trying to breathe. I hoped not. I looked towards the coffin. I guess replication wasn't an option. Catholic, remember. Bridget gave me a wan smile. I don't think the Archbishop would approve. I wanted to ask if she would reconsider it for herself, but this wasn't the time or place. This was the memorial. The funeral mass had already been held, and I hadn't actually forgotten that Stefan was Catholic. I would have been a distraction, to put it mildly. Bridget had been careful with who she invited to this event, to prevent any kind of awkwardness with yours truly. We stood around and talked, compared memories. I met Bridget's children, Rosie, Leanne, and Howard, who answered to Howie. He would have just turned 13 by the old Earth calendar, and seemed uncomfortable with his height, as if he'd just been through a growth spurt. Howie bombarded me with questions, while the 2 girls stood behind him and looked on with wide eyes. Turned out Stefan had told stories about me. I told Howie a few stories about his father. As I did, memories of our early days on Vulcan flooded back. Stefan had always accepted me as just a guy he talked to on the phone a lot. There'd never been any awkwardness, any reserve. It hit me that he was the best friend I'd had since well before I died. I scheduled a good cry for later, when I was alone. Reno S. Bridget came over to stand beside me, a plate of food in her hand. I looked down at it, the usual mix of hors d'oeuvres, meat slices, and crackers. Bridget saw my glance and asked, Can you eat? Not yet. Bill's going to engineer Manny to be as human-like as possible, eventually. He's been distracted with the others thing, though. I'll eat something in VR. Bridget looked at her children, at her plate, everywhere but at me. I knew the conversation we'd had before I left Vulcan was still hanging there, between us. I sighed, and experienced a moment of panic when I realized that the sigh was audible. We'll talk some other time. You're not leaving right after the memorial, are you? Bridget had a small smile on her face. Well, physically I'm about 19 light years away, Bridget. SCUT remote capability is making distance mostly irrelevant. Manny will go into storage when I'm done with him, so there's no leaving as such. I'll always be around, whether by phone or in person, so to speak. I looked around. The two girls had wandered off, but Howie was glued to our conversation. ****. How'd it go? Bill's posture reminded me of Bridget, the day we introduced our product to Butterworth. I guess I should have expected it. This was a potentially watershed moment for the Bobs. Real physical contact would change all of our interactions. Bill and Garfield had both popped in as soon as I came back to VR. Dexter was there, as resident Bob. And Bob 1 had shown up as well. I gathered from conversation that he'd been harassing Bill for years about the androids. It worked, I said. It was a controlled environment, and everyone there was expecting me, of course. I don't know about going out in public, but it's a start. And a successful one. Bob was nodding his head repeatedly. I wondered for a second if his avatar had gotten stuck in a loop. But no, that was just excitement. I accepted the inevitable, and settled into my chair for the debriefing. But how did it feel? Bill fairly glared at me with the intensity of his question. I had a momentary image of him reaching down my throat and ripping the answer out of me. I snickered, which got me a couple of concerned looks. Compared to VR. I looked up for a moment, organizing my thoughts. It's an order of magnitude more real. I don't know how much of that is psychological, just from knowing that it is real. But I think the VR only provides the sensations we've programmed it to provide, while Manny gives us everything, expected or not, relevant or not, and not under our control. Think of it as the difference between trying to tickle yourself versus being tickled by someone else. It's an entirely different, far more intense experience. Yeah, Bill responded. I tried to get some of that back with the baseball games, but I think it still falls short. Don't get me wrong, Bill. It's not like I expect us to all fall over and go crackers. The VR saved Bob 1, and it saved all of us. We all agree on that? I shrugged. But it's not the full-on experience. We've forgotten what that's like. Today just reminded me. I looked at Bob, who had finally gotten the head bobbing under control but was now bouncing on his toes. An arched eyebrow made him blush and stop the motion. I think the Android project should be bumped up in priority, Bob said. Bill rolled his eyes. There's a surprise. You willing to help? You have the free time, right? Bob looked abashed, and Bill winced at the unintentional cheap shot. Sorry, buddy. Didn't mean that the way it came out. Bob shrugged. I get it. And yeah, I do have a lot of free time these days. Maybe this will help. Bill popped up the project notes and schematics, probably rushing to change the subject. Garfield moved in, and the conversation went all technoid. I sighed, stood, and waved to everyone, then popped back to my VR. I had some thinking of my own to do. Howard. May 22/11. HIP 14101. Bridget's voice sounded tired. She was looking better, though, at least over the phone. Her color was coming back, she was starting to take care of herself again. I ached to say something, to take her hand, I needed to cut off that train of thought. I silently chanted ephemeral a half-dozen times. It didn't help. But it wouldn't be me, would it, really? Bridget's image in the video window smiled. Her sad smile was a pale ghost of the high-wattage grin that I remembered from better days. I swallowed and, after a false start or two, replied, that's a philosophical argument that I freely admit I'm not able to be objective about. I'm not original Bob. I'm not even Bob 1 or Will or Charles. But I'm me, and I feel just as alive as original Bob did. I stood up and began to pace around my apartment. The image that Bridget's phone displayed to her would, of course, stay centered on me. It would be you in very real ways, Bridget. I don't know from souls, but in every other way, you would live on. I mentioned the idea casually, Bridget said after a moment of silence. The girls looked horrified. Even Howie looked unsure. And you know he's all about you and the other Bobs. I smiled in response. Bridget's son was certainly my biggest fan. I hesitated before continuing. Look, Bridget, it's not like any decision is irrevocable. Except the one that's in force if and when. I checked with Benning. All you need to do is have her record a video call where you state your wishes. It counts as a codicil. You can record a new one anytime. I know, Howard. And for the moment, at least, I'll have to pass. I sighed, defeated. Okay, Bridget. But I'm still going to build the equipment. At least we don't have to behead and freeze you nowadays. The stasis pods will do a much better job of preservation. And the scanners are pretty straightforward. Plus, it's not necessarily just you. I stopped abruptly as a thought hit me. I cued it for consideration after the call. Bridget looked at me with an arched eyebrow, but I didn't explain, so she dropped it. I hope you won't be upset at me for this, Howard. I still want you to visit and all. Of course not. It's your decision, Bridget, and I'll respect that. And yes, I'll visit when I can. I gave her an apologetic shrug. Manny is getting a makeover right now. Bob 1 is insanely OCD when he's motivated, no surprise to anyone, and he's been improving the android tech at a furious pace. I chuckled. Bill admitted to me that he's a bit embarrassed. He worked on the project for decades, and Bob's leaving him in the dust in a time span of months. So Manny will be a little more human next time I see you. Actually, Manny will look like original Bob, from what I'm told. Believable hair and skin, and so forth. And he'll be able to eat. Although he won't never mind. TMI. She really didn't need to know the ultimate fate of the meal. Bridget laughed. She knew exactly where my mind had gone. Just one of many things I loved about her. So we can finally have dinner together. I smiled and nodded. Finally, a real date. Asterisk asterisk asterisk. Butterworth. Bill stared at me, eyebrows climbing his forehead. Well, granted, Riker will probably have a cow, which will be ironic. But Butterworth has got to be in his 80s now, if not more. The guy's like an Egyptian mummy. He just gets drier and more leathery. Maybe he's a pack protector. Bill grinned at me. I rolled my eyes. Honestly, sometimes the early generation Bobs were a bit weird. Yeah, anyway, he's military. Or ex-military, whatever. Maybe he can help with the war. Interesting thought, Howard. I'm not against it, by any means. We should run it through a moot before bringing it up with Butterworth, though. I nodded, unfazed. Moots were held weekly, these days, because of the other's threat. I wouldn't have to wait long. Asterisk asterisk asterisk. I'd never seen Butterworth actually speechless before. I'd seen him trying not to explode, I'd seen him explode, I'd listened to him explode. This was new. No. Butterworth stared into the video window, his jaw hanging slightly open. Finally, he found his voice. You want to replicate me? Well, eventually. Not like this week. The process can't be done on a living person, not if you want to be left with a living person afterwards. But I'm building the equipment for for any such circumstance, and it occurred to me that you would be valuable for the war effort. Butterworth looked down at his desk in silence. Then he looked up and smiled. Sure, why not? Well, that was easy. Okay. I'll send you a file with some information. You'll need to update your will. Butterworth nodded and ended the call. Bob. June 2213. Delta Eridani. Charlie hung in the rack, powered down and looking boneless. The Deltan android looked utterly convincing. I had put a lot of effort into getting the fur right, both in texture and layout. I didn't want Charlie to come across like all the bad ape and werewolf costumes from 20th century movies. This needed to be believable. I realized that I was stalling. The android had been checked out every which way, and it was now time to put up or shut up. Sighing, I ordered the cargo drone to open the hangar door, while I activated Charlie. I turned my head and looked out the cargo bay doors. It took a moment for my eyes to adjust to the bright daylight outside. I undraped myself from the support rack and, staggering a little, walked to the doors. I stood for a moment, looking around at the forest. I'd seen all of this many times, of course, from the various drones, but there was something viscerally different this time. I was here in some undefinable way. It might be as simple as the feeling of the breeze lightly ruffling my fur, or the smell of the damp leaf layer that formed the floor of the forest. I spared a moment to grin with unconstrained joy, which the autonomic interface converted to a spread-eared, wide-eyed expression appropriate to a Deltan. Stepping out onto the surface of Eden, I looked down at the ground, feeling the slightly slimy texture as the decaying leaf fragments squished between my clawed toes. Dappled sunlight flickered as the tree branches and leaves moved in the breeze. With an effort, I brought myself back on task. I triggered the heads-up display and pulled up a local map. The image hovering in my line of sight showed my location, and the location of Archimedes relative to me. I turned to line him up, and began to walk. Asterisk asterisk asterisk. I spotted Archimedes through the underbrush, the observation drone hovering near his shoulder. He casually worked a small flint core as he waited. It appeared I was far more nervous about this meeting than he was. Or maybe that was his way of coping. Well, whatever. Showtime. I walked towards him, and said his name as soon as I was within conversational distance. He looked up, and his eyes went wide. Springing to his feet, he squeaked, "Bobby." I grinned at him as I approached. I opened my mouth to respond, but stopped in surprise when he jerked back and exclaimed, "Woof. Wow. Problem. Sorry, Bobby. You smell. Kind of like the drones, especially when a new one is delivered. And also a bit like the ashes from a cold fire. You definitely won't fool anyone." Ah crap. I rolled my eyes in frustration. I didn't think of that. Deltans depend much more on the sense of smell than humans do. Is it really bad? Not as long as I'm upwind, no. He grinned at me. Gotcha. Okay, I'll go work on it. How about the rest? Does it look okay? Archimedes cocked his head one way, then the other. You move in a sort of jerky way, like a pup when he's learning to walk, but maybe that'll go away. What's more weird is that your fur pattern is exactly the same on both sides of your body. No one is like that. It stands out. Of course. I'd made Charlie completely symmetrical. I would have to fix that. And the odor. I needed to smell like a Deltan, and more importantly like an individual. I took a deep lungful of Archimedes, cataloging his odor and the lingering essence of what had to be Diana. It wasn't insurmountable, thank the universe. Just chemistry. Got it. Okay, Archimedes. I'll go away and fix this stuff. I can see you trying to stay upwind of me, even though you're being polite about it. I chuckled. Having been downwind of a couple of people who needed showers, in a former life, I can relate. Archimedes looked slightly confused, but nodded. I waved goodbye and turned to walk back to the cargo drone. Asterisk asterisk asterisk. Charlie the android, take 2. I walked up to Archimedes and spread my arms, palms forward, in a gesture. He took a deep sniff, cocked his head, and nodded. You're walking better, as well. I guess that's just practice, like with children. And your fur pattern is better. It's very simple, but I know a few people like that. You'll just be forgettable. He grinned at me. I laughed in response. Well, that's fine. The last thing I want is to attract attention. Now, will I be questioned if I enter Camelot? No, I don't think so. Archimedes turned and gestured towards the village, and we began walking. I silently ordered the drone to return to standby. Camelot is so big, now, he continued, and Caerleon is growing as well. Even with the tension between us and them, a certain number of people still move back and forth. It's not like there are rules about it. He gave me a sideways glance and a knowing grin. I pantomimed silent laughter at him. Archimedes and I had talked about many things over the decades. I think he now understood that I wasn't some kind of supernatural being, just someone with more knowledge than him. In a society where very little changed from generation to generation, it was easy to think of the way things are as some kind of natural state. But Archimedes had seen enough new knowledge in his lifetime to understand that when you went from not knowing something to knowing something, it changed the way you lived. With the loss of that awe had come a much deeper friendship, and a better understanding between us. Archimedes thought a lot of the things humans took for granted were hilarious. Like the idea of rules for everything. Deltans simply wouldn't stand for such regimentation of their lives. I found myself coming around to his point of view more and more. In short order we arrived at Camelot. With an effort of will, I suppressed the Monty Python skit from my mind. As we walked across the land bridge, I looked ahead at the village proper. It was a sea of Deltans, in groups around the central fires, and smaller groups around individual fire pits. I could see Archimedes' point. No one would be able to keep track of this many people. Really, based on the old definition of a village where everyone knew everyone else, this could be thought of as an unhealthy development. Caerleon wasn't much better. I wondered if the Deltans had a higher tolerance for crowding, or if they had developed a reluctance to split off villages because of the gorilloid and hippogriff threats. I resolved to bring it up with Archimedes when time permitted. We moved toward Archimedes' Hecke. There I saw Diana, Buster, Belinda, and a couple of generations of children around the fire. Buster's siblings had long since moved on to their own fire pits, but Buster had stayed close with his father. I was glad of that. So, Diana. I was unreasonably nervous. Really, how could she associate me with the Bobby? I appeared to be some random Deltan. Just the same, I couldn't shake it. We sat down at the fire, and Archimedes introduced me to the adults using a common Deltan name, which I instructed the translation routine to render as Robert. I performed the proper earwaggle greeting to each. Diana didn't even twitch, and I relaxed. I noted that Diana was looking old and frail. It confirmed my feeling that Archimedes was aging more slowly than average. Probably the same gene responsible for his increased intelligence was affecting his lifespan. I felt a moment of relief that she might be gone soon, then a spike of shame at the thought. I might not like her, but she was Archimedes' life mate, and he was my friend. The kids, I realized with a shock that these were Buster's grandchildren, had started a game of tag while the adults talked, and one of them barreled into me. There was a moment of tense silence, then I laughed and poked the child with a finger. The tension dissolved and Diana passed around some jerky. Just family. Bill. February 22, 17. Delta Pavinus. All warfare is based on deception. Sun Tzu, Art of War. The defensive crews were less than a week away from Delta Pavinus, and their Tau was now down to the point where it was worthwhile having a conversation. Rather than asking them to jack up to our time rate, we would be slowing down to theirs. Because of the numbers, I was hosting the meeting in the Moot VR. First and most significant, I said, is that we've cracked the cloaking tech. It took a lot longer than I expected, so Jacques has only been able to retrofit about half of his nukes. There's no time for you to do anything, so all the non-stealthed hardware including Bob's is going to be considered decoys. I looked around the room at a sea of somber faces. We'd all gone into this with the attitude that it was probably a suicide mission. With remote backups, suicide missions weren't as final as they used to be, but still, the person restored from a backup was not the person who created the backup. It was some comfort to know that your memories would go on, but it didn't feel that it would be personal in some way. I glanced at the status window that I had put up. It showed the other's armada only 2 days farther out. We had very little time to deploy a defense. How are we doing this, then? Asked Andrew, one of the squad leaders. I nodded to him, acknowledging the question. I've discussed strategy with Butterworth. Unfortunately, most space battle strategy is theoretical, since there's only been one space war. But I discussed options extensively with him, and the colonel did have some suggestions about deployment. He can't be personally involved, of course, since he operates on biological time. For what it's worth, I'll be acting as his proxy. There were silent nods around the circle. I added arrows and icons to the status window. Your group is coming in from this side, and Jacques' group will be coming in from here and here. We'll hit in 3 waves, staggered so we're not taking each other out. Hopefully the others can't redeploy defenses quickly enough and we'll have to split their assets into 3 groups instead. The animation in the window played out a visual of my description. While the others are fending us off, the stealth bombs will come straight in. We hope that they will be able to get in close and do some significant damage. I sat back, chin in hand, and studied the graphic. There was no subtlety at all. On the other hand, it was nice and simple, with few unknowns. Asterisk asterisk asterisk. The first attack group was 5 minutes out when the others registered their presence. The group's trajectory brought them in at 30 degrees off of their approach line. I could see in the SUDAR window that the others were deploying drones to act as a first wave of defenders. There wasn't enough detail at that distance to be able to tell, but we assumed they were rotating the death asteroids to target us as well. There was very little conversation as we approached. Each Bob presumably took the time to make peace with his own thoughts, or update his backup. Either or. At about 3 minutes distance, there was a whoop from one of the dreadnoughts. Just took a hit from a death ray, he announced. I got sparks, but no significant damage Alpha and Beta Epsilon. I smiled but didn't comment. At this distance, even a version 3 Heaven vessel would have survived. We had to assume they were either massively overconfident, or that had been just a probe of some kind. At least one death asteroid was now discharged. It was unlikely it would be able to recharge in time to participate further in this battle. At 1 minute, I activated the general channel. Time to rock, boys. Deploy all busters and nukes. Let's light up the sky. The Bobs did as ordered. 75 ships became almost 400 signatures. Now the others would have to react. Death zaps would simply not be an option for taking us down. And sure enough, SUDAR indicated a massive rearrangement of vessels. We had a couple hundred drones to deal with. Statistically, we should be able to get through the defenders with about half of our units, but that wouldn't be enough to take the others' main vessels down. I was sure the others must be smiling or whatever they did with glee at our pathetic showing. And finally, contact. Andrew's group was the first to pass through the others' armada. At the speeds they were traveling, there was no chance of any actual visual contact. Star Wars notwithstanding, ships didn't buzz around each other like World War II fighter planes. Everything happened in microseconds, and showed up only in status windows. Results from the first pass showed we'd lost about half of our busters and bombs, and 8 dreadnoughts, but we'd taken out about twice as many of them. That was pretty good, and should wipe the smile equivalents off of the others' face equivalents. Apparently the others agreed, because half of the death asteroids released zaps at our armada. Report, I ordered on the general channel. Responses came back. No further Bob casualties, although a couple of the dreadnoughts were doing emergency repairs. They must have been caught square in the middle of a beam. However, the bombs and busters weren't particularly shielded, and any unit caught anywhere in one of the death rays was dead. We had made a decision, based on this likelihood, to equip these units with regular radio comms only. No advanced SUDAR, no SCUT, and no chance of giving anything away to the enemy. The second wave came in right away, not giving the others time to regroup. They approached from 30 degrees off the others' flight line as well, coming in from a vector at 120 degrees of rotation. I watched in the status window transmitted by the group leader. The second wave passed through the others' armada as quickly as we had, but with much less organized resistance from the others. We were able to put several nukes into a couple of big cargo carriers, and even into one of the death asteroids. The nuke must have hit a charged accumulator of some kind, because the pyrotechnics were truly epic, far more than could be accounted for by a low-yield fission bomb. Twin jets of white-hot plasma, glowing right into the X-ray band, shot out of the vessel in opposite directions. The surface of the death asteroid peeled back, then it completely disintegrated, spewing pieces in all directions. Cheers went up from all the video windows. The others responded with a volley of something, possibly drones, possibly missiles aimed at the receding attack group. The bogies displayed truly incredible acceleration, in the hundreds of Gs. It took only moments for us to find out what they were. Fusion bombs. The second battle group had been clustered together, no reason to scatter, as far as they knew. Now they were melted slag. We'd lost 25 dreadnoughts and a couple hundred drones. Bobs looked at each other, stunned. But our third battle group was coming in, and we had no time to mourn. I sent a quick IM to the group leader, instructing them to scatter at the end of their pass. The others started moving their defenses to the point a further 120 degrees around, where they expected us to come in, given a symmetrical series of assaults. Exactly what Butterworth had suggested they'd do. Our third group came in only 10 degrees off the first group's path, 130 degrees away from where the defenses were forming, completely blindsiding them. The dreadnoughts and drones tore through the defenders like tissue paper. Lobbed fission weapons took out 2 cargo vessels and another death asteroid. As the battle group exited the theater on the far side, they scattered. The others launched another volley of fusion drones in pursuit. The Bobs had a massive head start, but the pursuers had that ridiculous level of acceleration. It was a foot race we couldn't win. Everyone was intent on the developing drama, which left the door open for Butterworth's next suggestion. A trio of lonely nukes, on ballistic trajectories, with virtually no emissions, now sailed in from the vector from which the others had been expecting the third attack. 3 flashes, and 2 more cargo vessels were drifting, offline. I imagine, somewhere in one of the death asteroids, some other's general was screaming invective at his subordinates while veins pulsed on his neck and forehead. Or some equivalent. In any case, the others apparently decided to finally take us seriously. A massive series of SUDAR pings emanated from their fleet, swamping our receivers. The transmission power was truly incredible, and my jaw dropped at the readings. I looked at one of the other Bobs. The sheer power behind that broadcast said, better than anything else they'd done, that we were gnats. And more to the point, it lit up every vessel and drone in the immediate area. Whether it would reveal our last surprise or not, well, we'd know in a few moments. It did. The others launched a dozen fusion drones straight forward along their flight line, where several cloaked fusion bombs were approaching. This would have been our coup de grace. Instead, it would be little more than a parting shot. I instructed the incoming nukes to begin evasive maneuvers. The others might not be able to maintain a continuous bead on the cloaked units. The others' fusion drones deployed into a defensive grid and detonated simultaneously. Not bad, Charlie said. They estimated that pretty well. I checked status. They took out 2 of ours. The last one still looks operational. I don't think they have time to do anything about it. It's also interesting that they haven't broadcast another ping like the last one. Like the gamma ray blasts, it probably requires a recharge. I nodded distractedly while I guided the last cloaked fusion weapon right into one of the death asteroids. It detonated perfectly. When the flash cleared, there was nothing left but scattered debris. We were done. We'd used up everything we had. Our battle groups, what was left, were heading away from the others' fleet at far too high a velocity to be able to turn around in any reasonable interval. By the time we could get back in the game, the others would be at the POV home planet. 8 death asteroids and 11 cargo carriers were still under power. If they decided to continue on and rebuild in the system, there would be nothing we could do. We held our breath as the seconds ticked by. No change. I sat, stunned, as the others continued on towards Delta Pavinus and the POVs. We'd failed. Incoming message. In Mandarin. I was almost doubled over with nausea, but it was logical to find out what they had to say. Put it on, Guppy. You have proven to be more than food. You are pests. We will harvest this system, despite your pathetic attempts at defense. Then we will harvest your Sol and Epsilon Eridani systems. And your species will end its existence in our larders. Fuck. I tried to open a chat with Jacques, but got nothing. I pinged Andrew instead. Hey Andrew. Any idea where Jacques is? Hey, Bill. Sorry, Jacques was killed during his group's attack. We have a differential up to the last few minutes, so we'll be restoring him as soon as we have a new vessel. Crap. I rubbed my forehead. We had some spare matrices, but it could still be days before we were able to get that done. Andrew interrupted my train of thought. Did he ever follow through on that plan to kidnap some POV? Yeah. Kind of a worst-case response. I've triggered implementation already. We'll get 20,000 POV off-planet before the others get there. We're not going to be gentle about it, though. We can't afford to have a discussion and ask for volunteers. The POV were now an endangered species. I just hoped that Jacques had taken plant and animal specimens and such. Phineas. February 22, 17. Delta Pavinus. I closed the connection with Bill and turned to Ferb. The defense of Delta Pavinus had failed, and we now had to compound the karmic deficit by ripping up to 20,000 people from their homes by force. Jacques had put a lot of thought into the problem, and Ferb and I had expanded on the plan once we'd come online. It wasn't going to be pretty, but there simply wasn't time for explanation and debate. It should have helped that the people we were going to snatch would otherwise die. It didn't. Jacques had selected 2 towns of the right size, in different parts of the target country, to maximize genetic diversity while still retaining community. We carried specialist drones in our holds, ready to do the deed. I hovered over my town, Mhijr, in the dead of night. If this was Earth, it would be about 3 a.m. A dog barked well. The local equivalent of a dog did the equivalent of barking, but otherwise, there was no movement. Without an electrical grid, most places still went totally dark once everyone went to bed. I sent out the first wave of drones. These were equipped with canisters of a heavy, odorless gas that we'd developed. It would render the victims unconscious for up to 4 hours. By then, hopefully, we'd have them all in stasis. The drones performed their task, then headed back to the cargo hold, and the second wave of drones exited to collect bodies. Each drone could hold 2 adult POV. It would take about 50 trips per drone to collect the full 10,000 people. I hoped that we would come up under 10,000 in total rather than have to leave people behind. I dreaded what anyone would have to go through, waking up to find that almost everyone in their town had disappeared. It would be devastating, even without the inevitable suspicion that would fall on them. The operation completed flawlessly. Some comments over the SCUT from Ferb indicated that his end wasn't going quite so swimmingly. I smiled, thinking of the ribbing I'd give him. Then I lost the smile when I realized neither of us would be in the mood. I'd emptied the town, with a count of 9,273. I checked with Ferb, to see what his head count would be like. His town was coming in under as well, so I implemented one of our contingency plans. There were a number of bases within a few hundred miles that housed either standing armies or perhaps some version of peacekeeping forces. I raided 3 of them, and brought my total up to within 100 of my maximum capacity. Some military personnel would be worth having. The gas we had used would biodegrade within hours. By the time investigators were brought in, there wouldn't even be an odor. Assuming they had time to do that before the others got here. I pinged Ferb. Ready to go. He didn't answer for a few milliseconds. I was just opening my mouth to repeat the question when he responded. Yeah, looks like it. Woohoo. I nodded to myself. Yeah, woohoo, indeed. Bill. May 22, 17. Delta Pavinus. The others ignored us. I wasn't sure if they knew we had nothing left, or if they were simply not interested unless we attacked again. But either way, they didn't chase us out of the system or attempt to sweep it for drones. We had a dozen or so stealth drones still in service, so we deployed them to record the harvesting process. This would be the hardest thing I'd ever done, but we needed as much information as possible. The others took a week to set up around Delta Pavinus 4. Then the Death Asteroid started a series of sweeps that eventually covered the entire planet. We couldn't get close enough for a visual, but we knew what was happening. Up to 1 billion sentient beings were being slaughtered, to serve as food and to clear the way for efficient mining operations. Over the next several weeks the others deployed massive printer operations. It was too early to tell for sure, but it looked like at least some of them would be building new cargo vessels. I closed the windows and instructed Guppy to let me know if anything needed my attention. I pinged Jacques, and received an invitation to visit. Jacques had had 10 years to prepare for the arrival of the others, and he'd planned accordingly. He had built 2 colony ships adapted for POV passengers. They now contained 20,000 POV in stasis. We could keep them in that state for as long as necessary. Eventually, the others would leave. We would attempt to restart the ecology, then we'd decant the POV. I didn't look forward to that conversation. Jacques had also built several spare matrices and housed them in the colony ships, ready for any casualties of the attack. He probably hadn't counted on being one of those. Now he was a passenger, with no ship of his own. Still, with the state of our VR tech and SCUT communications, it wasn't a huge disability. More of an inconvenience. I popped in. Hi Jacques. How's the life of a passenger? He shrugged. Meh. I'm more of an administrator right now, trying to clean up and organize the surviving bobs and equipment, and do inventory. Nothing unaccounted for, so we don't have to worry about the others getting SCUT or something similar. I waved that away. I already checked up on that. I'm more worried about the POV. Should we consider moving them to another system? I know what you mean, Bill. Here, they'll be going back to a dead planet. Psychologically, that's going to be devastating. I've got enough seed stock and such to rebuild a basic ecology, but 90% of the planetary diversity is gone for good. So, why not another system? Besides the psychological issues, by the time the others are done with it, there'll be no metal left. The others aren't that thorough. They take like 95% of it, but they don't scrabble for every last gram. Still, it will be a problem if the POV want to rebuild an industrial society. Could we bring in resources from out system? I sighed and shook my head. Theoretically, sure. But then we've got another race depending on us. Another client race. Do you really want to become an overlord? Crap. Jacques sat back and rubbed his forehead. Whatever happened to heading off into the cosmos and exploring? I distinctly remember that was the plan when Bob 1 was heading for Epsilon Eridani in the first place. I know. No one to answer to, no responsibility except to ourself. Maybe we'll get back to that eventually. Right now, though, we've got all these problems, and we can't just walk away. Yeah. Jacques gave me a wry look, with one eyebrow raised. Still, Pacino just keeps looking smarter and smarter. Look, all this is on the agenda for the next moot. It's not going to be a fun meeting. ****. It was not a fun meeting. We had just witnessed the death of somewhere between 500 million and 1 billion people. We Bobs are generally upbeat and optimistic, but this had really kicked the stuffing out of us. I keep telling myself that this isn't the first species that they've wiped out, Howard said, to the room in general. But it doesn't help. This is the first one that we've witnessed, Tony responded. It's just more real, somehow. There were nods, followed by a long silence. From the back, a voice muttered, they need to be exterminated. The crowd muttered agreement. I looked in the general direction of the voice. That's a significant decision. Nevertheless, I'm not inclined to argue. Let's wait a couple of days to let our emotions die down, then take a vote. Leaving outstanding, Thor said, the small detail of exactly how we're going to do that. This comment produced another long silence. No one was really in the mood for deep thought. We'd save this subject for another day. *****. I orbited over Ragnarok, watching listlessly through my forward camera as the planet turned beneath me. After the moot, I'd had some idea of working on my current android, but I couldn't even get up the energy to do that. Funny, since Bob 1 had woken up in New Handletown all those years ago, we'd always seemed to be on top of things. Yeah, there were dangers, there were scary times. I remembered being unsure of whether I'd come out alive in the encounter with Medeiros. And I also remembered being almost unsurprised when he went down. This was the first time that we had completely, unutterably failed at something. This was a total rout. There was no way to wring a moral victory out of it. And worse, I didn't see any way to turn it around. I watched Bullseye slide across my view as I passed that section of the planet. The crater was now a freshwater sea, with a central island. Okay, that was kind of a failure, too. The others had brushed us aside like fleas. They'd stated their intention to hit Earth, and if we tried to stop that, they'd probably just brush us aside again. There was no way that Will was going to be able to get everyone off Earth before the others arrived. Not even a significant fraction. We might, if we threw everything into it, be able to get a couple million out of the way, but no more. And that would only delay the inevitable. The others were coming, and coming to all the possible homes of humanity. We were an endangered species, as long as they continued to exist. Garfield popped in, and we exchanged a few words. He wasn't in any better mood. There would be no cheering up happening here today, not by anyone. He sat and watched the video window with me. The time passed, almost unfelt. Eventually, Bullseye came around and slid across my view again, mocking me with this visible reminder of my fallibility. Nothing like a couple 100,000 tons of ice to make a dent in a planet. Nothing like a couple 100,000 tons. I sat up, abruptly, frowning. Garfield glanced sideways at my unexpected movement. Maybe we'd been looking at this all wrong. Howard. January 2216. HIP 14101. Wow, and I thought the stage fright was bad last time. I'd been staring at the inside of the cargo door for what felt like forever. By this time, Bridget would have given up and gone to bed. I checked the time. 3 seconds elapsed. Oh, 4. With a feeling akin to resignation, I ordered the door to open and walked out of the cargo bay. Bridget stood on her porch, waiting. She gave me a smile and a small, aborted wave as I turned in her direction. I walked toward the patio, cataloging all the sensations I was receiving from Manny, the cool evening breeze, the slight unevenness of the front walkway, the brush of my clothing as I moved, and the disappearance of every inch of distance as I approached her, like falling down a gravity well. Finally, after a million years or so, I walked up the 2 wooden steps, stopped in front of her, and held out my hands. She took them and said, "You're looking good, Howard." I smiled. I'd checked in the mirror a few dozen times, and the smile looked normal, and replied, "It's nice to see you again." Bridget would be 57 by now, physically. She'd stopped dyeing her hair and was showing her natural gray. She had crow's feet around her eyes, and an incipient double chin. I quite literally couldn't have cared less. Bob. November 2220. Delta Eridani. I stood to one side as Archimedes hugged with Buster and his siblings, Rosa and Pete. Diana had died overnight. Peacefully, thank the universe. Deltans didn't cry as such, but their equivalent was just as heart-wrenching. Diana was laid carefully into the grave, then Archimedes and his children each placed one white flower in her arms. As they stepped out of the way, the long lineup of descendants filed past and added more flowers. Diana and Archimedes had done quite well with spreading their genes. When the lineup was finished, 31 flowers formed a large bouquet in her embrace. The family filled in the grave, then placed several large stone slabs over it to protect it from scavengers. When it was done, everyone but Archimedes stepped back. He slowly sank to his knees, leaned forward, and hugged himself. Uttering a low keening, Archimedes rocked slowly back and forth. I popped into VR, shaking and taking deep breaths. Charlie would be fine for a few moments on autonomous control, and I was very close to losing it. I rubbed my eyes savagely, muttered a few curses, then popped back into Charlie. The crowd was slowly dispersing, leaving Archimedes and his children to their mourning. I took the opportunity to look Archimedes over. I had only an estimate of his age from when I first showed up, of course, but I put him at about 70, which put him slightly older than Moses when he passed away, and Moses had been considered ancient. All of which meant that I would probably be attending another funeral soon. I vowed it would be my last. Bill. April 2221. Delta Pavinus. It took a little over 4 years for the others to strip Delta Pavinus. It was an impressive speed, until you realized that exponential behavior was involved. They brought a huge complement of auto factories, which they used to produce equipment, which mined resources for the production of more equipment. At some point, they stopped building equipment and started loading the cargo vessels. Finally, they harvested most of the equipment they'd built. The fleet that left the system consisted of only cargo vessels and death asteroids. Once they were gone, we moved in to examine the damage. The asteroid belt and any small moons in the system had been stripped, of course. What really hurt was the state of Delta Pavinus 4. The others hadn't been concerned with ecological damage, obviously. They'd left the planet a dirty ball of mud. All the green had long since faded to a dull brown. The blue of the oceans was replaced by a mottled gray, and the ice caps had either melted or been coated with dust and soot. Every major city had been demolished. The lack of corpses was, in a way, a blessing. But it left a ghostly, empty tableau that would have been completely appropriate to any of 100 post-apocalyptic movies. I took it as long as I could. Then I turned off the video feeds, put my face in my hands, and wept. Asterisk asterisk asterisk. Jacques agreed that rehabilitation of DP4 would take a long time, but he quite correctly pointed out that flying the POVs to another system far enough away from the others to be safe would possibly take just as long. We had a reasonable candidate. A wandering Bob had found a suitable colonization target at HIP 84051. At more than 40 light-years from Sol, it didn't even rate a name. Just a minor designation in the constellation era. I popped over to visit Will. "Hey guy, how are you holding up?" Riker still wore a haunted look. Homer's suicide had affected him more than anyone would have thought possible. With the perfect memory that being a replicant brought with it, things didn't fade with time. The vengeance that he had extracted had helped some, but there would always be a hole in the Bobaverse. He gave me a small smile. "Holding steady, Bill. You hear about HIP 84051-2? At my nod, he continued, "It was on the discussion agenda, and when I brought up the circumstances, the UN voted to make it available to the POV refugees. Honestly, I think it's a little too far from Sol to be really attractive, anyway." I sat down and materialized a coffee, and took a moment to look around. Will had long since given up the Star Trek motif, and he was going by his first name, I guess number one's first name, anyway most of the time. Now, that was the name that our relatives knew him by, anyway. The VR resembled a housing unit on Vulcan, although I recognized some decor and paraphernalia from original Bob's apartment. I smiled to see the limited edition Spock plaque, signed by Leonard Nimoy, hanging on the wall. Life just keeps getting more complicated, doesn't it? I raised the coffee in salute. Suppose so. Will stretched, then materialized a coffee of his own. I'm beginning to think Bob 1 has the right idea. He's been talking about going out again, once Archimedes is gone. Just point the ship and accelerate for a while. I sighed and nodded. We were, what, 8 to 10 generations deep in Bob's, now? Bob 1 had achieved a kind of legendary status. He rarely showed up at moots anymore, and when he did, it was like a Shatner sighting. I felt a deep sympathy for him. He was the first of us to get emotionally involved with ephemerals, and until Jacques and the Pavs, his had the worst outcome. I understand you're going to wake some Pav and put the question to them, Will said. Yeah. Jacques has an unreasonable attachment to the idea of recolonizing DP4, in my opinion. But he's rational enough to see it. Will returned one of his rare full-on smiles. Well, Bob, right. We laughed together, and I continued, so we'll give them the choice attempt to recolonize DP4, or head for a new world with an already established ecosystem. And a compatible one, as seems to be the norm. I chuckled. I sure wish I could go back and talk to Dr. Carlyle. I bet he'd be tickled that his theories have been so emphatically vindicated. Will nodded but didn't comment. I sat back, and we sipped our coffees in silence, simply enjoying the company and the momentary pause in existence. The Pav huddled in a corner, whimpering. I'd expected a certain level of fear, but the Pav's reaction bordered on xenophobia. But I doubted the recruitment had involved a lot of discussion and consent. Kidnapping was a pretty accurate description. The specimen in front of us was probably still traumatized. At that moment, the door to the chamber opened and 3 more Pavs staggered in. They were still suffering from post-stasis confusion, but they reacted in instinctive Pav pack fashion, by huddling in a pile with our first candidate. The presence of company seemed to calm her significantly. Over the next few hours, we brought in several more Pav, until we had 8 of them in the room. The number was arbitrary, but Jacques' investigation of the species had indicated a general maximum of 8 adults to a family group. We hoped that it was a significant number for them. When they appeared outwardly calm and had started to compare notes with each other, I decided it was time for official first contact. Hello. All 8 Pav went into alert posture. The resemblance to meerkats was even more pronounced than usual, and in better circumstances I would have chuckled at the tableau. Who are you? Where are we? This was not going to be easy. My name is Bill. I'm part of BobNet. The translation routine rendered proper names phonetically, but the sounds wouldn't mean anything to them. Who we are is a very long story. Where you are and why, is a shorter and very unpleasant story. I described the others to them, and explained their habit of raiding systems and killing off planets. A monitor on one wall displayed images of others, the aftermath of Zeta Tucani, and finally the destruction of Delta Pavinus 4. As the images of dead cities, oceans, and forests flashed on the screen, the Pav began to keen. Sitting through that was one of the hardest things I'd ever done, but I had a moral obligation to stick with it. It took a few hours, but we finally got through the whole story. The group seemed perplexed. You want us to decide? To return to Isjan or settle a different world? That is correct. The POC huddled and argued in low voices for several minutes. Hajar, who seemed to have taken on the role of spokesperson, said, Why? Because we don't know you well enough to know what would work best for you. Why not? Because we haven't been studying you for long enough. Why not? Oh, holy. That's not important. We will make the decision if you don't want to, but we wanted to give you the option first. And there are 20,000 of us? Why not more? That's how many will fit into the 2 ships that we were able to build. Why? What are you, a 4-year-old? I would have to nip this in the bud, before I blew a transistor or something. Again, not important now. Are you willing and able to make that decision? If not, let us know and we'll take care of it. We will discuss this. Is there food? You mean at the new planet? Oh, you mean now. Sorry. I'll get some. Fortunately, Jacques had thought of stocking up on standard POV food and drink. I decanted a small supply and delivered it. The POV laid in as if they hadn't eaten in a week. I stared in shock at the free-for-all. So far no one seemed to have lost a limb, but that could just be luck. Jacques chuckled at the expression on my face. No, that's pretty much normal feeding behavior. Miss Manners would never catch on with these people. I shook my head. Count them after they're done, okay. Make sure there are still 8. At Hajar's request, we provided images of the proposed colony planet. It possessed a marginally heavier gravity, with correspondingly thicker atmosphere, but was similar enough to Isjan that adaptation wouldn't be an issue. The flora and fauna would be completely unfamiliar to them, of course, but it didn't include anything too large to deal with. We promised the POV any help they needed, regardless of their decision. They seemed hardened by that, and I privately sighed in exasperation. Again, we were going to be responsible for another client race. If Jacques wanted to be involved, fine, but I resolved to keep my distance. We will choose the new world. Hajar stood tall and spoke with confidence. I knew that the decision hadn't been easy, or unanimous, but I was impressed at their willingness to even make a decision. She looked down, then continued in a softer voice. We do not like the idea of all resources being supplied by you. No offense, but we do not know you. I grinned at Jacques, who smiled back and shrugged. That's fine, Hajar. We'll get started right away. It will be necessary to put you back to sleep. But we'll be gentler, this time. Hajar nodded. By coincidence, a nod meant the same thing to the POV as it did to us. When we awake, we will be there. That's correct. And we will have set up an encampment for you to live in until you can build something for yourselves. Hajar cocked her head slightly. I am curious. Why do you do this? Who is paying you? Or do you expect us to pay you? I chuckled, which the translation routine converted to the POV expression of humor. And a good thing who knew how a human chuckle would come across. We don't use money, Hajar. We have no need for it. This statement produced a look of shock. Apparently capitalism was alive and well in POV culture. After staring at the monitor for a few more seconds, Hajar turned away, while muttering something that sounded like Dazagrile. The routine translated it as critters with broken brains. The POV seemed reluctant to return to the stasis chambers, and generally acted like a bunch of kids trying to delay bedtime. Eventually, though, we managed to cajole them all through the door and into the prep room. Within an hour, they were all squared away. Well, Bill, I guess this is it. Not quite yet, Jacques. A couple of the guys did some scavenging. We've managed to retrieve enough resources to put together a couple of version 3s for you and the other bobs who are bodiless right now. It'll take few months, but at least then you'll be able to ride escort instead of supercargo. Jacques nodded. Thanks, Bill. Let's do that. *****. Finally, departure day. The two refugee ships, officially named Refuge 1 and -2, brought their surge drives up to full power and turned their bows to aim for HIP 84,051. I watched their departure from the forward camera of one of the bobs that was still in system. With the departure of the refugee ships, there was no longer any reason to maintain a presence in this system. It represented our greatest failure, and several bobs had complained that it felt as though it was full of ghosts. Everyone who didn't have a reason to stay had long since left, and now most of the rest of us would be departing. A couple of 8th generation bobs had volunteered to stay behind and do a post-invasion survey. I looked at Andrew across the table, waiting for him to speak. Finally, he took a deep breath and leaned forward to put his elbows on the table. Everyone is gathering at Gamma Pavinus. Threats or no, the others still have a Dyson sphere to build. They won't halt everything while they march off to Seoul. We want to be ready next time. I stared into space, nodding. Meanwhile, Riker has started building dreadnoughts at Seoul, and I'm building a fleet in Epsilon Eridani. Ditto Oliver in Alpha Centauri. We have the cloaking nailed now, so we'll be able to give them a harder time of it. The root problem, though, is still to produce enough ordnance to make a dent in the others' armada. The size problem is still overwhelming. This is all just a delaying action. Andrew shook his head morosely. As long as the others are always making the first move, we can never defeat them. All they have to do is huddle for a decade or two, rebuild, and we're back to square one. We have to take the fight to them. This is true, and you know damned well it's been the subject of many a moot. I glared at Andrew. I have an idea that I'm working on that might form a final solution, but I'm not sure yet if it's even feasible. And even if it turns out to be workable, it's a long game. Meanwhile, we're also trying to gear up to an invasion fleet. Maybe we can drop in on the others and pay our respects. Andrew's only answer was a predatory smile. Endbook 2. Archimedes. Deltan native that Bob befriends. Arnold. Large Deltan warrior. Arthur. One of Riker's clones. Dies in a salvaging accident. Bart. Calvin's clone. Resident Bob in Alpha Centauri for a short time. Bashful. One of Mario's clones. Part of the group that works to identify the others' range. Belinda. Buster's mate. Bender. One of Bob's clones in Delta Eridani. Bill. One of Bob's first cohort of clones. Sets up a skunk works in Epsilon Eridani and acts as the central clearinghouse for news and information. Bob Johansson. An engineer and business owner, who gets killed in a traffic accident and wakes up as a computer program. As Bob 1, the first Heaven vessel. Stephen Brodeur. Security chief on Vulcan, and Howard's best friend. Bullwinkle. Bill's name for his experimental android. Buster. Archimedes' eldest son. Delta native. Colonel George Butterworth. Leader of the Use post-war enclave, and of the Use Vulcan colony. Calvin. One of Bill's clones. Calvin and Gaku battle and defeat Medeiros in Alpha Centauri. Charles. One of Riker's early clones. Charlie. Bob's Deltan-configured android. Minister Michael Cranston. Leader of the Faith post-war enclave, and of the Faith Romulus colony. Cruella. Deltan medicine woman. Dexter. One of Charles's clones, who takes over for Howard at Omicron 2 Eridani. Diana. Archimedes' mate. Deltan native. Donald. Arnold's son. Deltan native. Dopey. One of Mario's clones, part of the group who work to establish the others' range. Minister Sharma. UN rep for the Maldives on post-war Earth. Garfield. Bill's first clone, and his assistant in Epsilon Eridani. Gaku. One of Bill's clones. He and Calvin battle and defeat Medeiros in Alpha Centauri. Guppy. Bob's personification of the Guppy interface. Various Bobs give Guppy different levels of system resources, resulting in slightly different behavior. Hal. One of Mario's clones, part of the group who work to establish the others' range. Hoffa. Deltan native, council leader in Camelot. Homer. Riker's first clone, assists in the Battle of Seoul and invents the farm donuts. Howard. one of Charles's clones. He accompanies the first 2 colony ships to Omicron to Eridani and stays to act as the resident replicant. Howie, Bridget and Stephen's son, named after Howard. Hungry, one of Mario's clones, and part of the group that works to establish the other's range. Linus, one of Bill's clones. He goes to Epsilon Indy and discovers Henry Roberts, the Australian probe replicant. Luke, one of Bob's clones in Delta Eridani. Manny, the first anthropomorphic android, used by Howard on Vulcan. Mario, one of Bob's first clones. Mario is somewhat misanthropic and takes off for GL-54, where he discovers evidence of the others, and sets up a program to determine their range. Marvin, one of Bob's clones in Delta Eridani. Marvin hangs around and assists Bob. Major Escobedo Medeiros, the Brazilian Empire replicant. Brazil sends out a number of copies, which keep popping up to bedevil the Bobs. Milo, one of Bob's first cohort of clones in Epsilon Eridani. Milo goes to Epsilon 2 Eridani, where he discovers the double planets which he names Vulcan and Romulus. He then goes to 82 Eridani where he runs into Medeiros. Moses, Delta native. An elder who teaches Archimedes how to work flint. Oliver, Bill's clone, who sets up in Alpha Centauri after Bart's departure. Riker, one of Bob's first cohort of clones in Epsilon Eridani. Riker takes on the task of going back to Sol to find out what happened, and ends up in charge of the Earth's emigration effort. Henry Roberts, the Australian replicant. Rocky, Garfield's attempt at a flying android. Sam, Exodus 3 controlling replicant. Bridget Sheehan, senior biologist in the Vulcan colony and Howard's eventual love interest. Sleepy, one of Mario's clones, and part of the effort to determine the other's range. Surly, one of Bill's clones and part of the second expedition to 82 Eridani to oust Medeiros. Gudmund Walter, the Spitsbergen Enclave leader on post-war Earth. Vern, one of Bill's clones and part of the second expedition to 82 Eridani to oust Medeiros. Bertram Vickers, head of Vehement. Victor, one of Bob's later clones in Delta Eridani, takes off after Bender to find out what happened to him. Enhance Wybill, Garfield, Calvin, Bart, Thor, Gaku, Linus, Mulder, Johnny, Skinner, Oliver, Con, Elmer, Hannibal, Tom, Barney, Fred, Kyle, Ned, Mario, Bashful, Dopey, Sleepy, Hungry, Hal, Claude, Jacques, Phineas, Ferb, Riker, Homer, Ralph, Charles, Howard, Dexter, Rudy, Edwin, Arthur, Bert, Ernie, Milo, Luke, Bender, Victor Me Agent, Ethan Ellenberg, Steve Feldberg from Audible, my editor, Kat Howard. I leave eternity to thee, for what is man that he should live out the lifetime of his God? Herman Melville. Bob, March 22-24. Delta Eridani. The pigoid erupted from its lair with an angry squeal. It displayed startling speed for something with such short legs. The 2 rock throwers sprinted to the side, fur erect along their spines and ears sticking straight out in excitement. The rest of us set the butts of our spears into the ground and braced them with a foot. And waited. This time, I wasn't an observer. If I had been nervous before, I was terrified now. I could feel the fur standing up along my spine and all the way up to the top of my head. I kept telling myself that I was actually 10,000 miles away, in orbit. Didn't help. My eyes told me the pigoid was 10 meters away, charging at me at what appeared to be about half light speed. Then the animal ran into the spear points. Still not breeding for intelligence, apparently. The spears bowed but held, and the animal slammed to the ground with a final squawk. Bernie sidled up to it and poked it in the face a few times. Getting no response, he waved his spear in the air and yelled, "Hoo!" The rest of us raised a fist and responded, "Ha." Well, that's how the translation routine handled it. Delton's speech sounded more like pigs loudly wallowing, but the software converted everything to human equivalents for me, including names and colloquialisms. Donald slapped me on the shoulder. "Come on, Robert, help me string it up." I tied the back legs of the pigoid, while Donald tossed the other end of the rope over a tree branch. He looked down to check my work before starting to haul and did a double take. "Whoa, that looks like one of Archimedes' weird knots. Where'd you learn that?" "Oops. From Archimedes, of course. He's got hands and hands of different knots. I've picked up a few." Donald nodded, only mildly interested. We hauled on the rope until the pigoid was suspended. I made sure to use only normal Delton level strength and let Donald do most of the work. Then he drew a flint knife and bled the animal. The other hunters started the giving thanks chant. When it was done, we trussed the carcass onto a couple of spears and started back to Camelot. There would be a feast tonight, and I loved barbecued pigoid. Still no barbecue sauce, though. I wondered idly if I should invent some. We were singing a victory chant, and I guess our guard was down. So the group of Deltans that stepped into the path in front of us took us completely by surprise. We came to a ragged halt as they tilted their spears in our direction. It wasn't quite a threat, more like the promise of one. I heard a rustling behind me, and realized that we'd been surrounded. I took a quick look around. The other party outnumbered us by 2. Not insurmountable, but definitely a concern. Very likely they were depending on getting the drop on us, and us not being able to organize a defense. R.A. Nigerian Naira. There had been reports of groups from Caerleon bushwhacking hunting parties, and taking all or part of their kills. It appeared we were the target du jour. The spokesman for the group, I recognized him as an unpleasant character from Caerleon whose name translated as Fred gave us an evil smile. Nice catch, Donald. You've got a lot of pigoid there. I doubt you'd miss a haunch or two. Donald, unintimidated, raised his spear to readiness. There are lots of pigoids out there, Fred. What's the matter, not having any luck? Fred reflexively started to take a step back, then caught himself. Donald wasn't quite as big as his father, but that still left a lot of room for big. People rarely challenged him directly. Unfortunately for me, I was standing up front with Donald, and I had designed my android to be as nondescript as possible: average height, average build, average looks, Joe forgettable, pretty much. So, no surprise that Fred decided to use me as an example. He looked at me. So what about you, cuzzy? You think you'd like to share the wealth? He looked at his friends, smiling. They returned the expressions and moved in. Tell you what, Fred, I answered. Why don't you bend way over, stick your head up your own butthole, and keep pushing until you disappear completely? I smiled at him as innocently as I could. Snickers and guffaws from our group and a few from the other group showed that I'd scored. Of course, I had gigabytes of Earth literature and movies to pull my insults from. In a war of words, the Deltans would be virtually unarmed. Donald gave me a quick, surprised glance. I guess he hadn't been expecting the support. He showed his teeth. Your move, pigoid dropping. Fred glared at Donald, at me, then turned as if to leave. Oh, you have got to be kidding. Cliché, much? And, sure enough, he suddenly turned back and swung at me. I could have stopped and had afternoon tea, and still reacted in time. Okay, I'm a computer, but still. I leaned back slightly and the clenched fist passed right by my face. As Fred continued the rotation, I placed a short jab in in a human it would be the solar plexus. Same effect, though. Fred said oof and dropped to his knees. Now their advantage was down to 1, and we had Donald. Our guys grinned and started waving spear points. Donald and I moved forward, and the other group stepped aside. As I passed Fred, he glared at me. I said, anytime, cuzzy. He didn't respond, but then he was still trying to breathe. There was a huge component of surrogate vengeance in my behavior, of course. I had a lot of years of being on the wrong end of bullying to look back on. But a rational part of my mind told me that I would have to watch out for Fred. Now, Donald slapped me on the back again. I made a point of staggering. I didn't want him to decide we were competing. We finished our hike to the village on high alert. No singing, no joking around. A couple of the guys took the kill to an agreed-upon fire pit to be divvied up. I turned to head back to Archimedes' tent, but Donald put a hand on my shoulder and motioned me to come with him. I realized within moments that we were heading for the council circle. One of the many universals that I'd discovered while studying the Deltans was that politicians and leaders always reserved the best for themselves. The council circle location got full sun first thing in the morning, and was in the shade by late afternoon. A few council members were always at the circle, no doubt trying to look official and stay comfortable. Donald walked up to Jeffrey, the current council leader, and waited to be acknowledged. Jeffrey was a bit of a dick, and liked to keep people waiting, just to show how important he was. Donald accidentally stood in Jeffrey's sun and began cleaning his spear while he waited, the dried pieces of blood and hide landing all around Jeffrey. I looked around and tried to keep a straight face. Finally, Jeffrey accepted the fact that he was being out-ignored. He looked up and gestured for us to sit. We made ourselves comfortable and Donald explained about our encounter with the Caerleon gang. When we were done, Jeffrey made a face. That's now almost a hand of encounters in the last 3 hands of days. A couple of people were stabbed when they refused to give up their kill. I'm going to have to bring this up with the full council. Something has to be done. All by people from Caerleon? I asked. Yes, it looks that way. Leave it with me. I'll get the council started on it. Donald nodded to Jeffrey, and we got to our feet. As we walked away, I said to Donald, do you think it's the one gang, or different ones? Fred's been mentioned more than once. There might be others involved, but it's mostly him and his group. And all lately? What's changed? Donald stared into space for a moment. I don't think it's a case of something changing. It's more likely that Fred just saw a way to take advantage of something that's been brewing for a while. We're just not sure what's behind it. We walked in silence for a few moments while I thought through an idea. I looked up to Donald. I have a plan. Can we get an extra dozen people or so? People who won't mind some close-up action. Donald grinned. Yeah, I think I can scrape that together. I grinned back. Time for some dirty tricks, Earth style. Howard. February 22, 17. Vulcan. Bridget opened the door, looking surprised. I hadn't phoned ahead, and she wasn't expecting me tonight. She started to say, Howard, what? Then my expression must have registered. Howard, what's wrong? She grabbed my arm and dragged me into the apartment. We lost. We lost and now a billion sentients are going to die. I collapsed onto her couch and leaned forward with my face in my hands. The POV. I nodded, unwilling to trust my voice. My God, Howard. Does Butterworth know? Are the Bobs all right? I sighed, and tried for calm. We lost a lot of Bobs, but there are backups. It's not quite the same, of course. I turned to Bridget and tried to smile reassuringly. Riker let Dexter know, and Dexter will be passing the info along to Butterworth or whoever has taken over for him. Are we in danger? Not specifically, Bridget. The others only know about Earth and Epsilon Eridani. But there are almost 200 systems closer to GL 877 than us. All these worlds are ultimately in danger as long as the others exist. And the POV? I've read some of Jacques' blog entries. They sound like an interesting species. What happens to them? I closed my eyes for a moment, hoping maybe I'd be in a different universe when I opened them. No such luck. We've never seen the process, just the after effects. Now we'll be getting a ringside view. The others will kill off all life on the POV home world using the death asteroids, then move in with ants and cargo carriers and strip the planet and the inner system of all metals. And they'll collect all corpses and carcasses. I had to stop and take a few deep breaths. The android body didn't need air, of course, but it was designed to react to emotion, and I was working myself up into a fine conniption. Jacques had a plan to rescue 20,000 POV, but the rest will be dead soon. And the others will have wiped out another intelligent species, another entire planetary ecology. I turned on the couch to face her. There will be a moot today, to try to figure out what we can do. I just wanted a few minutes. Bridget put her arms around me and pulled my head down to her shoulder. Soundlessly, I tried to cry without tear ducts. Marcus. November 22/12. Poseidon. I rubbed the bridge of my nose with thumb and forefinger, shaking my head. Kal waited patiently at the other end of the call. I looked up to see Gina smirking at me. She smoothed her features out quickly, but come on computer, remember? I gave her a quick smile in reply. Still not convinced, Marcus. Kal cocked his head at me in the video window. I sighed. I guess I've been convinced for a while now, Kal. I just didn't believe it, you know. Kal laughed, thus ending the myth that computers are logical. Bite me. I was human once. I sat back in my chair and considered my response. Spike picked that moment to jump into my lap for the obligatory chin scratching. I gave her the proper adulation while I thought through my options. Kal and Gina wouldn't even notice the millisecond pause in our conversation. Kal was an assistant governor on Southern Mat 3, and Gina was a mid-level security officer. I'd become friends with both of them over the last couple of years. As we became more comfortable with each other, they'd each confided an increasing concern about the council's ongoing power grabs. Okay, so we'll take it as a given that the council is no longer even pretending that they'll be instituting elections anytime soon. Or at least not putting much effort into it. It's not proof positive of a totalitarian government, but I'll grant you it's a pretty good indicator. Gina likes to shoot things at the first excuse, but Kal, you're a lot more conservative. The fact that you've bought into this is what really scares me. Gina opened her mouth to retort, but Kal beat her to it. Worst case, we're a long way from crossing any kind of line. If the council gets a sudden attack of sanity to the head, we'll have done nothing indictable, or even embarrassing. And yet, Marcus, before we do anything that we can't take back, I'll want to take a good, long look at the situation. I nodded, mollified. The Poseidon Administrative Council was happy to make use of my services, but I had no real official position or authority. The moment I became a liability, they could cut me loose. Not that I would be devastated by the snub. I wanted the colony to be self-sufficient, if for no other reason than so I could work on my projects in peace. What do you need from me, Kal? I asked. I've been steadily handing over functions to the administration for a decade now. If it came down to a showdown, I'm not sure I could even maintain control of the auto factories. If it comes to that, Kal responded, you're a wild card, and something the council can't control or interdict. At minimum, you'll be a distraction. At best, you'll be able to cause them significant stress. Well, I always wanted to be a pain in the ass, I replied. Mission accomplished? Gina grinned at me. But you're also a public figure, and easy to track. We'll have to be careful about what you're seen doing. I scratched my chin in thought. There are a couple of things I can do about that, Gina. Let me work on it. And the public activity can be used as a red herring. I grinned at her. See, now you've got me doing it. Spies are us. Geez. We talked for a few more minutes, then ended the call. I sat back and stared into space, pondering my options. Like most nerds, I didn't take naturally to intrigue and double-cross. But I could see some simple strategies that would make things a little more difficult for anyone trying to track me. Not to mention an opportunity to make my pet project relevant. Arno, yes. It might be time for a personal appearance. I leaned forward and placed a call to Howard. Howard. November 22/17. Vulcan. I sat, slowly sipping my coffee, and watched the people go by. The mall was busy all the time, it seemed. But then, Landing didn't have a whole lot of shopping malls. Okay, 1. Original Bob had never had time for people watching, and wouldn't have been caught dead sitting around, doing nothing. Being immortal apparently put a different spin on things. Clothing shops, electronics shops, specialty shops selling things like bath products, it all made me feel both at home and nostalgic for home. The familiarity kept bumping up against the simple fact that I was 17 light-years from Sol, in a solar system that was originally the home of Mr. Spock, and on a planet that was destroyed in the movie reboot, but who's counting? Still, there was something about sitting at a table drinking coffee that made it all seem, well, mundane. Bridget would be along soon. I'd elected to wait for her here rather than tag along to the office and be underfoot. Meanwhile, I was enjoying the sensation of being just some random Joe. On my way now. I smiled as I read the text in my heads up. We'd made a point of not planning anything specific today. Lunch, walking around, no big deal. Bridget showed up just as I finished the coffee. I stood, and we exchanged a quick kiss. She gave my hand a squeeze then sat down. I'm starved. Want to try the food court for lunch? Food court. My eyebrows rose. A liquor baroness should have more refined tastes. Let's splurge. How about the Bronto burger? Or we could go for actual food. Bridget gave me the evil eye. I happen to like Bronto burgers, I'll have you know. Brontos, it is, I declared. I stood, offered her my arm. Smiling, she stood, and took it, doing a small curtsy. As we aimed ourselves in the general direction of the desired eatery, I heard a comment from a few tables away. Make sure you hold hands with mommy. The comment was offered sotto voce, and may not have been intended for us to overhear, but the speaker, a zit-faced teenager, had miscalculated. I dug in my heels and turned to glare at him, and Bridget put her other hand on my arm. Howard, really? Consider the source. I looked at the twerp, who was grinning back at me. About 140 pounds soaking wet. Against an android with several times the reaction speed and strength of a human being. Not really a fair fight. I made a point of looking him up and down, then I laughed and turned away. I hoped he got the message. Bridget, meanwhile, was dragging me by the hand. Food. This way? Right you are. Let us go forth and dine on the flesh of the alien Bronto-like thing. We exchanged smiles and continued on our way, but the encounter bugged me. Bridget was now in her late 50s, biologically the time spent in stasis during the voyage didn't count. I, on the other hand, was built to look like original Bob at 31, his age when he died in a Las Vegas intersection. The mommy comment was, unfortunately, mathematically plausible. But there was no way I would let Bridget be subjected to that kind of crap a second time. Asterisk asterisk asterisk. Age hadn't dulled Bridget's appetite at all. She dove into her burger and fries as enthusiastically as any teenager. I ate at a more refined pace, enjoying the flavor but not needing the sustenance. Technically, it was a waste of food, but I did this so seldom, it hardly seemed worth worrying about. How are the kids? I asked her, as much to slow down the carnage as out of a desire to know. Bridget swallowed, wiped her mouth with a napkin, and glared at me. You're not fooling me, bucko. You always wait until I have a mouthful. I grinned, unrepentant, and she continued. Rosie is, well, you've met Rosie, you know what she's like. She's entitled to her opinion and you're entitled to her opinion, as well. Bridget took another bite of Bronto, frowning as she considered her next words. I think it's fair to say she doesn't like our relationship. It's not that she dislikes you personally, Howard. No more than she dislikes most people, I mean. But I think she'd prefer me to stay within my species. I've tried to talk to her about it, but, you know, I grinned at her. There's Rosie's opinion, and then there's, well, no, actually, there's just Rosie's opinion. Yes, like that? Bridget chuckled. Well, I wanted my children to be self-reliant. Mission accomplished, I guess. I've talked to Howie a couple of times, lately, I replied, nibbling at my fries. He's a little more distant than he used to be, but I was ascribing that to him growing up and losing the hero worship. There's probably some of that, Howard, but there's a lot more of Rosie. She won't give it a rest. I shrugged. Look, Bridget, I've made it clear any number of times that you come first. If I create problems for your personal life or your professional life or your family life, I'm gone. Bridget put down the pitiful remains of her burger and leaned forward. She looked me straight in the eyes, my cue to shut up and pay attention. Howard, my relationships are my business. No one else gets a vote. I loved Stephen, and I've mourned him fully and properly. Now, I enjoy your company, and will continue to do so, despite a bitch of a daughter and some zit-faced mouthy mall rat. Do you have something you'd like to add? No, dear. I grinned at her, and she rolled her eyes. Fine. She cleaned up with the napkin and tossed it onto the mangled remains of her meal. Then let's go. I promised to get you some better clothes to drape on that android frame of yours. Threatened. What? Threatened to get me better clothes. Bridget laughed and grabbed my hand to drag me off. Clothes shopping. Even death apparently wasn't an escape. Bob. March 22-24. Delta Eridani. We hoisted the pigoid carcass up, suspended from spears, doing our best to act oblivious to the other group that we knew were watching us. I checked the monitor windows in my heads-up display. We definitely had a covered audience, and they outnumbered us 12-6. I couldn't tell my crew things I shouldn't know, but I could be prepared in case the others did something unexpected. As we started our march back to Camelot, I couldn't help noticing that my crew were really terrible actors. Overly loud comments, uttered with exaggerated inflection, would have made a stage director up and quit on the spot. I needn't have worried, though. Fred and his gang probably weren't listening anyway. They stepped out, front and rear, just like last time. Fred looked at me, standing in lead spot, and smiled his nasty smile. Well, Robert, I see you've caught my lunch for me, and you don't have the big guy to protect you today. Why don't you go ahead and put up a fight, this time? I'd like that. I cocked my head to the side. Well, first, Fred, Donald didn't need to protect me last time. You're just not very good. And if it's a fight you're looking for, today's your lucky day. And with that, 18 Camelot hunters, including Donald, stepped out of the bush behind Fred's gang. The Caerleon group went into a defensive crouch. Several of them tried to inch away and had to be poked with spear tips. In short order, we had them herded into a small group. Fred sneered at me. You think this is going to protect you? You won't always have your friends around, cuzzy. Neither will you, Fred. Fred jerked, taken aback. What? Just what I said. I can wait, and I can watch, and eventually you'll go take a pee or something without your friends covering your ass. I leaned in close. And I'll cut your throat before you even know I'm there. I turned to the rest of the group. This goes for all of you. You go to war with us, you'll be watching your backs the rest of your lives. I never forget. And I never forgive. Fred laughed, a short sharp bark. Nice talk. Nothing behind it, though, really. I smiled at him, and before he could react, I jabbed him in the same place as last time. Down he went. It wasn't a fair fight, of course. I operated at computer speeds, and I was inhabiting an android body with electronic reflexes and several times the strength of a live Delton. But a fair fight wasn't the point. I wanted them to stop stalking Camelot hunting parties. I just needed to make their mortality clear to them. I looked around at the Caerleon gang. They appeared a lot less defiant. Now, today, we'll let you off with a warning. And without your spears. Next time, it's going to hurt a lot more. I signaled to a couple of the guys, and they began collecting spears. Fred's gang was thoroughly cowed now, and didn't put up any resistance. We sent them off, then turned to head back to Camelot. Donald walked beside me. Damn, Robert, that was impressive. But I don't think Fred is that easily dissuaded. You're right, Donald. But most of his followers will be. People like Fred need followers. I'm hoping this will pull his teeth. Donald nodded, then started up a marching chant, and everyone else joined in. I wished I was as confident. Bill. January 22-23. Epsilon Eridani. Garfield shook his head in awe. It's like those cartoon muscle cars when we were a kid, the ones that were all engine. The images in the video windows were indeed impressive. Epsilon Eridani 1, now in a completely new orbit around its sun, was surrounded by 800 mover plates. Trailing it by 1,000,000 kilometers or so was one of the larger X-moons of Epsilon Eridani 3, with a similar array of plates. It had taken years to not only build all the equipment, but also to figure out how to control the assemblies. 40 supervisor Amos were dedicated to maintaining and balancing the fields for each planet, in addition to the Ami in each plate. And overseeing each planet would be my latest clones. They'd named themselves Daedalus and Icarus, which I privately thought was a little pretentious. But hey, it's a free galaxy. Garfield looked at me, his face flushed with excitement. Short-range test complete. There's a lot of room for error, but at minimum this setup is good for hundreds of GS. I smiled and leaned back in my chair. I guess we're about ready, then. A quick ping to Day and Ick, and they popped into my VR. Okay, guys. Everything checks out. You're clear that this is a Hail Mary, right? The two nodded. Daedalus replied, sure, but it's worth trying. Worst case, we fail, and the Bobs are no worse off. It's a good opportunity to get some quiet time for some astrophysics work, too, Icarus added with a smile. I chuckled in reply. Icky had turned out very similar to me in temperament. Content to leave the exploration and fighting to others, he just wanted to work on his research. I found myself a little ambivalent about Icarus and Daedalus. Cloning ourselves was always purposeful, of course. But I'd cloned these two for what could turn out to be a suicide mission. It felt unclean, somehow. They knew exactly what I'd been thinking when I'd made the decision to go ahead. The pair gazed back at me with alert interest, no trace of blame or rancor on their faces. I decided I'd accept their judgment. I hesitated, looking around the room. This was one of those moments that changed your life forever. Everything was ready to go. Time to fish or cut bait. Okay, guys. The docking bays are ready for your ships. Connect up, hit the road, and Godspeed and be Epsilon. Howard. November 22-17. Omicron 2 Eridani. We walked out of the movie theater, arm in arm. Bridget looked as gorgeous as always. She turned and whispered in my ear, and as usual, my brain turned to mush. You look very dignified, Howard. But you really didn't have to do that. I shrugged. Modifying the android's appearance was a trivial operation. Avoiding a situation that might make Bridget uncomfortable was top priority. My apparent age now matched hers perfectly. Changing the subject, I said, that wasn't bad. There might be a future in this movie theater fad. Yes, civilization has finally reached Vulcan. Next up discos. No, please, no. There wasn't exactly a booming movie industry, of course. Vulcan was very much a frontier planet, and the economy was still bootstrapping through the basic requirements. We'd be another couple of decades before leisure activities became a major market segment. But Hollywood, and its various satellite locations and spiritual brethren, had produced thousands of movies of varying quality and popularity. And generally speaking, the holders of the copyrights were many light years away, and almost certainly quite dead as well. Someone in Landing eventually had the bright idea to open a local theater and play themed double bills. It was brilliant, as far as I was concerned. And the general population, who had spent most of their previous lives in isolated, claustrophobic enclaves, were taking to the new medium with enthusiasm. Today's fare, a couple of zombie movies, had been sold out. The audience was loud, opinionated, and mostly sneeringly amused. But no one left early. I leaned close. I feel a hankering for brains. Or sushi. Bridget laughed and opened her mouth to respond, but at that moment her phone buzzed. 2 seconds later, I received an email. From the coroner's office. I read the email in my heads-up display, and stopped dead in my tracks. Bridget looked up from her phone, tears in her eyes. Oh, Howard, no. He left this note for you, Dr. Onaga said. He pushed an envelope across the desk to me. Numbly, feeling like someone else was in control, I picked up the note and opened it. I held it so that Bridget could see. Howard. I recently had occasion to visit the doctor, as I've been having issues with my memory and cognition. The news was less than pleasing. It would seem that I have a particularly nasty form of neurological degenerative dementia, one that is not curable. The doctor informs me that the process is already significantly advanced. I've contacted a few experts, and I was assured that this issue cannot be corrected in software. Under the circumstances, I don't see becoming a cognitively impaired replicant as an attractive option. My one remaining freedom is the ability to choose the manner of my passing. Howard, you've been a good friend over the years. Please don't think less of me for my decision. Sincerely, George Butterworth, Colonel, Hughes, R.E.T.ed. Bridget cried silently, tears running down her cheeks. I stared at Dr. Onage, numb. How? A neurotoxin. Painless, and quick. Could he still be scanned? Dr. Onage shook his head. Even if it was medically possible, he had revoked consent. I nodded and stood up. Thank you, Dr. Onage. Bridget dried her eyes, stood, and followed me out of the office. ****. We still hadn't built the capability to cry into Manny the android. Too bad. I would have liked the release. Again. It might be time to bump up the priority on adding the capability, although it would be better if I just had fewer reasons to need it. Nui. We sat on Bridget's couch, arms wrapped around each other. Bridget had cried herself out. I would catch up as soon as she went to bed and I could return to VR. People keep leaving, I finally said into the silence. Bridget looked up at me and I met her eyes. I know it's normal. Your parents die, grandparents, people who've been around all your life. Eventually, you die, and that's that. But when you're immortal, you're always on the receiving end. It's just one hit after another. But you meet new people, Bridget said. And eventually, they leave. After a while, I think you'd get gun-shy. I smiled at Bridget, a wan smile at best. I'm less standoffish than most Bobs, as a rule. But in this case, I think the others have the right of it. This gulf exists between immortals and what the Bobs are starting to refer to as ephemerals, for a reason. Bridget searched my face. Do you think of me as an ephemeral? I think you're the most important thing in the universe. And that's the problem. Eventually, you'll die, and I'll be alone, again. I sighed and stood. I'm sorry, Bridget. I'm being a real Dickie Downer, tonight. I think I should leave and let you get some sleep. Bridget grabbed my arm. Please don't. Just stay with me, here. I don't want to be alone. Without a word, I sat back down, and put my arms around her again. She put her head on my shoulder and sighed. We sat there quietly, not moving or talking. At some point, I realized that she'd fallen asleep. And that was fine, too. Marcus. June 2214. Poseidon. For the third time, I raised my hand to knock. And dropped it. I remembered Howard had mentioned a problem with stage fright, the first time he'd gone out in public using an android. I wasn't sure if I hadn't believed him, or just hadn't taken him seriously. Either way, someone owed someone an apology. And this would be my first public appearance with the new android form. After years of operating through video windows and telephone calls, I was finally going to meet my best friends on this world, face to face. If I could just manage to knock on the door. With a growl, I consciously set aside all my insecurities and rapped 3 times. The door opened immediately. I knew they'd been expecting me, but I had a sudden image of Kal, waiting on the other side of the door with his hand on the knob, waiting for me to act. So, the great computer in the sky deigns to visit us poor mortals. He grinned down at me. My android was the same height as original Bob 6'1", but Kal towered over me, as he did over almost everyone. Oh, bite me, Kal. Who's here already? Kal stepped aside and motioned me in. Dinu and Gina. Vinny will be a bit late. He got caught up in some council thing. I walked into the living room of Cal's small apartment. It was a constant source of frustration that, on a planet with so much space, people were crowded into such concentrations. Granted, most of the planet was water, but there were enough mats and now, enough floating cities so that people could spread out. The council's insistence that everyone stay together had lately become a planet-wide source of contention. I wondered how much of that was natural, and how much was helped along by the rabble-rousers in this room. I sat down, to find Gina and Dino staring at me. Dino said, "Damn, that's impressive. Marcus, if I didn't know better, I wouldn't have given you a second glance." Completely believable. I shrugged. Several other Bobs have been working on the design for a couple of years now. I'm late to the party. Got my own priorities, you know. Gina and Danu nodded, and Kal snorted. At that moment, there was a knock on the door, and Vinny walked in without waiting, wearing a furious expression. Clearly, the council thing had not gone well. Idiots. Morons. Vinny exclaimed. He grabbed a beer from the fridge, then threw himself down on the couch. Come on in, Vinny. Grab yourself a brew, Kal said to him with a grin. Vinny lifted the beer in salute. Sorry. You know how it is with council. So, Vinny popped the tab on the can while giving Kal the Spock eyebrow. So they have absolutely refused to consider any changes to their policies. They dismiss issues of public morale as fearmongering. All I could get from them was a rote reiteration of their all-for-one standard speech. Vinny paused and drained half the can. Absent some kind of direct threat, they aren't budging. This is the future, folks. Gina turned and looked at me. So, big guy, I guess this is it. You said to exhaust all other avenues, first. I think we've done that. It's time for a change of leadership. And since the council keeps putting off elections as low priority and a distraction, I'd say that's out the window as well. I rubbed my forehead with one hand, then found myself gazing distractedly at my hand. The action felt significantly different than in VR, although I couldn't put my finger on exactly how. I shelved that thought for later, when I had some free time. I looked at Gina, who was still waiting for an answer. I'll grant that you've gone through all your alternatives, but I don't think I have, yet. Guys, I really do not want to become a revolutionary. People die in revolutions, even in the so-called peaceful ones. I looked around at the others, meeting their eyes one by one. I have the flying cities almost ready for the big reveal. I think that might shake things up enough without the need for shooting people and blowing things up. Will you present that as a threat, or keep it for a surprise? Honestly, Kal, it's not really much of a threat, I replied, at least on paper. Rethink your ways or we'll produce flying cities. Lacks a certain something, know what I mean, RS. Kal chuckled ruefully. Okay, yeah. It may be more of a threat after it's implemented and we start to see some of the fallout. Until then, the council is only going to see what they want to see. Still, you have to try, Dinu added. Present it to them, and if they don't get the point, oh well. Gina went to the fridge and retrieved a beer. She waved it at Dinu before apparently realizing that was a bad idea with an unopened carbonated beverage. Marcus' point, though, is that we'd like to avoid the full-scale revolution option, so oh well as an attitude is not helpful. She turned to me. And stop being such a wuss. Dinu and I both grinned at her. Good ol quiet, unopinionated Gina. Okay, Kal looked around the room. So Marcus will go talk to the council and try to convince them that their totalitarian policy is not supportable. If they listen to reason, great. If not, we proceed on the city's thing anyway, without official approval. We each nodded, silently. As plans went, it lacked something. But it was better than a shooting war. Asterisk asterisk asterisk. Not acceptable. Councillor Benben's face in the video window could only be described as thunderous. I tried to avoid grinning. To say that my proposal was meeting resistance would be a massive understatement. Councillor Murray cut in from another window. We are finally getting close to aligning populations with labor requirements on the mats and cities. If people start moving around haphazardly, or even emigrating to some other living arrangement, it will mean chaos. There aren't enough people to do all the required work. We need them to live where they're needed. Leaving aside, I responded, the question of whether it's morally acceptable to tell people where they should live and what job they should do. It's the law, Marcus. I smiled at Councillor Brennan, which simply sidesteps the statement. Anything can be passed into law. That doesn't make it right. Plus there's the question of the agreement you signed with Riker before we shipped you out here. It sets out. That document is not legally binding, Brennan replied. We've already voted on that. So you can just vote any agreement you don't like null and void on your own dime, then vote in whatever else you want. And everyone else is just supposed to go along because it's the law. Murray looked down his nose at me. Really? Literally. Saying it with a sneer isn't a rebuttal, Mr. Johansson. I think we're pretty clear on this. No flying cities. Possibly at some point in the future, but we will make that decision, not you. He looked around, likely gauging the mood of the other councillors from his end. And I think we're done here. Good day. And he switched off. Within a second or two, the other councillors did the same. I sat back in my office chair and shook my head. Done? Hardly. There was a scene in Demolition Man, where the police captain couldn't conceive the possibility that someone might not follow orders. The council's reaction had that flavor. I sent a quick text to the Revolutionary Council, Kal, Dinu, and Gina. I tried. They dug in their heels. Looks like we'll be doing this the hard way. Asterisk asterisk asterisk. I didn't really want to bother Bill or Riker, or Bob, for that matter. They each had their own problems to deal with. I supposed that the others could eventually become my problem as well, but for now, I had the local issue to deal with. I checked my android's current location. I'd loaded it into a cargo drone after the meeting at Cal's, and ordered the drone into orbit around Poseidon. I directed the drone to West Mat 4, with instructions to inform me when it arrived. The population of the mats hadn't really dropped much, yet. Only a few floating cities had been constructed, and the council didn't feel the need to make them residential. Essential personnel and industry, only. Yet another reason why the public was getting tired of the council. When we first decanted the colonists, there had been an expectation that living on the mats would be necessary for only a decade or so, maximum, and would be gradually phased out in favor of manufactured floating cities during that interval. Now, 20 years later, more than 90% of the human population of Poseidon still made their homes on the mats. I got a ping from the drone and smiled. After only a few days of having my own android, I found myself using any excuse to go walkabout. It took only a moment to activate the android, and I found myself draped over the support rack. I opened the cargo doors and walked out into sunshine. Weather on the mats wasn't typically a problem. The colonists had made a point of settling mainly on the mats caught in the tropical zone. In the absence of any land whatsoever, Poseidon's oceans had settled into bands similar to Jupiter. Each band had a small but distinct difference in temperature, ecology, and even salinity. Rainstorms swept across the mats frequently, but they were mild, warm, and short. The occasional major storm could be seen developing days in advance, and a series of drones were in place to tow affected mats out of the way. I walked the short distance to the edge of the landing pad and joined pedestrian traffic. New Georgia was a small town by any measurement, and it exuded that flavor. People knew each other, no one seemed to be in a hurry, and there was no feeling of crowding, at least out in public. It was a measure of the perversity of human nature that the biggest complaint people had about living here was that they weren't given a choice. I sighed to myself and set off in a random direction. I didn't have a goal, I simply wanted to enjoy the day. It took fewer than 5 minutes for my day to be ruined. An internal buzz indicated an incoming call. Metadata showed it was from KAL. I connected, audio only. What's up, KAL? The council apparently wasn't satisfied with just telling you no. They've taken steps. Oh, steps. I snickered. What have they done? Shut down anything that might be a source of supplies for us. Reallocated any personnel that might be helping, and moved them, including Gina and Dinu. And changed all the printer schedules. Gina and Dinu are going along with it. Yes, he replied. There's no real point in digging in their heels right now. We'll just talk by phone a lot more. I wonder if that's the point. I rubbed my chin in thought. What? Surveillance? KAL. If we're talking over the comms system, they might be monitoring. KAL was silent for a few moments. And of course, if they pass a law, it's legal. And therefore ethical. Something like that. And on that subject, we should probably hang this one up. Gotcha. Coming over. You got it, buddy. I'll be there in half an hour. I hung up the call, then checked my roamer inventory. If the council was willing to tap calls, they might be willing to plant bugs as well. Time to get serious. Asterisk asterisk asterisk. What the KAL jerked back as he opened the door. I grinned at him, unrepentant. I had kept the roamers in my pockets on the walk over, but as we Bobs like to point out, we're not very mature. More than a dozen small roamers crawled over my clothing, and one stood on my head, doing a jig. KAL stepped aside, shaking his head. You really are a bastard. Chuckling, I ordered the roamers to sweep the room. This'll take only a minute or two. The roamers scampered down my body and scattered around the room. It took less than a minute to find 3 bugs. KAL and I looked at each other in stunned silence. It was one thing to talk about the possibility, quite another to discover the reality. A couple of roamers quietly destroyed the listening devices, while their compatriots continued to search. In the end, they discovered only the 3. KAL let out a noisy breath. Unbelievable. The lack of elections, the lack of free choice, and now this. We're definitely over the line into totalitarianism. I'm going to leave a couple of roamers here to watch for further attempts, and I'll deliver some squads to everyone else's home. Gina will go ballistic, of course. She's in security, Marcus. If she's being monitored and doesn't know about it, then she's out of the loop. And that doesn't bode well. I shook my head. Consider the possibility that this is a regular thing, and she's just not high enough in the bureaucracy to know about it. That's sort of worse in a different way, of course. KAL waved off the comment. Yeah, fine. Now, flying cities. Given the council's reaction at my meeting with them, I think just introducing the cities will be provocative enough, I replied. And if not, if they do nothing, we win by default. And for now, we just lie low. I nodded. The fun will come to us, I think. I pulled an item out of my backpack. Meanwhile, here's our new communication system. SCUT tech, encrypted and infested with nanites. If someone tries to dick with it, they'll get a nasty surprise. KAL took the device, carefully touching it only with the ends of his fingers. I laughed at his obvious discomfort. Come on, buddy, give me some credit. The nanites will recognize attempted tampering. You're fine. He shrugged and gave me a lopsided grin. Dinu and Gina getting the same thing. I nodded. No matter what we do, the phone system won't be secure. We can't protect it end to end. KAL sighed and placed the comm unit on his desk. Remember that line I said we hadn't crossed? I nodded. I can see it in my rearview mirror. We are now officially revolutionaries. Yeehaw. Howard. February 22/18. Vulcan. You should leave my mother alone. I'd been casually examining a storefront display at the mall, so the comment, coming out of nowhere, made me jump. I turned around to find Rosie, Bridget's eldest daughter, glaring at me. What? Oh, great comeback, Howard. Brilliant. You're a machine. You're not even human. My mother needs to get over the death of my father, and move on. But not with a machine. Here we go. My fertile and somewhat anxiety-ridden imagination had pictured something like this. I wasn't particularly happy about the validation. Rosie, the two aren't mutually exclusive. I, the real me, am human. Spare me all the scientific double talk. You're a recording of a human. I'm not interested in debating the issue. Then why are we even talking? What? Rosie blinked rapidly and drew back slightly. I seemed to have managed to derail whatever speech she was gearing up to. I noted out of the corner of my eye that we were attracting an audience. Several passersby had stopped to watch the drama, and at least one person had their phone out. I wondered if I qualified as a celebrity. Rosie, I continued, trying to ignore the gawkers. You may not be interested in a debate, but I'm equally not interested in standing here being lectured at. To coin a phrase that was around when I was young, you're not the boss of me. And, more to the point I think, your mother is freely choosing to associate with me. And I've told her exactly what I think of that. Rosie was almost spitting the words. But you've gotten her all twisted around. Oh, freaking hell. I exclaimed, rolling my eyes. Have you met your mother? Have you ever tried to get her to do something she didn't want to? I waved a hand dismissively. Look, I don't want to get into a confrontation with you, mostly out of respect for your parents, both of whom I love, and loved, dearly. But Bridget is an adult, and able to make her own decisions. I'll stop seeing her when she says so. You don't get a vote. And that was it. We stood there, glaring at each other, any hope of discussion or understanding pretty much skewered, possibly permanently. After a few more moments of impasse, Rosie sneered at me and wordlessly stalked off. Well, isn't that just peachy? I looked around at the small crowd that had gathered. No one would meet my eyes, and they swiftly dispersed. I resumed my aimless wandering, trying to get back into the window shopping mood, but couldn't put Rosie out of my mind. And some of the looks from my erstwhile audience had been hostile. Obviously I had been recognized. I began to wonder what I would do if this drama spilled over onto Bridget. Asterisk asterisk asterisk. We were sitting on Bridget's couch while I recounted my earlier experience at the mall. I didn't tell you because it isn't your problem, Howard. Bridget looked sad, but not apologetic. My kids, mostly Rosie, I think, would like to see me dating someone less, biologically challenged. She started lecturing me on the subject whenever I see her. Leanne and Howard mostly stand around looking uncomfortable. Wonderful. Is there anything else you aren't telling me? She smiled at me. Well, there is a certain amount of gossip going around. Some of the more interesting items involve questions about your equipment, so to speak. I couldn't help it. I started to laugh helplessly. Thanks to the very authentic proprioceptive circuits in the android, I had to sit down or risk falling over. For maybe the 10th time, I made a note to myself to install tear ducts. Bridget grinned, sharing the moment. And on that subject. Oh, no you don't. I've already told you that I'll upgrade Manny anytime you say the word. That's on you. Now Bridget was laughing, too. The hilarity fed back on itself until we were both lying back on the furniture, gasping for breath and whooping helplessly. Finally, after a minute or two, we both managed to recover control. Bridget took my hand. And that's one of the reasons why I love you. Even Stefan often just looked at me like I had a screw loose. I had to bite back a lot of my more lowbrow humor. With you, well, you get it. Minds together in the gutter, forever. I smiled at her. My god, she was beautiful. Asterisk asterisk asterisk. The internet hadn't really changed that much in 200 years. Oh, there were new companies, and old companies had gone out of business. A lot of the jargon had changed, but people were still people, and still had the same interests. There were still forums, you could still follow someone, everyone still had a personal landing page on any of several different platforms, and blogs were still popular. Apparently narcissism and voyeurism were still alive and well. The point, though, was that it didn't take a lot of effort to track down some commentary relating to the locally famous or perhaps infamous replicant. My android persona wasn't any kind of a secret, and had become a small but persistent topic of conversation. And there were enough pictures posted to make me recognizable if someone cared enough. There was no shortage of opinions on the subject, although they appeared to be about evenly split. I was either some kind of Frankenstein's monster, or I was just some guy who had the same right to exist as everyone else. There didn't really seem to be any middle ground. It looked like my relationship with Bridget was the real sticking point. Most people were okay with me just wandering around, visiting malls and such. But they drew the line at me dating outside my chemical family. It was unlikely that Bridget was unaware of this. That meant she was protecting me. Crap. I was just chauvinistic enough to want to be the one doing the protecting. I wondered if she had a plan. Or, more importantly, if I had one. Someone needed to deal with this. Bob. March 22-24. Camelot. Deltans couldn't whistle while they worked. Or any other time, really otherwise I'd have been belting out a tune. This was the kind of day that would bring a celebration to the lips of any but the grumpiest. Up with the dawn, a breakfast of berries and eggs, a couple of hours warming ourselves in the morning sun. My android body didn't require any of that, of course, but the neural interface was more than good enough to give me the same pleasurable experience as anyone else. After a morning of indolence, I went hunting while Archimedes laid out his flint work for the day. With a little luck, I hoped to bag the local equivalent of a turkey. Archimedes and his family were more than generous, and had treated me like one of them right from the start. I wanted to give back whenever possible. A turkey or other small game once in a while was a welcome treat. Marvin occasionally accused me of trying to deny reality and become Robert full-time. I didn't argue with him, there was at least some truth to the accusation. I certainly felt far more a part of the Deltan life than I had back on Earth as original Bob. Missing my family so much probably played into my effectively having gone native. In the middle of my idle ruminations, my heads-up display flashed an alert. Movement in the immediate vicinity. I called up one of the many spy drones that kept my Camelot VR up to date, and redirected it to center on me. At computer speeds, it took less than a second overall to realize that I wasn't being stalked by wildlife. It was Fred. And 4 friends. And they were obviously intent on me. I could just busterize them, of course. But even with an obnoxious tard like Fred, I couldn't stomach casual murder. I could also very likely take them on and win, but it would completely blow my cover. I'd be done as Archimedes' friend, Robert, the generic Deltan. Not an option. Could I call for help? No, by the time I got a drone to Archimedes, then he found Donald or someone, then they got here, the excitement would be over. I was on my own. I called up 2 more drones so that I would have good coverage, then observed my pursuers for a few moments. They knew generally where I was, but I could see that they were often looking or moving in a direction that was slightly off my line. That suggested possibilities. My strategy started with turning off my scent. Deltans made heavier use of the sense of smell than humans, and less use of sight. I could take advantage of that. I positioned myself between 2 of my stalkers, and went as still and quiet as only an android could, as they moved past my position. With no movement, sound, or odor, I simply didn't register. Now I was behind them. I noted Fred's position and moved around the perimeter until I was close to him. If he moved away from the group at any point, he was mine. The cordon eventually tightened until everyone could see each other. Fred threw his spear down with rage. We had him? By the balls of my ancestors, how in the next life did you let him get through? How do you know it wasn't you, Fred? One of the hunters, apparently fed up, challenged him. In a streak, Fred moved in and knocked the speaker to the ground. He picked up his victim's spear and held it to the Deltan's neck. Mouth me off like that again and we'll be serving you for dinner, cuzzy. Wow, what a jerk. It occurred to me that I might be doing the Deltan species a favor by removing him from the gene pool. The hunters cast around for a few more minutes, but I simply moved out of their range and watched from the drones. Eventually they gave up and started back toward Caerleon, with Fred mouthing off constantly. I followed them about halfway to the other village, but sadly, Fred stayed with the group all the way. I'd have to arrange a meeting myself. I returned all surveillance systems to normal and headed back toward Camelot. A quick command to a couple of drones ensured that I wouldn't be taken by surprise by anything. This whole situation would require some thought, and I knew myself well enough to realize that I could walk right off a cliff when I got into this mode. I walked along, looking down at my feet as I thought. Fred was truly evidence that jerks came in all shapes, sizes, and species. But what was setting him and the rest of them off like this? They weren't behaving this way for the fun of it. The behavior was too consistent for pranks. They had the same hunting prospects as us, the same access to tubers, maybe even a little better than Camelot in that area. I made a note to check out Caerleon using drones. Maybe I could pick out something significant. I still had the unfinished chore of hunting lunch, though, and I'd wasted far too much time waltzing with Fred and his goons. With a shake of the head, I sent my drones out to look for some small game in the area. It was cheating, but I was running behind, and people gotta eat. Asterisk asterisk asterisk. Sounds like Fred took it personally. Donald grinned at me. Well, no one likes being punched out. But I didn't expect him to come hunting for me. Donald and I were sunning ourselves at Archimedes' flint working site, while he did his best to ignore the 2 of us. Buster worked with his father, roughing out some of the easier tools for Archimedes to finish later. Buster had little interest in flint working as a career path, although he had his father's dexterity and was pretty decent with the basics. Buster liked to hunt, and his weapon of choice was a bow and arrow. He was easily the best shot in the village, possibly in both villages. But Buster also loved hanging with his father, and if helping with the day's work sped things along, then that's what he'd do. These 3 were very probably my favorite people on the planet. Too bad he didn't give you the chance to slit his throat. You'd be doing everyone a favor. I shifted my position while I considered my reply. I doubted I could just coldly cut someone's throat, but how to explain that 21st century sensibility to Stone Age beings? The thing is, Donald, we know it's not just Fred. He may be taking to it with enthusiasm, but there's more to this. Donald lay back with his hands behind his head. The tone said that Donald would have no trouble skewering Fred next time they met. Might be just about time that we go on a hunt of our own. Maybe ask a few questions. Well, that wasn't a bad idea. Except for the we part. Bill. March 22-23. Epsilon Eridani. I was making some modifications to Bullwinkle when I got a ping from Mario. I gave my roamers instructions that would keep them busy for a while, and rematerialized my VR. Mario popped in a moment later. He turned to Jeeves, who had appeared at his elbow, and requested a coffee, then sat down and gazed at me. Okay, Mario, I know you well enough to realize the inscrutable act always means trouble. What's up? He looked down and smiled, acknowledging the score. Yeah, okay. I'm not sure where to begin. Mario took a sip of his drink, then put it down and laced his fingers together. You know, we've been continuing to scout the stars around GL 877, trying to map out the others' depredations. I nodded. I'm guessing the dramatic pause isn't to give me good news. Mario shook his head. If anything, they've been more active in the other direction. Probably a combination of luck and proximity of the stars in that area. Anyway, we've found 5 other life-bearing planets that they've depopulated, including another civilization. Late industrial, early atomic era. About equivalent to Earth in the mid-20th. Wonderful. So the others have yet another notch on their collective holster. And another nail in their coffin. Bill, I know I'm probably preaching to the choir, but I don't see any resolution to this that involves the others continuing to exist. Yeah, I know. It's been discussed. You know it has. And we're the ones who will have to do it, assuming we even can. There's Daedalus and Icarus. Long shot. I waved a hand at Mario. What about you and your clones? You're closest. Anything you could do? Mario smiled without any humor. Sure. Except, by some enormous coincidence, there's no metal to be had anywhere around GL 877. Okay, got it. Mario was right, of course. The home system of the others was out at the periphery of explored space. By definition, since exploration had pretty much stopped once we'd discovered them. Claude and a large number of the Bobs from the Delta Pavinus defense are heading for Gamma Pavinus. Maybe you can arrange something with them. Mario looked at me with one eyebrow raised. I nodded, then grimaced. I'll do that, Mario, but I think Claude took the defeat really hard. I'm not sure he's going to be entirely rational where the others are concerned. His talk was all about defending Gamma. Well, you have a few more years until his group gets to Gamma. Maybe come up with a sales pitch. I sighed. If there was a hell, it Riker. October 22/18. Vulcan. I was going through the latest production reports from Charles when I received a call from Justin Hendricks. With a smile, I dropped the reports. Talking to family was always top of the priority list. Justin had grown up. Space Cadet Justin was now a ship's captain in the New Jerusalem Space Corps. The thought brought a chuckle. The Space Corps consisted of a half-dozen cargo and transport vessels, based loosely on the version 2 Heaven design. Dexter, the current Bob in residence, had been aggressive about making the colonies independent of replicant support. The Omicron 2 Eridani system's twin planets now featured settlements from 12 different enclaves, and all of them had at least one vessel. Dexter was still hanging around the system, but demands on his time were down to a couple of items a week. I had a smile on my face as I picked up the call, but lost it when I saw his expression. Justin's eyes were glistening with barely controlled tears. Uncle Will, it's Mom. She's in the hospital. It's bad. Asterisk asterisk asterisk. I stepped out of the cargo drone and looked up at the hospital building. Then I looked down at my hands, and at my feet. Howard had lent me Manny without hesitation, when he heard. It took slightly more than an hour to fly Manny from Vulcan to Romulus. This was my first time in an android, and I was nervous. It occurred to me that Howard's first use of Manny was because of very similar circumstances. I hoped that wasn't a trend. Sadly, with ephemerals, it probably was. I saw Justin come out the front doors of the hospital, so I stepped away from the drone and sent it off. Justin hurried up to me, then stopped 5 feet away, suddenly bashful. This was the first time we'd met in person, so to speak. Uncle Will, he said, blushing slightly. You look younger on the phone. I smiled. Stage lighting. I wasn't about to try to explain Howard and Bridget, assuming he didn't already know about them. He turned and we walked back toward the hospital entrance. I spared a quick glance in his direction. For the first time, I noticed wrinkles forming around his mouth and on his forehead. A few gray hairs, too. With an effort of will, I pulled myself away from that line of thought as Justin filled me in. She was at home, and suddenly she held her head, screamed, and collapsed. She was babysitting my kids, and fortunately they knew what to do. Justin's eyes were wide and staring as he talked. The ambulance got there in moments, and brought her here. But I think it was already too late. He looked at me, tears now in his eyes. It's an aneurysm. The doctors say there's no way she's going to wake up. We arrived at her room, and I took a moment to look around. Very modern equipment, and no overt religious images or icons. Of course, there had been a popular uprising about 20 years ago, something to do with free importing of alcohol, and possibly a scandal or two. Anyway, New Jerusalem was now a proper democracy with separation of church and state. Howard and I had celebrated by scanning a bottle of Irish whiskey and bringing the template into VR. Well, I was procrastinating, and I knew it. I took a deep breath and walked slowly up to the bed. I remembered the first time I'd seen Julia Hendricks, on a video call with Minister Cranston. I remembered the stomach-dropping shock as I looked at an almost perfect likeness of my sister, Julia's several times great-grandmother. She still looked like Andrea would have looked had I been alive to see her as a grandmother. I reached down, put my hand against Julia's cheek. The first time I'd ever touched her. Well, it seems Howard finally installed tear ducts. Damn. I wiped my eyes, then turned to Justin. Tears were running freely down his face. It took several attempts to get my voice to work. What will you do? She didn't want to be kept alive if there was no chance. I nodded, infinite sadness washing over me. People keep leaving. I guess, with the aneurysm, there's no chance of replication. Justin shook his head. Uncle Will, don't take this personally, but I don't think very many people will ever choose replication. It was an experiment designed in a darker, more authoritarian time, when people were seen as just replaceable cogs. He smiled sadly at me. And the amount of work you and the other Bobs have put in, well, it looks to the average person like permanent servitude. Who wants to spend their whole afterlife doing chores? Beta. That explains a lot. I nodded in thought. Once Howard resurrected the technology, we were kind of expecting an onslaught of requests. We've gotten zip. I think you are probably the end of the experiment. I said nothing, just looked down at Julia. Maybe just as well. Asterisk asterisk asterisk. The funeral was held within a few days. I was still borrowing Howard's android. There was no chance of confusion. Howard had never been on Romulus in android form. These people only knew Will, the many greats granduncle in software. Justin asked me to be a pallbearer, which I gratefully accepted. Julia had lived a good life, and had many relatives, all of whom knew and loved her. Justin's eulogy left not a dry eye in the place, including yours truly. I was the center of attention for most of the reception. Many people wanted to know about my sisters, and about life in the 21st century. No questions about replication, though. Go figure. Finally, emotionally exhausted, I said my goodbyes and called the cargo drone. I turned and waved to the small crowd that came outside with me, stepped into the cargo drone, and switched off. Asterisk asterisk asterisk. I popped into Howard's VR. Hey, Howard. Manny's all yours again. He's flying back from Romulus. Be there in a few hours. Thanks. Funeral go okay. I sat and made a spot for Spike. She took the invitation, and began to purr before I even started petting her. Spike was never very good at hard to get. I sighed, and stared into space for a few moments. No confrontations or anything. Not like you and the kids. I gave him a quick glare. I guess that's kind of settled down. Yeah, Bridget had words with her offspring. I don't think Rosie will seek me out to yell at me anymore. You know you're asking for it, don't you? Dating a human. It's not really dating, Will. There's no sexual component. We enjoy each other's company. We always have. We get each other. I nodded in sympathy. I know what you mean. But lips will flap. Howard laughed. Screw em. I'm happier than I've been since before Jenny, actually. Jenny's long dead, Howard. Eventually, Bridget will be as well. I shrugged apologetically at Howard's sharp look. Sorry, I think the funeral has me a little down. Just a year after we lost the colonel. Ephemerals, indeed. Yeah, Howard reached over and gave Spike a quick pat. Immortality sure isn't all upside. I got up and placed Spike on the chair I just vacated. No argument there. I'm going to go home, activate my alcohol receptors, and drown my sorrows. Then, tomorrow, back to the salt mines. I waved to Howard, then popped back to my own VR, in Soul System. Marcus. February 2215. Poseidon. I suppose you're all wondering why I've gathered you here. I turned to sweep my gaze across the assembled invitees. I saw several eye rolls, some smiles, and a couple of blank faces that said, please let this be over soon. Philistines. Sorry, I always get a kick out of saying that. In this case, though, it's appropriate. There's a project I've been actively working on for about 15 years now. I think you'll be interested. I gazed around at my audience, gauging their mood. I noted that several of them were peering back at me with at least as much interest. Very few people had seen me walking around in my android body, as yet. I'd arranged this meeting on a remote section of the Great Northern Mat, about 3 miles from the population center of New Mail. Personal flyers sat, parked randomly on the thick vegetation surface. The invitees were a heterogeneous mix of security, administration, and technical people, as well as a few individuals with no credentials at all, except that I liked and trusted them. My friends, whom I'd come to think of as the inner circle, stood off to one side. They'd declared that this was my show, and they would stay out of it. I tried to suppress a grin, then gave up and let it come. And why not? In effect, I was about to create a new nation. Okay, Marcus, this is getting old. Give. That was Yoshi, a senior infrastructure engineer and one of Cal's friends from work. You got it, Yoshi. Ladies and gentlemen, I give you, the flying city of helium. As I said the words, I brought the city down through the clouds to hover 50 feet overhead. Well, okay, city was a little trumped up. It would be the size of a double lot in any suburban setting. Circular, about 100 feet in diameter, the floating platform was flat on the top side, covered with a clear fibrex dome, with a series of hemispherical protuberances arranged radially on the underside. I will be dipped in shit. Yoshi's mouth hung open. He turned toward me, eyes goggling. Okay, I'm impressed. How's it work? Not like the flyers. No, of course not. No turboprops. Or helium, ironically. Helium, the city, uses a series of surge coils. But that can't be right. Gravity is always nullified in a surge field. This isn't supposed to be a freefall city, is it? I laughed. No, Yoshi. No zero-G. The field doesn't envelop the city. The surge coils are set up almost like the VTOL fans on your flyers. They provide lift, nothing else. That's those hemispheres on the underside. Damn. Yoshi's eyebrows were starting to come together in the signature engineer frown, a sure sign that he was starting to think things through. He turned to face me squarely. So what you said before, this isn't going to be offered to the colony. Not quite. This won't be offered exclusively to the colony administration. I don't want them controlling it. They've already got too tight a grip on things. I shook my head slowly. If you'd asked any Bob, we'd have guessed it would be Faith pulling this kind of fascist crap. Not some former island nations. Vinny, despite the group's earlier promise, muttered almost inaudibly, they'll try to shut it down. Short of violence, Vinny, there's not that much they can do. Their power is mostly in perceived authority, implied threats, and social pressure. So we ignore them. Kal nodded. What if they do start shooting? Gina asked. I keep hassling you about this. Are you prepared to shoot back? If it came to that, I replied, I still have the biggest weapons. But they know that. And they know I can take out all their space-based assets. Yoshi gave me the stink eye. Why are you doing this, Marcus? You have to ask? This is supposed to be a fresh start for humanity. We're supposed to start over, without all the former prehistoric bullshit. And instead, this government is just starting it up all over again. I want to pull their teeth. I turned back in the direction of helium and waved expansively. I'm just giving people a way to vote with their feet. Asterisk asterisk asterisk. It took no convincing at all to get everyone up to helium for an inspection. People walked around, gazing over the edge through the clear Fibrax dome material, or just pacing the perimeter. It's a little short on buildings, Kal said, smiling at me. I'm not really sure to what extent we need them, I replied. With the dome, this is completely climate controlled. No rain, no cold, no snow. Beyond basic privacy requirements, you could just live al fresco. I stamped my foot on the bare metal surface. We could put down a layer of soil and have grass everywhere. Kal nodded. Gina cut in. What you have here, Marcus, is a basic framework. Very nice technical proof of concept, but it needs a few things. Cargo bays, landing bays, and garage for flyers, evacuation pods, emergency equipment, weapon emplacements, food storage, kitchens. And, she's off. Kal laughed and inclined his head at Gina. Well, it is my job. That's fine, guys, I said. And Gina's right. A fully usable and livable city has to have the infrastructure for people to live and do their jobs. So, I'm open to suggestions. With your help, version 2 will be move-in ready. Also bigger, of course. You need enough room for a community to work as well as live. Kal nodded. And who will we invite? Now, there's a whole other conversation. I'd been waiting for someone to bring that up. I have some notes. *****. Gina grabbed a couple of beers from Cal's fridge and returned to the couch. She handed one to Vinny, and popped hers. Bobbing it in my direction, she said, if you just throw it wide open, Marcus, you're effectively inviting in council spies. Don't care, Gina. In fact, I'm also going to file the construction plans with the appropriate government departments. Just don't expect them to issue permits. Kal grinned at me. I chuckled. No, I wouldn't expect them to move quickly on that. Anyway, the point is to make this as open as possible. No secrets, no espionage stuff. Completely out front. Everyone will know about it, everyone can get information. It pulls the teeth of the council in a lot of ways. Sabotage. Wow. I frowned at Gina. It would have to be after the fact, when there are already citizens on board. Maybe I'm naive, but I can't see even the council being willing to kill people. You're right, Gina said. I smiled at her. There you go. You are naive. She smiled back. I rolled my eyes while Vinny and Kal chuckled. Okay, fine, I continued. But if it gets to that point, it's open war. Well, here we go, Vinny said. Vive la revolution. I sighed yet again. I wasn't sure just exactly what it was about this that I found so mentally tiring. I keep saying it. I'd like to avoid that entirely. Look, it's not like we're doing anything negative. We're not blowing things up, or going on strike, or burning down the Bastille, or even sailing off into the West. People will continue to do their jobs, they'll continue to produce food, perform manufacturing, whatever. They'll just have a different mailing address. What the hell is a mailing address? I grinned at Vinny. Sorry. Before your time. I meant they'll have a different residential location. The point is, there's no downside, not materially or economically, for the council. Sure, we're thumbing our noses at them, and I expect them to get grumpy, but to start shooting? Killing people? I shook my head. I'm not saying it's impossible, just that it would pretty much end any credibility they might have up to that point. Gina rolled her eyes. Marcus, you're a loner. You always have been, the way you describe it. And you've never sought power. But some people need power, and they need to have power over someone. Preferably lots of someones. Taking away the council's subjects, which is what you'd be doing, is a declaration of war. I grinned at her. Ever the optimist. I love your Pollyanna view of humanity. Kidding aside, Marcus, when I say war, I mean the first thing they'll try to do is take you out. You're not immune, or off limits, or anything. And when the Bobs show up in a decade or two to investigate, they'll be met with a fait accompli. You're going just a little bit overboard, aren't you? She cocked her head at me. Don't make the common mistake of thinking your opponents are stupid just because they don't see things your way, Marcus. They know you're a potential threat. And they also know you're sympathetic to the cause, if only because of, Gina waved her hands to take in our location. They'll have made taking you out a priority. I stared at Gina, shaken. Logic said she was correct. And I was very public about my movements, about what I was doing at the moment, and so on. I realized that would have to change. The council had administrative access to auto factories and printers for more than long enough now to be able to build things I didn't know about. And I'd been encouraging it. Okay, Gina. You win. We'll start taking this seriously. I looked around at the others. So, what's the next step? At this point, the ball is in their court, Gina replied. On the other hand, your end run around them with the flying cities isn't something they can ignore. I think, as you say, the fun will come to us soon enough.
Hello, everyone. As we wrap up this video, I want to share a quick note. I have a Patreon account. If you'd like to support me and enjoy on-demand audiobooks, you can become a Patreon member. Alternatively, you can check out my Google Drive link, which has 500+ novel audiobooks available through my Ko-fi or Patreon shop. I appreciate your support.